This is the most ridiculous scene in the history of Earth's purification. The USA chose power. Japan chose the 7-meter wingspan overlord of the sky. The 400 kilograms mutant giant maw beast was taken by another, and yet I chose a prehistoric, clumsy monkey that can't even walk without tripping. Billions of viewers worldwide believe I have truly gone mad, because in this prehistoric Shura field, where size and strength determine everything, my move is no different from carrying a takeout tray and walking straight into a beast's bloody maw. The moment that monkey fell from the tree, the internet erupted in abuse. The barrage of comments nearly swallowed me whole. But this insane gamble involving the fate of billions only began 10 minutes ago. A piece of chalk accurately struck my desk. On the podium, my beautiful instructor glared at me. Daydreaming again? The civilization observers could arrive at any moment. How will you protect the Dragon Nation? I snapped awake from my daze. A flood of massive memories forcibly poured into my mind. I had transmigrated. This is a parallel world's Blue Star. A year ago, a survival game called Earth Online forced itself upon the entire globe. Using nations as units, one person was randomly selected as a civilization observer. They must choose a prehistoric species to observe. If the species survives, the nation receives God-tier luck. The lifespans of all citizens would skyrocket. If the species goes extinct, the corresponding nation suffers a cataclysmic disaster. Earthquakes and tsunamis would ruthlessly wipe them out. This is a national fortune battle royale with billions of lives as the stakes. In order to survive, the Dragon Nation exerted all its national strength. The entire population frantically studied prehistoric biology. The last version was locked to the late Cretaceous period. The school hunk from the next class, Hanyu, was selected. He recklessly went all in. Dinosaurs became national heroes praised by everyone. But who could have guessed that a prehistoric meteorite would fall from the sky? The dinosaur dynasty was instantly wiped out. Hanyu's myth collapsed on the spot. And just today, a cold, mechanical hawk pierced through the global sky without warning. Earth Online was fully updated. The new version fast-forwarded to 4.4 million years ago. David for the USA, Yamashita for Japan, Tetsuya for the island nation, Che Taisien for the Hermit Kingdom. The mechanical hawk paused for a second, then uttered a name that the whole class knew by heart. Dragon Nation's civilization observer, Yang Chun. A giant holographic eye forcibly expanded. My face was ruthlessly projected onto the retinas of billions of people worldwide. The classroom instantly exploded. How can it be him? That loser who sleeps in class every day? China is finished. Without giving anyone a chance to breathe, the mechanical hawk struck again. Preparation time is 0. Forced extraction begins. White light instantly swallowed my vision. When I opened my eyes, I was in an endless virtual void. Observers from hundreds of nations were all forcibly pulled into the space. The heavenly eye flickered wildly. The rules for the new version were etched into our minds. The age of giant reptiles has ended. Mammals take the stage. New privilege added. Observers have 3 opportunities for active intervention. They can forcibly change the direction of a species' evolution. The scene instantly reached a fever pitch. 3 privileges to modify genes. This is the authority of a creator. In the real world, the Dragon Nation's Earth Online Special Research Group, medical titan Elder Chin stared at the screen. I want his full profile within 3 minutes. When he saw my track record of slacking off, Elder Chin slumped back into his chair. It's over. He has a self-destructive personality. The Dragon Nation drew a total failure. The heavenly eye began playing the version preview. A scroll of 23 million years of prehistory unfolded. A new arena has arrived. Countless fierce prehistoric beasts assaulted the eyes. The Paraceratherium, 5 meters tall, 12 tons in weight, and the ancient giraffe, 3 meters tall. There was even the 10-meter-long Purosaurus in the water, whose bite force crushed all living creatures on land. In the deep sea, a 20-meter, 90-ton megalodon burst from the water. Its jagged maw was a full 3 meters wide. This was pure, violent aesthetics. The scene shifted, and the top predators of the grasslands appeared. The Macarotus, 3 meters long and 1.2 meters at the shoulder. Most terrifying were those 2 scimitar-like fangs. The saber teeth were over 10 centimeters long. The heavenly eye directly showed a horrific scene of it soloing an elephant. Absolute power. Extreme speed. The perfect killing machine. David from the USA, Natasha from Russia, and the representative from Japan. Everyone went wild. They rushed toward the saber-toothed tiger's habitat. To seize this invincible weapon, they didn't hesitate to start a life-and-death duel. I watched these idiots fighting over scraps with cold eyes. I pulled up the virtual panel. My finger swiped past countless fierce giants, skipped the saber-toothed tiger's territory entirely, and walked toward withered forest that even wild beasts disdained. I looked up and locked onto a creature hiding in the leaves, a shivering small ape-man. I pulled up the data, Ardipithecus. Strength, 3 stars. Speed, 2 stars. Endurance, 4 stars. Intelligence, 5 stars. Energy consumption, a fatal 6 stars. The 6 attribute stats were pathetic. Looking across the entire prehistoric era, this was the bottom of the food chain. Even a wild dog could easily tear it apart. Without hesitation, I pressed the lock-on button firmly. Binding successful. Dragon Nation's target, Ardipithecus. The real world completely melted down. The teacup in Elder Chin's hand shattered. Scalding tea splashed onto his legs. But he didn't even notice. He chose wrong. He chose a monkey. The Dragon Nation's livestream was instantly swallowed by despair. 1.4 billion people cursed. This guy is taking revenge on society. He wants to take the whole country down with him. Foreign viewers laughed until they cried. The representative from Korea had explosive luck, securing the Macaridus saber-toothed tiger. Korean netizens rushed into the Dragon Nation stream, mocking them frantically. Thanks to Dragon Nation for the prehistoric takeout. This win is in the bag. Facing the overwhelming online violence, I remained expressionless. What do they know? These higher humans who think they are gods have no idea of the terror of evolution. The silly monkey who can't even walk straight is the ancestor of the terrifying upright man who will dominate the universe in the future. With the 3 intervention privileges in my hand, this is an absolute dimensional strike. The game officially begins. The timeline fast-forwards to 4.4 million years ago. Abrupt climate change caused large areas of lush rainforest to die out. The distance between trees grew infinitely larger. The little ape I bound to was huddled on a withered tree, shivering in despair. He hadn't eaten for 2 whole days. The fruit on the tree had long been picked clean. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. 100 meters away, another grove was laden with fruit, but those 100 meters of plain were an impassable death zone. This morning, several starving apes fell from the branches and were instantly dragged away by saber-toothed tigers leaping from the grass. The fear deep in his genes warned him. Touching the ground meant death. He recoiled, clutching the highest branch for dear life. The Dragon Nation audience fell into dead silence. I stared fixedly at the screen, my finger hovering over the intervention button. No rush. I must wait for him to take the first step himself. Extreme hunger finally overcame fear. The little ape's pupils contracted as he let go. His body plummeted. His feet slammed heavily onto the hard soil. Fear swallowed him like a tsunami. He sprinted forward like a madman, scrambling on all fours. Too slow, far too slow. Death closed in from behind. To increase his speed, he made a decision that defied biological common sense. He jerked his forelimbs up, completely abandoning the help of his hands. His spine forcibly straightened. His thin legs pumped wildly. His stride length instantly increased. He stood up, running upright on 2 feet. The 100-meter distance vanished. He leaped up, clinging tightly to the fruit tree on the other side. Sweet fruit was stuffed into his mouth. He had survived. Across the gap, the hungry troop witnessed the miracle. Driven by instinct, a second ape hit the ground, then a third, then a fourth. The troop began an unprecedented terrestrial migration. Crisis struck. The commotion of 20 or 30 apes running completely awakened the overlord of the plains, the Macaridus saber-toothed tiger. It lowered its massive, ton-heavy frame, approaching silently. Its muscles exploded in an instant, turning it into a lethal blur. It accurately pounced on a lagging ape. The difference in size was too hopeless. The tiger's paw was larger than the ape's head. Absolute power suppression. The 12-centimeter-long saber teeth stabbed down viciously, accurately piercing the fragile neck. The neck went cold. Vital signs faded instantly. The ape's body went completely limp. The saber-toothed tiger coolly picked up its prize and turned back into the tall grass. A clean and efficient hunt. In the Korean livestream, a carnival began. They mocked the Dragon Nation's frailty relentlessly. The Dragon Nation viewers were fuming, but I watched all of this with a blank expression. Nature has no room for tears. Natural selection. Sacrificing one individual in exchange for the entire group's adaptation to the ground. This deal was incredibly profitable. Night fell. The prehistoric starry sky was breathtakingly brilliant. The well-fed little ape nested on a branch. Because he was uncomfortably full, he couldn't fall asleep. He could only sit there blankly. Suddenly, he lifted his head. His hollow gaze passed through the interlocking leaves and cast toward the infinite deep space. In his pitch-black pupils, the galaxy billions of light-years away was reflected. He was stunned. 1 minute, 1 hour, 2 hours. The heavenly eye lens remained locked on him. The global audience was full of questions. Elder Chin's brow was furrowed. He couldn't understand my strategy at all. In a life-or-death game where every second counts, I was actually watching a monkey days out. They didn't understand. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding. An orange-sized brain couldn't process this, but the spark of consciousness was ignited at this very moment. Gazing up in curiosity. This is the initial code of genetic awakening. Millions of years later, this curiosity etched into DNA will drive his descendants to break through the atmosphere and set foot in that sea of stars. This is the first light of human civilization. I quickly carved the coordinates on the record board. The timeline fast-forwarded again. The Ardipithecus troop began a large-scale migration. The forest was no longer their only sanctuary. They were moving fully onto the ground. The dividend of upright walking began to pay off. Walking on 4 legs consumes massive energy. But walking upright uses gravitational potential energy to take steps. Energy consumption was slashed by 3/4. The fatal 6-star energy consumption was dragged down to 5 stars. Exposure to the sun's heat was greatly reduced, and endurance exploded exponentially. They walked further and lived longer. The troop began a massive expansion. The heavenly eye shifted, freezing on a mother ape about to give birth. Her high protruding belly signaled the arrival of new life. Just as the Dragon Nation audience felt a glimmer of hope, the next second made everyone's skin crawl. The mother ape let out an agonizing scream. The birthing process was completely stuck on the peril-filled prehistoric plains. This kind of scream was equivalent to a death alarm. Could draw top predators at any moment. Elder Cheen stared at the screen, his face turning pale instantly. He saw through the fatal curse of upright walking. It's over. Upright walking forced the pelvis to narrow. Normal birth was now impossible. Compared to prehistoric giants who could birth easily while standing, for Ardipithecus to produce offspring, the young must be born prematurely before being fully developed. How pitiful. A species whose reproduction is like passing through the gates of hell. How could it survive in this prehistoric Shura field? The troop that had just stood up was instantly forced into an evolutionary dead end. The Dragon Nation livestream collapsed completely. 1.4 billion people were plunged into silence. But I stared intensely at that dying mother ape, my pupils shrinking, as I slowly raised my right hand. My finger hovered over the 3 remaining interventions button. The countdown flickered wildly. The mother ape's vital signs were fading fast. I suddenly pressed my finger down. Outside, the wails of despair almost toppled the livestream. Inside the Dragon Nation Research Institute, the atmosphere dropped to freezing point. Elder Cheen's voice came through the screen. The ancestral Ardipithecus simply cannot survive prehistory. Without the right physical configuration, walking upright is a death sentence. He thought I was taking revenge on society. Once Ardipithecus goes extinct, the Dragon Nation will face a terrifying disaster. The comment section was a sea of insults. They are just too weak. Next door, the saber-toothed cubs can run right after birth. You chose a bottom-tier species. The barrage was dense. The faces of the Dragon Nation viewers were hideous. Other civilizations chose the powerhouses of the version. But I alone chose the ancestral Ardipithecus. Driven from the trees to the ground, chased all the way, only able to eat wild fruit and roots. They had nothing. It was a miracle they had survived this long. I watched coldly from my private space. I had absolute isolation. No one could interfere with my decisions. The drawbacks of walking upright are indeed massive, but the most fatal weakness is often the catalyst for evolution. I stared at the heavenly eye. I had no intention of actively intervening yet. Life will find a way in the face of desperation. The scene cut. The newborn ape couldn't even open its eyes. Its limbs were short and weak. Lying on a lotus leaf, it let out a low whimper. The mother ape was weak to the extreme. Instinct drove her to prop herself up and pull the infant into her arms. She wanted to nurse, but her energy was long spent. Without nourishment, the little ape wouldn't survive a day. The mother ape slumped back, strange emotions welling in her hollow eyes. She looked around. Other apes only huddled together for safety. They had no concept of helping others. They watched with cold indifference. The mother ape's gaze shifted, settling on a strong male Ardipithecus. That was the infant's father. The tall male seemed to realize something. He moved. He pushed through the dense grass, finding 2 hidden wild fruits. Carrying the fruit, he approached the mother. She took them, making gurgling and clicking sounds. Information was being transmitted. The mother ape, desperate, peeled the fruit and frantically stuffed it into her mouth. Eat more. This was an instinctive choice. The male didn't resist. He tilted his head, looking at the mother, then at the infant. Emotions swirled in his eyes. The Ardipithecus brain had already begun to expand. Increased brain capacity brought higher intelligence. He realized, this little thing was his own descendant. Reproduction is the underlying code of life. The connection extended to the mother. To let the offspring live, the mother must live first. The mother couldn't survive alone with an infant. He had to stay, until the descendant truly grew up. The first complex thought was complete. He understood responsibility. The audience thought this was just 2 fruits, nothing worth mentioning. But I was excited to the extreme. This seemingly ordinary act was a giant leap for the Ardipithecus race. Upright walking forced them to cooperate. The concept of family was born. The male stayed by the mother's side. The infant now had hope for survival. Invisible emotions began to sprout. When hungry, the male left to find food. The second great advantage of walking upright appeared, transporting goods. His hands were free. They could carry food while running, bringing back surplus to support a partner. The partner could then focus energy on raising the young. The drawback was perfectly resolved. Survival rates plummeted upwards. The foundation of civilization was laid. With family, Ardipithecus learned to cooperate. The seeds of mutual aid were sown. Ardipithecus no longer foraged alone. They paired up in 2s and 3s, and their alertness skyrocketed, covering each other and retreating together. The neighboring Korean team sensed something was wrong. They were observing the strongest surface predator, the Macaridus saber-toothed tiger, which loved to prey on ancestral Ardipithecus. They had been cheering before, but now found the hunting difficulty surging. The Ardipithecus had learned early warning signs. In the Korean stream, Che Taisien locked onto a single saber-toothed tiger. It lay in wait in the grass, stalking for hours. At high noon, when the temperature was highest, for Ardipithecus came out. Their ability to dissipate heat was their advantage. The tiger stared fixedly at the prey, slowly shifting its steps, its body like a drawn bow, ready to launch. But the cooperative Ardipithecus were highly vigilant. One of them suddenly let out an urgent cry. The crisis alarm was sounded. The saber-toothed tiger was startled. Its charge was interrupted, and it nearly tripped. The Ardipithecus sprinted away, in 4 completely different directions. The tiger was instantly baffled. Looking left and right, it didn't know who to chase. The sun was scorching. His body temperature rose rapidly. If it kept chasing, it would overheat and crash. The tiger turned away in frustration to find shade. The Korean viewers couldn't sit still. How did the monkeys become so cunning? The tiger is hungry again. Dragon Nation must have used an intervention. We have to intervene too. The live stream was filled with indignation. In the virtual space, Che Taisien turned to look at my seat, his brow furrowed tightly. He was certain I had used an intervention. He decided to intervene actively as well, and requested off-site assistance. The Korean research group connected immediately. Wipe out the monkeys. They didn't dare recklessly modify the tiger's body, so they decided to start with the environment. They changed the saber-toothed tiger's habits, forcing them to gather at the Ardipithecus habitat, turning solitary hunters into pack hunters. This was a war of racial extermination. The intervention took effect. The subconscious of tigers across the continent was altered. They felt their current territories were uncomfortable, and began migrating in the same direction. Dense red dots appeared on the Korean map, gathering tens of thousands of saber-toothed tigers. A massive biological migration had begun. The ecological balance at the destination would be crushed. The number of tigers at the Ardipithecus habitat exploded. Where there used to be only 3 or 4, there were now massive prides. The numbers increased tenfold and more. A steady stream of beasts was still arriving. Ardipithecus was instantly thrown back to the bottom. Stepping out for food was now a near-certain death. Food sources were cut off. The crisis of extinction had arrived once more. The Dragon Nation viewers were furious. They are blatantly targeting us. Quickly change the environment and flee. Inside the research institute, everyone was as anxious as ants on a hot pan. Why hasn't Liang Chun intervened yet? Hurry and request assistance. I noticed the anomaly and looked up at Che Taisien. He smirked smugly, a silent provocation. You're going to lose. My gaze remained calm. I let out a soft chuckle. A mere clown, forcing top predators to gather in one place. That is simply seeking death. Too many predators, too little prey. Once the prey flees, the saber-toothed tigers will eventually turn on each other out of hunger, inflicting minimal damage on the enemy while sacrificing everything. Even a top-tier account is wasted in the hands of a fool. Ardipithecus have an instinct to seek fortune and avoid disaster. They will run when they encounter danger. I wasn't worried about them being wiped out, but this move reminded me. Upright walking, cooperation, and the family foundation were already in place. It's time to cheat. I had 3 opportunities for active intervention. For the first, I wanted Ardipithecus to unlock throwing. Normal evolution would take hundreds of thousands of years, but I was going to speed them up. I pulled up 10 sets of Ardipithecus data and clicked the intervention button. In the bottom left, the off-site assistance icon glowed green, but I didn't even give it a glance. No one understands the ancestors of Dragon Nation better than I do. The staff at the research institute breathed a sigh of relief. Elder Chin immediately ordered data preparation. They thought I was going to ask for help, but instead I started operating directly on my own. The entire room was stunned. What exactly is he trying to do? My thoughts were incredibly clear. Human ancestors were able to reach the top of the world by relying on unique cheats, upright walking and throwing. I pulled up the Ardipithecus physical data and locked my gaze onto their shoulders. Ardipithecus shoulders were locked. They were short and weak. I was going to unlock them, lengthening the collarbone, increasing shoulder width, approaching the human right angle shoulder, shifting the placement downward, expanding the range of motion for the shoulder joint, like swapping in a larger bow, strengthening the shoulder muscles, and enlarging the tendons and ligaments. They would contract and store energy like rubber bands. Combined with the S-shaped spine from upright walking, a giant biological slingshot was fully formed. This wasn't just modifying a shoulder. This was creating a long-range marksman. The iron law of the biological world is melee combat. Whether a venomous snake or a fierce beast, they must engage in hand-to-hand combat. But with the throwing skill, Ardipithecus could stand dozens of meters away and deal a fatal blow with a stone. You may have brute strength, but you can't even touch me. It wasn't about muscle power. It was the physics of elastic potential energy. The cheat modifications synchronized rapidly. Hundreds of thousands of years of evolution were condensed into just a few minutes. The Ardipithecus shoulders widened, collarbones lengthened, and their builds became more robust. The cheat update was successfully installed. In the habitat, the Ardipithecus hid in a natural cave. The mothers held their infants and waited. The sky grew dim. The males had been gone for 5 or 6 hours. The dark was a fatal weakness for Ardipithecus. Several shadows appeared. 6 Ardipithecus returned, clutching fist-sized fruits in their arms. The mothers hooted with excitement, and the apes in the cave cheered. But the sharp-eyed ones noticed something. Over a dozen had gone out at noon, but only half returned. The returning Ardipithecus were filled with terror. They had been ambushed by a pack of 6 saber-toothed tigers. Several Ardipithecus had been killed, becoming food for the beasts. The survivors had barely managed to escape. The shadow of death loomed over the cave, but hunger overcame grief. The apes sat in a circle to divide the fruit. The shells were hard. One mother couldn't bite it open with one hand. Getting frustrated, she picked up a rock from the ground, raised it high, and slammed it down. Crack! The shell shattered. An ape opposite her watched with wide eyes, staring at the rock and hooting. The mother understood what he meant. She tried to toss him the rock as usual, but her shoulder opened with unusual range as she threw with force. Thump! The rock hit the other ape squarely on the forehead. The hit ape was knocked onto his back. The power had multiplied. The mother was stunned. The hit ape clutched his head and rolled on the ground, in excruciating pain. He scrambled up, grabbed the stone, and turned to throw it at a robust male. Clang! A scream rang out. The robust male fell to the ground, howling. He felt like he had discovered a new world. He picked up a pile of stones, and locked onto his companions in the cave. Wham! Down went one. Wham! Down went another. He hopped around with excitement, before being tackled and beaten by his angry companions. He struggled to his feet, gesticulating wildly to show the throwing posture. Asterisk whoosh. Boom. Asterisk. The other Ardipithecus understood. They picked up stones and tried throwing. The stones flew incredibly far, hitting a tree trunk and breaking the bark. The robust male even threw 1 dozens of meters. They hooted with excitement, frantically collecting stones of various sizes. They found that palm-sized ones were the most powerful. It was completely dark now, but they were still excitedly testing their weapons. In the Korean livestream, Che Taisien locked onto 3 saber-toothed tigers that hadn't found food. Hungry, they prowled into the mountain forest, instantly attracted by the noise from the Ardipithecus. The comments exploded. Stupid monkeys hooting in the middle of the night. They're asking for it. The tigers are going to have a feast. The 3 beasts lowered their bodies, silently creeping toward the cave. The darkness was their best cover. The hearts of the Dragon Nation viewers sank. The saber-toothed tiger's combat power was overwhelming. The Ardipithecus could only wait for death. At the cave entrance, the beasts' noses twitched. They smelled the scent of a large amount of prey. A broad tiger paw stepped into the entrance. Just as it was about to charge, a stone flew out, clattering against the cave wall near the entrance, rolling to the tiger's paw. The saber-toothed tiger was startled. It jumped back 2 steps and let out a roar at the stone. The cave went instantly silent. Fear rooted in their genes exploded. The apes looked at the entrance in terror. Under the moonlight, massive bodies blocked their path of escape. Fangs over 10 centimeters long glinted coldly. They were precision butchers, severing arteries in an instant. Then, 2 more beasts appeared side by side. 3 top predators. Dozens of Ardipithecus huddled in the deepest part of the cave. The tigers ignored the stone on the ground, locking onto the prey in the corner and crouching low. The muscles in their forelimbs bulged, and they lunged forward like arrows from a bow. On the outer edge of the corner, the first ape who had discovered throwing clutched a stone tightly. His entire body shook like a sieve, and his heart pounded wildly. He faced the blur of the charging beast. He forgot to breathe, but his hand gripped the stone tighter and tighter. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and let out a hysterical roar. The roar dispersed the genetic suppression. He stood upright, his waist twisting to the extreme, his arm stretching back as far as it could go. His body became a taut longbow, and the stone became an unstoppable force. Whoosh! The stone shot out at high speed, faster than any beast could run. At a distance of less than 10 meters, the saber-toothed tiger had no way to dodge. Crack! A crisp impact sounded. The tiger in the lead had its head snapped to the side by the impact. Its massive body crashed to the ground, its eyes filled with confusion. The other two beasts slammed on their brakes, staring at their companion in disbelief. The fallen tiger's skull had taken a heavy blow. The intense pain made it let out a shrill wail. It struggled frantically on the ground, completely unable to understand where the attack came from. The unknown brought extreme terror. The top predators didn't dare move. The ape who threw the stone gasped for breath, staring fixedly at the wailing beast. He realized that he had made a natural enemy bow its head. Fear was not invincible. Asterisk hoot, hoot, hoot. Asterisk he picked up another stone, and turned to let out a loud roar at his companions. Even predators feel pain. The companions saw the fallen beast, and saw the other two tigers retreating. Did a stone have that much power? The ape pulled back his arm again. Whack! The stone accurately hit the fallen beast's hind leg. Awoo! The beast screamed again. The other two beasts retreated in horror. They could not comprehend this long-distance strike. The lesson was over. The huddled Ardipithecus looked at the ground. It was covered in ammunition. Fear vanished completely. One by one they grabbed stones, their eyes fixed on the beasts at the cave entrance. The tigers felt the piercing gaze on their backs. From this moment on, the tables had turned. Visibility in the dark cave was very low, but that wasn't a problem for predators with night vision. The cave wasn't large. It was even a bit cramped. From the entrance to the back, it was only 20 or 30 meters. A saber-toothed tiger could cross it in a single leap. The cave was less than 5 meters wide. 3 large saber-toothed tigers were enough to completely block the entrance. The Ardipithecus tribe inside looked like an all-you-can-eat buffet delivered to the door. The tigers only needed to open their mouths to feast. Who would have thought that the outcome would be completely beyond everyone's expectations? A single unremarkable stone knocked down the saber-toothed tiger in the lead. After that, the foreign livestream chat, previously filled with mockery, instantly stopped. It was so quiet it felt like the chat had been cleared. Only the images on the sky screen continued to play. Meanwhile, the Dragon Nation livestream chat was flying. Even the people of Dragon Nation hadn't expected that this extinction-level crisis would be resolved in such an absurd way. Throwing stones is something even an ordinary person can do. An 8-year-old kid can skip stones. When they saw the Ardipithecus throwing stones at each other earlier, no one thought anything of it. As it turned out, those small stones forced back 3 prehistoric beasts, and even knocked one down. That was a saber-toothed tiger. Just looking at those sharp fangs was terrifying. They were much larger than ordinary lions or tigers. Who would believe this? In the Dragon Nation Earth Online Special Research Group, there was total silence. It was frighteningly quiet. The researchers looked at each other, their eyes full of disbelief. Is this even scientific? One researcher wiped cold sweat from his forehead. Just now, he thought it was all over. This was a matter concerning the national destiny of Dragon Nation. He had been breaking out in cold sweat. Who knew there would be such a turnaround? Elder Chin remained silent, frowning, peering deep in thought. As the head of the research group, he had analyzed species in the game for several versions already. The giant beasts of the dinosaur era, he still remembered them clearly. But none of those shocks compared to this scene. He forced himself to calm down and analyze it carefully. He finally understood. What had I done during the intervention phase? Previously, I had refused off-site assistance, which had led Elder Chin to scold me repeatedly, believing I was there to cause trouble. But what just happened proved I was right. We all underestimated this new civilization observer. Elder Chin sighed after coming to this realization, then pointed at the screen and said, his active intervention on the Ardipithecus. After his intervention, the Ardipithecus learned the skill of throwing stones. It seems like a trivial thing, but in reality, it's a game-changing modification. We all thought that throwing a stone is useless against a large predator. That's because we are thinking from a human perspective. Humans wouldn't use a stone to fight head-on. Whether you could hurt a lion or tiger or not, you would likely be injured or killed. We have safer ways to attack, like firearms. So we subconsciously think throwing stones is useless. But what if we look at it from the perspective of a beast? Elder Chin's words woke everyone up. Yes, everyone had been looking at Ardipithecus through a human lens, which is why throwing stones didn't seem remarkable. A female researcher cried out after a moment of silence. Looking at it from this perspective, it's terrifying. Since Earth Online started running, no matter the version of the species, even the dinosaurs who ruled for 3 versions, could only win through close-quarters melee. Size, strength, fangs and claws were the keys to victory. But now there's an opponent who can attack from a distance. Those advantages are instantly rendered useless. They don't even need to get close. No matter how sharp your claws are, they're useless if you can't touch me. Elder Chin nodded in agreement. That's why I said we all underestimated him. Our thinking was too outdated. We were all thinking about how to use existing conditions to gain an advantage. But he took a different approach. He used the intervention rules to carve a new path, overtaking the competition entirely. He was right to refuse off-site assistance. Our thinking was wrong. We would have only interfered with his judgment. Elder Chin spoke candidly. Earlier, he had scolded me harshly, but it was all for the country. There are always people with unique ways of thinking. Following the crowd isn't always right, at least for now. They saw hope in the Ardipithecus. Maybe I really could get it done. The scene cut back to the cave. Originally, the narrow terrain favored the saber-toothed tigers, but the moment dozens of Ardipithecus picked up stones, the situation completely reversed. The tigers clearly sensed danger. In their past hunting experience, they had never encountered a situation like this. They didn't dare act recklessly. The next second, they saw the apes raise stones, assuming their stances, looking exactly like a row of biological catapults. They let out strange hooting cries, and a dense shower of stones rained down on them. The world of the three saber-toothed tigers collapsed. The stones were too fast, and the distance was too short. In an instant, the tigers were hit all over. The stones were fast and heavy. Getting hit on the body meant bruises and large lumps. Fast and heavy. Hitting the body meant bruises, and a hit to the head could cause a direct knockout. The tigers roared and rolled, but the ape stones came in wave after wave. No matter how they tried, they couldn't dodge them. Unable to protect themselves, it was like being caught in a pack of hyenas. No matter how fierce or powerful they were, it was useless if they couldn't touch their prey. Hit by heavy blows everywhere, these former top predators were truly terrified. Every cell was screaming danger. Something was wrong with these apes. We can't stay in this cave. This thought was crystal clear in the tigers' minds. In the past, they never had to run. As long as they showed their dominance, social animals would scatter in fear. But today, that didn't work at all. All three tigers wanted to run, but the one in front had taken a heavy hit to the head, leaving it dazed. Its leg joint was also hit, so it couldn't stand up at all. The other two could still manage to move. They protected their heads as best they could from the stones, while their backs took the damage. Seeing the situation wasn't right, they turned and fled out of the cave. The one left on the ground was in a miserable state. All the stone throwing was concentrated on it, making a thud-thud sound. Its skin was broken and bleeding. It saw stars from the impact. The apes only stopped when they couldn't find suitable stones. The saber-toothed tiger was barely hanging on by a thread. It lay amidst the blood and rocks, on the verge of death. A few leaves were in its mouth. The ape who had thrown the first stone observed for a long time, confirming it no longer had the strength to resist, before hooting to notify his companions that it was safe. The apes immediately swarmed around. The strongest one brought over a rock the size of a basketball. Before, everyone thought it was too heavy to be useful, but now it was perfect. Crash! The ape raised the rock high above his head, and slammed it down with all his might, directly killing the saber-toothed tiger. It stopped breathing completely. The apes made cooing sounds, filled with joy. In the past, they were the ones preyed upon by the tigers. Who would have thought that this top predator would now be lying there, at their mercy? The dark muscle tissue revealed beneath the torn fur made the Ardipithecus salivate. They usually only ate wild fruit and small insects. They had never seen so much meat. The apes' expressions turned from joy to longing. The scent of meat triggered the instincts in their genes. At this moment, everyone looked at the one who had thrown the first stone. He was the first to stand up during the crisis. Now all the apes looked up to him, accepting him as their leader. He didn't hesitate. He squatted directly by the tiger's remains, reached out, tore off a piece of meat, and stuffed it into his mouth to chew. Although the meat was tough, yet, he reached out, tore off a piece of meat, and stuffed it into his mouth to chew. Although the meat was tough, it was 10,000 times more flavorful than the fruit and insects they ate before. His eyes lit up instantly, and he hurriedly gestured for his companions to join the feast. The predator had become the prey. The Ardipithecus tasted meat for the first time. As the civilization observer, I recorded this scene, writing it in the observation log. Moving from eating fruit to eating meat was like opening a brand new door to evolution. From now on, meat would become a regular part of their diet. The abundant energy in meat would drive their most important cheat to continue developing. That cheat was the brain. Cheat? How could those guys use stones to subdue a saber-toothed tiger? They even dared to eat the meat of their natural enemy. I can't take this. On the sky screen, the Ardipithecus surrounded the dead tiger, eating to their heart's content. Creatures that used to run in fear at the mere sound of a tiger's roar now dared to tear into its flesh. The Korean viewers were devastated. The Dragon Nation viewers, however, were thrilled. Not long ago, people from Korea had specifically come to the Dragon Nation livestream to mock them. To have them slapped in the face so quickly was incredibly satisfying. Soon, a large number of Dragon Nation IDs flooded into the Korean livestream chat. Oh, isn't this Mr. Saber-Toothed Tiger? Why are you lying on the ground? Is it cooler down there? Get up. Our Ardipithecus cave doesn't allow outsiders to sleep. Seeing them eat so happily, I'm curious what saber-toothed tiger meat tastes like. Ha ha ha. The wall of comments pushed back any Korean replies. They didn't last even a second. The entire livestream was once again dominated by Dragon Nation viewers. The Korean people were hopping mad, but they couldn't even get a word in. They could only watch. At the same time, in the Korean Earth Online research group, there was a fierce argument. They couldn't understand how a guaranteed victory had suddenly been overturned. The research group leader frowned. Those apes must have been actively modified. How exactly did the Dragon Nation observer do it? Can we replicate it? Everyone sighed upon hearing this. A researcher spoke helplessly. It's impossible. A tiger's paws can't even grip objects. They can't learn the throwing skill at all. If we really wanted that skill, we'd have to modify the tiger's physical data. If we mess it up, we'd ruin their originally powerful physical traits, which would be more trouble than it's worth. The group leader could only shake his head. I just mentioned it in passing. If it's impossible, then forget it. Besides, the tiger's defeat this time was mainly due to the terrain. The cave was too narrow to dodge the stones. On the open prairie, they definitely wouldn't lose. The lethality of stones is limited. If you don't kill them, they will. The cave was too narrow to dodge the stones. On the open prairie, they definitely wouldn't lose. The lethality of stones is limited. If you don't kill them, they will counterattack. Ardipithecus can't compete with tigers. And right now, the number of tigers in the Ardipithecus habitat is still rising. It's only a matter of time before they're wiped out. One defeat means nothing. The research group leader soon regained his composure. After all, the saber-toothed tiger's physiological advantages were undeniable. They still held the absolute upper hand. The skyscreen footage continued to fast forward. After tasting meat for the first time, the Ardipithecus worldview changed completely. That one saber-toothed tiger was enough to feed them until the next day, but they would face hunger again afterward. The Ardipithecus who threw the first stone that night had now become the leader of the tribe, possessing immense charisma. Previously, the Ardipithecus gathered in small family units, with loose relations between different families, often resulting in quarrels and physical fights. Now that they had a leader, the cohesion of the entire tribe surged instantly. They understood that, in times of crisis, they needed a leader to unite everyone's strength and drive away invaders. Not long after, the leader led nearly 20 Ardipithecus out of the cave, going out in a pack to find food. At noon, when the sun was most scorching, over 20 Ardipithecus stepped out of the cave together. Such a large group could not hide even the slightest movement in the grass. They were exceptionally conspicuous. Other creatures in the forest were stunned, sensing that the danger of these monkeys had spiked. Even solitary predators, upon seeing this group of bipedal creatures, retracted their hunting steps and watched from a distance. The Ardipithecus no longer had to travel like before, being cautious at every step. For the first time, they felt the security that came with having many companions. Everyone loved this feeling. Their goal this time was a fruit forest 3 kilometers away. It was currently fruiting season, bearing the hard fruits they loved to eat. They had traveled this path many times before. Every time there were casualties, only the number varied. But this time the Ardipithecus were well prepared. The leader picked up a stone of suitable size from under a tree root, wielding it vigorously, and signaled his companions to pick up stones as well. The power of carrying stones had already been proven. It was the key to their survival. Even if they couldn't carry many, it was enough to deter predators. Just as they were about to set off, the leader's gaze was suddenly fixed on a meter-long, wrist-thick broken branch at the base of a tree. He didn't look away even when his companions urged him from behind. He then bent over, picked up the branch and toyed with it. Under the puzzled gazes of the other Ardipithecus, he suddenly raised his hand and swung the wooden stick. The stick left an afterimage, and even produced a whistling sound from the wind. It looked incredibly powerful. The Ardipithecus leader's eyes lit up instantly, and he shared it with his companions while holding the stick high. They hadn't just unlocked the throwing skill recently. Their shoulders had a wider range of motion, and their waist torque was much stronger. Swinging the stick was like cracking a whip, even more powerful than a stone. It was as if they had discovered a new world. The atmosphere in the Dragon Nation livestream relaxed significantly. Everyone began to joke around, saying that seeing the Ardipithecus pick up a stick reminded them of when they were kids and saw a good-looking stick, always unable to resist picking it up to swing it a few times. From the initial despair upon seeing the Ardipithecus to now, the Dragon Nation viewers all felt these Ardipithecus were different. They couldn't say what exactly was special, but they just felt there was hope, and that they might truly bring surprises. The other Ardipithecus also realized the stick was useful, and immediately looked around, searching for fallen branches and sticks. Soon the vicinity was picked clean. Among the 20-plus Ardipithecus, a dozen of them found handy wooden sticks, while those who didn't found stones to clutch. The group carried large wooden sticks in one hand and fist-sized stones in the other, marching out of the forest in a grand fashion, stepping onto the plains. Their state of mind this trip was completely different from before. Large creatures on the plains had decreased significantly, most having been hunted by the recently gathered saber-toothed tigers. This area had almost become the exclusive domain of the tigers. The Ardipithecus, armed with stones, didn't think much of it, and continued forward. The movement of over 20 apes was not small, immediately attracting the attention of 3 or 4 Macaridus saber-toothed tigers wandering nearby. The leader of the Korean Earth Online Research Group sat up straight, staring intently at the sky screen. The scene he had been waiting for was finally here. The plains were open. The Ardipithecus throwing skills were mostly neutralized. This time they were surely doomed. Who knew those saber-toothed tigers would see such a sight? It was also the first time the Ardipithecus had seen them, and they didn't dare to charge forward recklessly. These saber-toothed tigers were moved here through the Korean side's active intervention. They were usually solitary creatures, and would never cooperate. Even when together, they at most didn't interfere with each other. How would they dare to attack such a large group? They only dared to follow from a distance, waiting for an Ardipithecus to fall behind before striking. They followed all the way until the Ardipithecus reached their destination in the fruit forest, yet they still hadn't dared to act. The Korean research group leader was so anxious he was gnashing his teeth. Go! Pounce on them! Use your strength to repel that group of Ardipithecus. They're just a bunch of weak apes. His fists were clenched, veins bulging, desperately wishing he could cross into the game as a Macaridus to personally repel those Ardipithecus. But worrying was useless. In the sky screen, frustration was futile. In the sky screen, the 4 saber-toothed tigers continued to wait outside the fruit forest. Gradually, 2 of the tigers lost all patience, turning away to find other prey. They set their sights on a Samotherium, a giraffid creature with 2 banana-shaped horns. It was larger than an Ardipithecus, enough for a full meal. The remaining 2 tigers stayed behind. After waiting for half an hour, the Ardipithecus in the fruit forest had eaten their fill, and prepared to return with their harvested fruits. Having encountered no attacks along the way, the Ardipithecus' vigilance had relaxed significantly, and their formation became scattered. The opportunity the saber-toothed tigers were waiting for had finally arrived. 2 tigers lay in ambush on the right side of the fruit forest, each marking its target. One of them was famished. Ignoring its companion, charged out first on its own. The other was more patient, but since its companion had already exposed their position, it had no choice but to follow and charge. The sound of rapid running suddenly echoed across the prairie. The Ardipithecus snapped their heads to the side. These massive top predators were pouncing towards them. The sense of oppression was instantly maximized. One Ardipithecus failed to react in time, and was directly pounced upon and injured, letting out a scream. This scene caused the Korean livestream to erupt in cheers, while the Dragon Nation viewers' hearts leapt into their throats. The Korean research group leader jumped up from his seat. Before he could even say, "Great job!" a stone flew across the sky screen at high speed, striking the saber-toothed tiger directly. The tiger's head tilted. It hadn't even realized where the attack came from. There were no other opponents within 2 meters of it. With its sensory abilities, if any creature approached this range, it would certainly have counterattacked immediately. This situation was completely beyond its understanding. In the next second, even more stones smashed towards it. It wasn't interrupted, shook its head in pain, unable to even find where the opponent was. This was practically cheating. Danger was everywhere. Out of survival instinct, it directly abandoned the prey in its mouth, and turned to run. The surrounding Ardipithecus immediately stepped forward, and dragged their injured companion back into the group. Watching this, the Korean research group leaders' eyes widened. Are you kidding me? They're just some stones. What are you afraid of? Just take that Ardipithecus and run. He was on the verge of a breakdown. The plot was not unfolding as he had imagined. The saber-toothed tiger didn't stop until it had run dozens of meters, its round eyes filled with terror. On the other side, the round eyes were filled with terror. The second saber-toothed tiger had failed to strike immediately, because its companion had alerted the prey. The target it aimed for was the Ardipithecus leader walking at the front. The alert Ardipithecus leader reacted instantly to the incoming predator, raising his hand and throwing the stone he was clutching. The tiger leaped to the side, dodging the stone aimed at its face, and pounced a second time. But because it had to dodge, its pouncing motion paused for a fraction of a second, giving the Ardipithecus leader enough time to adjust. The Ardipithecus leader gripped the large wooden stick tightly with both hands, and swung it horizontally with a fierce force. With a loud thwack, the saber-toothed tiger in its second pounce was knocked silly. Its gaze cleared up instantly. It simply couldn't comprehend how the ape in front of it could possess such a hard offensive weapon. Then the Ardipithecus leader began to roar, while frantically wielding the large wooden stick in his hands. The meter-long stick was swung so fast it became a blur, Combined with the leader's arm length, it created a death radius that the tiger could never cross. The tiger didn't dare to charge into the whistling stick, and could only keep retreating. For every step it retreated, the Ardipithecus leader took a step forward, constantly compressing its space. Seeing other Ardipithecus also surrounding it, the saber-toothed tiger finally abandoned the attack, and quickly retreated far away from the group. The place on its cheek where the stick had struck was still throbbing with pain. It still hadn't figured out how it had been beaten. With the two saber-toothed tigers driven away, the crisis completely subsided. This was the first time the Ardipithecus had faced a saber-toothed tiger's hunt on the prairie. Although one Ardipithecus was injured, the entire tribe had survived the clutches of the predator. This was a milestone of progress for them, meaning they no longer had to fear their former natural enemies too much. They had also secured their entry ticket to compete for survival against the saber-toothed tigers. The Dragon Nation viewers outside the skyscreen were overjoyed. Previously, everyone felt the Ardipithecus were too weak and wouldn't survive until the version settlement. But as the civilization observer, I had used only one chance for active intervention to directly reverse the situation. The Ardipithecus now were qualified to survive on this continent. The injured Ardipithecus winced in pain. The wound on its chest was particularly striking. The tiger's strength was immense. It had suffered significant damage. In the past, such an injury would have been a death sentence. But now, the Ardipithecus had tribal consciousness, knowing to help one another. A death sentence? No, the Ardipithecus now had tribal consciousness. They helped carry him back home together. They would never leave him behind. Having just encountered an attack, the Ardipithecus were exceptionally alert along the way. It was now 3 o'clock or 4 p.m., with plenty of sun, the prime time for predators to be active. Foraging creatures could be seen everywhere on the prairie. They faced 2 more encounters on the return trip. The first was 3 saber-toothed tigers stalking them. The Ardipithecus spotted them early and drove them away with stones first. They had now developed a pattern. Stones hit hard enough, combined with roaring, could scare off most predators. The second time, they encountered a pack of Dinocrocida observed by the Japanese. A full 20 of them. The two sides confronted each other for a moment, roared a few times, and then each backed away. The Dinocrocida didn't want to provoke this group of apes that didn't look like easy targets. After all, compared to a direct clash, hunting herbivores was much more cost-effective for the Ardipithecus. As they approached a patch of bushes, the Ardipithecus leader suddenly stopped. The bushes were rustling despite the lack of wind, and there were tracks leading inside. The leader thought it was a predator in ambush. Unable to find a stone, he picked up a pomelo-sized clump of soil and threw it inside. In the next second, a saber-toothed tiger suddenly leaped out from within. It was the same one that had stalked them earlier, before turning to hunt the Sametherium. Its meal had just been interrupted. Traces of blood and scraps of meat still hung from its mouth. It looked incredibly fierce, but when it looked up and saw over 20 Ardipithecus staring at it, it was stunned on the spot. Earlier, for tigers hadn't dared to act. Now it was all alone. It had just driven away its companions because of the prey. Unwilling to give up its unfinished kill, it arched its back and let out a vicious roar, attempting to scare away these cowardly monkeys. In the past, this trick worked every time, but it failed this time. The Ardipithecus not only didn't retreat, but roared back along with their leader. Many even brandished their wooden sticks. The roar completely drowned out the saber-toothed tiger's sound. The tiger's momentum was completely lost. No matter how unwilling, it could only run away with its tail between its legs. The northern viewers outside the sky screen were furious, cursing their saber-toothed tiger for being useless. To have its food snatched by monkeys was a disgrace. The Ardipithecus breathed a sigh of relief. Pushing aside the bushes, they saw half a Sametherium that had just been killed. The meat was still warm. The remaining meat was enough to feed them for days. This was practically a reward from the heavens. The Ardipithecus were overjoyed, carrying the meat and the picked fruit back to their habitat. After nightfall, the one that was driven, the Ardipithecus were overjoyed, carrying the meat and the picked fruit back to their habitat. After nightfall, the saber-toothed tiger that had been driven away wandered back. It had intended to scavenge whatever scraps the Ardipithecus left behind, but after searching for a long time, not even a bone fragment remained. The tiger was stunned. This tiger would go hungry tonight. In this area, it wasn't the only hungry saber-toothed tiger. With the number of predators skyrocketing, competition was becoming increasingly brutal. The chain reaction of a large number of saber-toothed tigers gathering was starting to manifest, though it was currently still silent. The timeline of Earth Online was constantly accelerating. The survival competition on the continent was growing more ruthless. In the sky, the Argentavis still dominated the airspace. They were the species chosen by the American civilization observer, David, as absolute masters of the sky. Their wingspan reached 6 to 7 meters wide, and their top flight speed could reach 70 kilometers per hour. When such an aerial beast dove down from high altitude, most creatures on the ground simply couldn't withstand it. To make matters worse, the Argentavis was so large that it had almost no natural enemies. The American personnel all felt that this was definitely the prime candidate to rule the world in the current version. The stats were too perfect, so perfect that the American viewers felt the game didn't even need to continue. Even if David did nothing, based solely on these super stats, it would still rank in the top 3 at settlement. But how could things be that simple? The bonuses from the dinosaur era version could not be applied to the new version. The Argentavis being too perfect actually signaled an ominous trend. The final assessment of Earth Online had 3 core standards. First, whether the observed species was still alive at settlement. Second, the population size of the species. And third, the range of the species' survival territory. These 3 were the core basis for ranking. But the American viewers gradually discovered that, although the Argentavis were so strong they had no enemies, their population should theoretically be expanding. Yet the reality was quite the opposite. The Argentavis' reproduction speed was ridiculously slow. Common creatures enter breeding season when temperatures are suitable to produce offspring. The Argentavis was different. They only bred once every 2 years, laying only 1 to 2 eggs each time. This birth rate was low even for mammals, let alone oviparous animals. Other oviparous animals lay many eggs. To ensure the survival rate of their offspring, the Argentavis didn't need to, they were strong enough. They didn't rely on high reproductive efficiency to maintain their species. Furthermore, Argentavis generally lived for 50 to 100 years, and chicks took over a dozen years to mature. Naturally, the time to breed the next generation was longer. In this regard, Argentavis and Ardipithecus were somewhat similar, but the difference was, the Ardipithecus had long since abandoned breeding season restrictions. They could reproduce at any time. This greatly enhanced the Ardipithecus' reproductive efficiency, with the only limitation being whether there was enough food. Furthermore, having no natural enemies is sometimes not a good thing. Because the Ardipithecus were under constant external pressure, they had enough motivation to raise offspring, to strengthen the tribe. But Argentavis lacked this pressure. They were not urgent about reproduction at all. In addition to their large size, they needed to eat at least 10 kilograms of meat every day to survive. Limited food plus slow reproduction resulted in the population being unable to grow. This was not the dinosaur era. There were no longer dozens of tons heavy beasts on the surface. Creatures that are too perfect are sometimes trapped by that very framework of perfection. The American side was already considering using an intervention chance to actively change the current situation. The camera turned back to the ground. The large-scale migration of Macaridus saber-toothed tigers had altered the ecological structure of many regions. Many creatures discovered that the shadow of survival above their heads was gone. The kings of the territory had moved away, removing the greatest threat. These creatures, instead, welcomed the opportunity for population expansion. Among them were species observed by small nations, equivalent to Korea. This move had indirectly helped many other countries. But the constantly gathering saber-toothed tigers brought a devastating blow to the ecosystem where the Ardipithecus were located. As time fast-forwarded, Earth Online entered the spring of a new year. The number of Macaridus saber-toothed tigers in this region had reached over 1,000. With so many top predators squeezed together, the ecosystem collapsed directly. Large numbers of creatures fled, and some weak species were even hunted to extinction. This inevitably affected the survival of the Ardipithecus. The tigers had even entered the mountain forests. The risk for Ardipithecus foraging outside skyrocketed. The chances of snatching food from the tigers' mouths also decreased significantly. After all, there were more tigers, and less food. They were forced to, by necessity, suppress their predatory instincts, and learn to share food. The Ardipithecus dared to gather in groups of 20 to drive away 1 or 2. The tigers absolutely didn't dare to provoke a pack. That was purely asking for trouble. However, the instinct to eat meat was already etched into the Ardipithecus bones. Now they didn't just look for wild fruit to fill their bellies. They would keep an eye out for any opportunity to get meat. As long as one appeared, they would never let it go. As a result, the Ardipithecus could eat meat every few days. Sometimes it was stolen. They could eat meat. Sometimes it was stolen. Sometimes it was scavenged scraps, and sometimes they hunted it themselves. However, they only dared to catch small mammals with no combat power. As for the saber-toothed tigers, it was too early to speak of sharing. It had been too little time. Each saber-toothed tiger was originally the king of its own territory. How could they endure such humiliation? The instinct to monopolize prey had not disappeared. They were just suppressing it like a powder keg about to explode. As everything was restored in spring, this powder keg was completely ignited. In spring, temperatures warmed, and all life awakened, signaling the start of breeding season for the animals. Reproduction is the ultimate goal of survival for all living things. Predation is just to stay alive. and the meaning of staying alive is to pass on the genes. To this end, male animals would fight fiercely to compete for breeding rights. This was originally a normal ecological phenomenon, but unfortunately, for the Macaridus saber-toothed tigers forced to gather in large numbers, things were completely different. In the region where the Ardipithecus lived, over 1,000 Macaridus had now gathered. The habits of saber-toothed tigers are between solitary and social. Even if they live in groups, the numbers are never that high. The 1,000 or so saber-toothed tigers automatically split into dozens of small groups. The smaller ones had 10 or 20, and the larger ones did not exceed 50. With the arrival of the breeding season, the large concentration of saber-toothed tigers all became each other's competitors. To miss the season was to lose the right to reproduce. Every male saber-toothed tiger had to fight with everything he had. The audience from a certain country watched helplessly as a massive internal conflict began. In one small group of over 20 tigers, the majority were female. As the temperature rose, their hormones changed, and they assumed courtship postures. They also released special pheromones that only male saber-toothed tigers could perceive. This stimulated the males into a high state of arousal, their minds filled with competing for breeding rights. Animals do not have human social norms. The goal of each male saber-toothed tiger was not a one-on-one match, but to monopolize all breeding opportunities. Only then could they maximize the passage of their genes. They instinctively wanted to defeat every other male. In the tribe, this was a fight for everything. The winner takes all, while the losers either slink away or lose their lives directly. Survival never favors the weak. On the screen, within this group, two massive male saber-toothed tigers squared off. More males gathered around them, their eyes filled with aggressive wildness. They were reduced to beasts controlled entirely by instinct. With aggressive wildness, they became beasts driven entirely by primal instinct. The female saber-toothed tigers stayed not far away, having no intention of intervening. They only waited for the strongest victor to breed with. Only the genes of the strong are preserved. This is the survival of the fittest. Without any warning, the two staring males lunged at each other. The fight began instantly. The audience from that certain country felt their hearts tighten. These tigers were their pride and joy. Instead of hunting the Ardipithecus, they were fighting among themselves. What a mess. What's even more absurd is that this wasn't an isolated case. It was happening in almost every small tiger group. For food, saber-toothed tigers can tolerate each other. But for reproduction, no one would back down. Even if the opponent was a former hunting partner, the fight would go on regardless. The battle was incredibly fierce. A saber-toothed tiger's claws have immense power, their thick forelimbs seemingly born for combat. When they pounce, muscles bulge across their bodies, and the offensive is ferocious. Even without using their signature saber teeth, the battle was deadlocked. Dark stains of blood spread across the grass. The male who had just gained the upper hand didn't even have time to roar before being pounced upon by another male nearby. As long as there were other males in the group capable of movement, the fighting would not stop. There were even losers from other tribes who followed the scent of pheromones to find an opening. As long as they weren't dead, there was a chance to compete. This kind of combat would last until the end of the breeding season. During this time, how many tigers would die or be injured? No one could say for sure. That country's operation did indeed make survival harder for the Ardipithecus, but so far, the Ardipithecus hadn't lost much. On the contrary, the number of tiger casualties was skyrocketing every day. What was even more infuriating was what happened next. On the screen, a tragic battle was raging in the habitat of over 20 tigers. A defeated tiger lay in the corner, his body mangled and severely wounded. His breathing became extremely faint. None of his own kind paid him any attention. Some viewers noticed that not far behind this saber-toothed tiger, a small group of sneaky figures was quietly creeping up. Oh no, it's the Ardipithecus. What are they doing? Are they walking into their own deaths? The viewers in that country's livestream recognized them instantly. These were Ardipithecus out foraging. Each held wooden sticks and stones. Normally, Ardipithecus would run the other way if they saw a tiger. But today, these tigers were actually fighting each other. Normally, they would have long since fled. But today, this group of tigers was busy fighting among themselves. The roars could be heard from afar. The foraging Ardipithecus were initially startled. But the Ardipithecus leader was sharp. Smelling the special scent in the air, he climbed to a high point to look out. He saw the saber-toothed tigers fighting each other, and one lying on the ground having lost the ability to resist. The Ardipithecus had already learned how to steal prey. With such a large piece of food right before their eyes, the temptation was unimaginable. They didn't think twice. They felt it was worth a try and acted immediately. Led by their leader, the Ardipithecus crept over stealthily. Those tigers fighting fiercely had their minds filled with the struggle for reproduction. They didn't notice the movement at all. Before long, they reached the dying tiger. As the tiger weakly raised its head, the next second, a large wooden club slammed onto its skull. With a loud thud, the tiger stopped moving instantly. Several Ardipithecus surrounded it, carrying the carcass together and running for their lives. The live stream for that country exploded with anger. The Ardipithecus movements were fast, but they still alerted other tigers. The battling male tigers didn't care about a few fleeing monkeys. In such a massive fight, one moment's distraction could mean defeat. The female tigers couldn't be bothered to care either. Creatures in the breeding season are entirely focused on mating. Unless they were in desperate need of food, nothing else was important. It was just a few monkeys stealing a carcass. It wasn't worth their attention at all, except for the viewers outside the screen. The whole livestream chat was in a frenzy. A blatant sneak attack. These cowards don't dare face them head-on. Using such dirty tricks against the tigers. When did these monkeys become thieves? As expected of the species China chose to observe, they're just as underhanded as China. Exactly. China is too much, using any means necessary to achieve their goals. The audience couldn't take it anymore. They had used their intervention chance to gather the tigers specifically to wipe out the Ardipithecus. The tigers gathered, but before they could act, they started a civil war among themselves. They could have accepted that, but they didn't expect the Ardipithecus to loot a burning house and get a huge bargain. Watching your enemy do well is harder to bear than your own defeat. All sorts of malicious comments began to surface. Many Chinese viewers, who were already there to watch the drama, couldn't hold back when they saw China being insulted. They weren't going to take it. Angry netizens immediately began to fire back. What nonsense are you talking about? You have the nerve to call others thieves? All these years you've tried to claim everything good is yours. How dare you? Yeah, what kind of rubbish are you spouting? Calling others thieves with your track record? You've been grabbing every good thing for years, claiming it's yours. What a joke. This is too much. Don't you understand natural selection? Our Ardipithecus having the skill to carry away prey is true strength. If you don't like it, suck it up. When it comes to online arguments, Chinese netizens fear no one. Soon, more Chinese netizens received word and rushed into the other country's livestream for the third time. The dense barrage of comments crashed the livestream chat. This was the third time. The advantage of China's population is something no other country has been able to break. The other country once again experienced the feeling of being cornered in their own comment section. They wanted to complain to the screen and report China, but the screen wouldn't bother with such trivial matters. The livestream chat was in total chaos. In the other country's Earth Online research team, the leader was losing hair from stress. Male fighting during the breeding season is a normal natural phenomenon, but the current infighting among the tigers had long since exceeded what was normal. Through his worry, he realized that they had caused this with their own hands. Normal social animals are matriarchal societies, maintained by blood ties, with females in the majority. Male fights in the breeding season are usually small-scale conflicts, but by forcibly gathering a large number of tigers, they created temporary alliances of unrelated animals. Such groups are inherently unstable. The male-to-female ratio was severely skewed. In some groups, females were only 1/3 or even 1/4 of the population. With more males and fewer females, the fighting was naturally tragic. It was common for 10 or 20 males to fight each other. Even for groups with many females, they would be targeted by wandering males defeated in other groups. The fighting happened regardless. The natural rules of reproduction were completely broken, directly evolving into a hellish civil war. Tiger tribes throughout the region were slaughtering each other with exceptional ferocity. If this continued, let alone besieging the Ardipithecus, the saber-toothed tigers would be severely depleted. They still knew too little about these animals. They refused to admit their error until it was too late. "We made a serious mistake," the leader said, scratching his head in distress. Saber-toothed tigers are indeed strong, but no creature can withstand the impact of a massive environmental change. The research leader's words sunk the entire academy into silence. A single chance for active intervention had actually caused such dire consequences. This was something most people hadn't expected. After all, they had never seen Macaritas slaughtering their own kind before. Subconsciously, they thought the species could adapt to group living. It wasn't that they hadn't considered the consequences. They just thought the gains would outweigh the costs. Who would have thought things would turn out this way? A researcher asked if there was still a way to fix it. The research leader looked up and took a deep breath. To solve it completely, they would have to use another intervention to restore things. Then everything we did before would be for nothing, and it might even cause more damage to the saber-toothed tigers. The cost was too heavy. The opportunity to actively intervene in the observed species seemed like a way for observers to develop their tribes, but in reality it was a huge trap. For the ecosystem, any human intervention could lead to even more serious consequences. Using it rashly means eating the bitter fruit of your own actions. Using an intervention chance is not up to us. Everything depended on Che Taehyun. He was the civilization observer. If he doesn't realize the danger, there's nothing we can do. The leader looked at the screen, his voice full of helplessness. Sometimes he also felt that placing the fate of the entire country in the hands of a random person was too much of a gamble, but those were the rules. No one could change them. They could only hope Che Taehyun could grasp the severity of the current situation. The screen continued its broadcast. The saber-toothed tiger's estrus usually lasts from a week to a month. This was originally meant for them to find mates. But in the Ardipithecus region, there were too many Macaridas. They didn't need to spend time searching for mates at all. The time saved was all spent fighting each other. It was practically a massive internal war. For the Ardipithecus, this civil war was like opening the door to a new world. The once ferocious beasts were now too busy fighting and breeding. They only came out to forage occasionally, and they stayed close to their base, rarely roaming far. This made it much safer for the Ardipithecus to go out. The Macaridas they had carried back earlier was their first meal of fresh meat in several months. It was countless times better than smelly carrion. The Ardipithecus loved it. One day, while out searching for food as usual, they accidentally stumbled upon a wounded Macaridus lying by the lake to drink water. There were several hideous scars on its body, the blood turning black and foul-smelling. His breath was incredibly weak. It was clearly a loser of the breeding wars. To the Ardipithecus, this was basically a delivery meal at their doorstep. The wounded tiger had little mobility. It was a sitting duck. The Ardipithecus had kicked others while they were down before. Seeing a lone, non-threatening top predator, they mustered the courage to close in for the kill. After all, they had already tasted saber-toothed tiger meat, and were no longer that afraid. They were no longer as afraid as they once were. This operation was exceptionally smooth. The tiger had almost no ability to resist, could only watch in despair, as dozens of Ardipithecus attacked it from 20 meters away. It wanted to run, but it was surrounded. It tried to counterattack and pounce, but its injuries were too severe and its movements too slow. The Ardipithecus didn't get close. They threw stones from a distance. When it advanced, they ran. When it retreated, they chased. A classic kiting tactic. Even if they weren't skillful, with others providing cover, the tiger had no chance to fight back. The former apex predator was bludgeoned and stoned to death by the lake. Confirming it was completely still, the Ardipithecus leader stepped forward and poked its head with a large wooden club. With a happy roar, the other Ardipithecus immediately gathered around, raising their clubs and cheering around the carcass. Some were already salivating. At the leader's call, they hauled the tiger back to their cave. As the sun set, orange light stretched their shadows long. The grand procession followed the trail into the forest and vanished completely. Unlike the accidental scavenger find earlier, this was the first time the Ardipithecus had a planned, purposeful hunt of a large beast. Even if the opponent was just a wounded tiger, all beginnings are difficult. Going from 0 to 1 is the hardest part. In this moment, they unlocked the gene for group hunting. Even if there were still many shortcomings, this bold attempt today was enough to change the entire future of the tribe. Having succeeded once, there would be many more successes in the future. This experience would be passed down through generations, etched into the bones of every Ardipithecus. In the screen's virtual space, my pen paused on the notebook. I took a deep breath, my eyes filled with emotion. As a civilization observer, I truly felt like an omnipresent life force, silently watching these creatures who once only dared hide in trees, step by step turn from timid to brave, rising from insignificance to greatness. What were once just a few lines in a textbook were now unfolding vividly before my eyes. With the first successful opportunistic kill, the second and third naturally followed. After the first few successes, the Ardipithecus discovered that the fanged beasts had no interest in them whatsoever. Their courage grew instantly. The viewers outside the screen soon noticed that the purpose of their actions had changed. They rarely chewed on hard wild fruit anymore. When foraging, they specifically gravitated toward the tiger's habitats. Specifically looking for opportunities to loot, they moved toward the tiger territory. For nothing else but to pick up bargains, they focused on those fighting and severely wounded tigers. When two tigers were clashing, a group of Ardipithecus would hide nearby and wait. If the loser retreated with heavy injuries, the Ardipithecus would follow and kill them. If the loser died on the spot, they would steal the carcass while the other tigers were courting. If the defeated tiger could still fight, the Ardipithecus would quietly retreat. Regardless, on this savanna, there were signs of tiger fights everywhere. As long as they were patient, they would always have a harvest. This soon became the new rule of survival on the plains. Yet, besides the Ardipithecus, no other creature could seize this opportunity. This demonstrated their unique and powerful ability to adapt. The core key was their continuously developing brain. The Ardipithecus weren't smart enough yet, but the potential was already showing. After eating tiger meat just twice, they slowly shed their fear of the predators. They developed basic reasoning, You can eat me, but I can also eat you. This was something other creatures simply couldn't do. They even dared to roar back at the former apex predators, while the tigers were busy killing each other. During the mating season, they played the game of the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. The rewards were enormous. Other creatures, they still hadn't figured out what was happening. Seeing so many tigers, they just tried to flee elsewhere. The Ardipithecus advantages were slowly emerging. As primates, their brain capacity was initially similar to that of other primates, but ever since they came down from the trees, learned to walk upright, and found more abundant food, their brains had surplus energy to develop. Their cranial capacity grew larger and larger, and they began to think. With simple thinking abilities, their adaptability to the environment strengthened. While many creatures faced survival crises due to environmental changes, the Ardipithecus could quickly find other ways to survive. This adaptability was one of a kind. For a species, adaptability is the key to whether it can grow and thrive. In this regard, the Ardipithecus had delivered a perfect score. I sat in my seat with great interest, following every opportunistic move of the Ardipithecus. Their experience grew richer, and their successes more frequent. It was very gratifying to watch. At the same time, I was pondering their next evolutionary path. They already had vague social relationships, strong adaptability, and had unlocked throwing skills. They even had a certain level of thinking. But these foundations, while enough for adaptability, and unlocking throwing, and possessing some thought, were only enough to give them the capital to survive and reproduce. To take the throne as the world's hegemon, they still lacked a few key elements. For example, the use of tools. As my thoughts were flowing, and countless ideas were popping into my head, suddenly, a large hand slammed onto my desk. You Chinese people, don't you think you're going too far? My expression froze. I looked up, and saw Che Taehyun standing there, fuming with rage. His pale face was flushed red with anger, looking like a spoiled child who had been wronged, with no intimidation factor whatsoever. I smiled and stood up from my seat. At 183 centimeters, I was a full head taller than him. Looking down at him, I asked, "What's with the attitude? Want to go around with me?" Che Taehyun only then noticed my burly physique. He was thin and small. He probably wouldn't win in a fight. Moreover, this was virtual space. Physical conflict between civilization observers was strictly prohibited. If he actually did something, he would be punished. But he was truly incensed. Those Ardipithecus were incessantly preying on the tigers. Previously, they were just bottom-tier creatures that tigers could hunt at will. Now, it was truly a case of a tiger down on the plains being bullied by dogs. He watched as the tiger casualties mounted from internal fighting, yet he refused to admit that his active intervention was a failure. So, he shifted all the blame onto the scavenging Ardipithecus, and came over to confront me. But now, facing me, who was a full head taller than him, his bravado faltered. He gritted his teeth, barely holding his ground. "It's all because of those monkeys your dragon country is observing. What kind of skill is it to just hide and sneak around? If they have the guts, have them face us head-on. What's the point of these sneak attacks?" I was momentarily stunned by his audacity. A second later, I burst out laughing from sheer anger. I pointed to my head. "Once we're out of here, I suggest you get this place checked. You think this is just some game? You want to talk about rules? This is survival. To survive, any means necessary is justified. You're trying to talk about rules with wild beasts? Have you lost your mind?" Then again, for someone who would forcibly change the ecology and habits of saber-toothed tigers, your brain is probably only this big. As I spoke, I raised my hand in an okay gesture, leaving only a tiny gap between my index finger and thumb. Che Taehyun's already red face instantly turned purple. He pointed at me for a long time, speechless. You, this is a personal attack. I'm going to report you." I rolled my eyes. "Oh, please. How did I attack you? You're so paranoid. Or did I just strike a nerve? Is there anything else? If you want to fight, I'm ready." Che Taehyun clenched his fists, but remembering that conflict would lead to punishment, he could only let go. He didn't dare fight, and he couldn't win an argument. "Why did you even come over here? Just to humiliate yourself?" I shook my head. Sitting back down, I waved him away. "If you're done, go back. Standing here serves no purpose except to highlight your incompetence and insecurity. Next time, remember to bring a red nose. It would fit your clown persona better." Che Taehyun was fuming with rage. He turned around and saw the observers from other countries watching, their eyes filled with mockery. He really did look like a clown, just as I had said. Fine. Just you wait. Opportunism isn't a real skill. Monkeys will always be monkeys. One day, the saber-toothed tigers will make them regret this." I let out a scoff. "Even your threats are so illogical. Can't you say something with a bit more weight?" Che Taehyun couldn't stand to stay another second. Under the mocking gazes of the crowd, he slunk back to his seat. Back at his seat, the more he thought, the angrier he got. He didn't dare do anything to me, so he could only seethe in silence. He watched the saber-toothed tigers on the screen, embroiled in conflict over mating rights. The death toll continued to rise. The playback speed was supposed to be fast, but to him every second felt like a year. The breeding season for most species lasts a week to a month. If they toughed it out, it would pass soon. But he couldn't take it. Every moment he saw tigers fighting to the death. Out of the thousands of tigers in this area, hundreds were lost in no time, and more tigers kept migrating in from other areas, making the scale of the conflict grow even larger. If this continued, the entire species would be severely crippled. All of this was caused by him, the civilization observer. Che Taehyun could already imagine how his compatriots back in K-country would curse him. His people took winning and losing very seriously. If they didn't achieve good results in international events, they would be reviled regardless of the reason. They would even resort to foul play just to win, believing that as long as they won, everything was fine. Now that he had played a top-tier card like the saber-toothed tiger into this disastrous state, he would surely become the target of public condemnation. He absolutely could not let things continue like this. The tigers were supposed to gather to attack the Ardipithecus, not to fight a civil war. He had to stop it. He took a deep breath, intending to use his second active intervention opportunity. He also opted for external aid, contacting the Earth Online Research Group in K-country. Team leader Kim Young-jun. Can you hear me? This is Che Taehyun. What should we do now? We can't let the Tigers' civil war continue. Back at the K-country research group, team leader Kim Young-jun received the contact. Immediately, upon establishing the link, he breathed a sigh of relief. Ever since the Tigers' civil war broke out, he had been extremely anxious. He was most afraid that Che Taehyun wouldn't realize the problem, and would just watch the tiger population plummet. Fortunately, he had reached out on his own. It's good that you chose external aid. We've discussed it. There's only one way to solve the problem now. Che Taehyun looked puzzled. Kim Young-jun continued, restore everything to its original state. Stop the tigers that are still heading this way. We can't allow them to gather on such a large scale anymore. The saber-tooth is currently one of the top apex predators. Their total population is in the tens of thousands. Last time we rashly modified the rules to make them gather in one place. This huge mess happened right at the start. We have to erase the last modification and let everything return to square one. Team leader Kim, do we really have to do this? Then we'll have wasted 2 intervention opportunities for nothing. We haven't gained anything, and many tigers have died. What's more frustrating is that the Ardipithecus are perfectly fine. Those Ardipithecus are getting bolder and bolder. They even dare to ambush the saber-toothed tigers. Che Taehyun's tone was full of resentment, especially after just being humiliated by me. He really couldn't swallow this. But Kim Young-jun had no other way. The drawbacks of gathering saber-toothed tigers on a large scale had already been exposed. This wasn't just a mating season problem. Beasts simply cannot live in large social groups. If 1,000 saber-toothed tigers gather together, it will only lead to endless conflict. This is an iron law of nature. Che Taehyun, we have no other choice. Kim Young-jun's tone was exceptionally stern. Team leader Kim, maybe we can find a middle ground. Che Taehyun suddenly had a bright idea. I still have 2 intervention opportunities left. Why don't we find a way to eliminate the Ardipithecus first, then reset? The saber-toothed tigers are strong enough anyway. Even without intervention opportunities later, their ranking won't be low. Hearing this, Kim Young-jun shook his head. It's very difficult to eliminate the Ardipithecus. We would at least have to wait for the mating season to pass. We don't know how many more tigers will die during that time. We can't afford any more losses. What if we intervene specifically regarding the mating season? Che Taehyun proposed another new idea. I observed that those Ardipithecus aren't affected by a mating season. Can we use them as a reference? And hide the saber-toothed tiger's mating season? Che Taehyun felt he had found the core of the problem. The large-scale conflict among the tigers was mainly because mating season had arrived. Female hormones rose, releasing mating signals, which stimulated the males to be aggressive. He thought that if he intervened with the females, the tiger's estrus could be suppressed to stop the fighting. Suppressing the female's estrus would end the conflict. Once the tigers have wiped out the Ardipithecus, we can just restore them to normal. The area where the Ardipithecus are has less and less prey. The tigers will clash with them sooner or later. Even if there are still some conflicts among the tigers during that time, he felt the loss would be worth the extinction of the Ardipithecus. As the leader of K-country's Earth Evolution Simulation Project Research Group, Kim Young-jun pondered for a long time. He still shook his head, feeling it was unwise. Can you guarantee the Ardipithecus will be wiped out? Those monkeys are getting more and more cunning. That must be related to the Chinese observer. That man isn't that simple. He won't just sit idly by. Che Taehyun thought of some unpleasant things, and his face suddenly darkened. Kim Young-jun continued, secondly, interfering with estrus is something I can't figure out, and I don't dare to do it. Estrus is the iron law of species reproduction. If we hide the estrus period, the females won't release mating signals, and the males won't have the urge to reproduce. Then reproduction will depend entirely on luck. That would be a devastating blow to the entire species. It's more serious than losing a few tigers. It could lead directly to extinction. After hearing this, Che Taehyun became even more confused. Then what's going on with the Ardipithecus? He had seen with his own eyes that they had no obvious mating season. Otherwise, they couldn't be so peaceful internally. We don't know exactly what was done to the Ardipithecus. Kim Young-jun shook his head. But I estimate, this is a side effect of his data modifications. Perhaps he tampered with their core physical data, causing their hormone levels to stay low. Kim Young-jun didn't take it seriously at all. In his view, only high-level organisms like humans can have hidden estrus. The Ardipithecus were just low-level creatures in the game. This must be a bug. Actually, your words just reminded me of something. This might directly wipe out the Ardipithecus group. We might not even need to lift a finger. The Ardipithecus might go extinct on their own due to breeding difficulties. Why waste time targeting them? Che Taehyun was completely enlightened by these words. Right, how is this an advantage? It's a fatal flaw. So that's how it is. Haha, I bet that guy hasn't discovered this bug at all. He's still watching our saber-toothed tiger's misfortune, completely unaware of the huge hole he's dug for himself. The more Che Taehyun thought about it, the better he felt. He turned to look in my direction. His mind was filled with the memory of my disdainful smile. Go ahead and laugh. When you realize the problem, let's see if you can still smile. Reproduction is a massive issue. A species that cannot reproduce will go extinct in 1 or 2 generations. It's just a matter of a few decades. By the time he notices that no new life has been born for a long time, it will be too late. By then, China will have no choice but to be disqualified. Everything will be over. Since we don't need to worry about the Ardipithecus, let's solve the tiger problem first. Che Taehyun felt much lighter and stopped obsessing over it. Meanwhile, on the other side, I had no interest in watching him. I was planning the next stage of the Ardipithecus development. As for the reproduction issue, I was never worried. Kim Young-jun and the others were half right. The lack of an obvious mating season was indeed a result of evolution. But in my view, this was a positive evolution. After the Ardipithecus learned to walk upright, childbirth became more difficult. Female Ardipithecus had to bond with males to survive. The concept of family began to sprout, but relying solely on offspring couldn't tie down the males for long. So, during the evolutionary process, the female's genes naturally chose to hide. The estrus period, weakening hormonal fluctuations. There were no longer obvious mating signs. From this point on, the Ardipithecus were slowly transforming into humans. It wasn't that the females didn't have a cycle, but like humans, they had ovulation periods, where their needs would increase. Even they themselves didn't know the specific time. If a male wanted to leave behind offspring, he couldn't just wait for a mating season. He had to stay by the female's side long-term. The concept of family became more and more solid. And without a clear mating window, the males didn't have to fight to the death for a mate. The internal environment became more peaceful instead. This evolution turned violent competition into stable relationships. The bond of the family concept became unbreakable. This was all brought about by upright walking. The childbirth crisis forced the genes to evolve this special ability. Kim Young-jun could never have imagined this. He simply didn't believe that low-level organisms could give rise to the human concept of family. This was a miracle that could not be replicated. The root cause lay in the Ardipithecus' continuously developing brain. Although their brains were still weak now, they were already far ahead of all other creatures of the same period. They already had simple thinking abilities. This was something other animals couldn't compare to. Even if the saber-toothed tigers could hide their estrus, their brains couldn't support the concept of family. They would still fight for food under the law of the jungle. The Ardipithecus seemed weak, and these seemingly fatal flaws were actually their most substantial assets for a comeback. From the moment they walked upright, a path leading straight to becoming the world's hegemon had already opened. K-Country made the decision for their second active intervention. Previously, they had implanted subjective thoughts into the brains of the tigers, guiding them to gather in a designated direction. Previously, they had implanted subjective thoughts into the brains of the tigers, guiding them to gather in a designated direction. Now that this logic had failed, they could only erase the implanted subconscious concept. After the subconscious was erased, all of the tigers' behaviors would return to instinct. Most of them couldn't remember their original habitats, and wouldn't bother traveling long distances back. They would just find a suitable place nearby to make their home. After all, they were top-tier predators on the continent, and could adapt to most ecological environments. K-Country's previous operations had already caused the tigers to migrate for nearly half a year. the vast majority, had gathered in the southern area where the Ardipithecus were active. Very few would return north. The two researchers couldn't judge whether the situation was good or bad. This was the limit of what they could do. They couldn't give each individual tiger separate migration orders. If they messed up, it would be even more chaotic. They could only hope that time would slowly restore everything to normal. The number of tigers around the Ardipithecus, originally in the thousands, had decreased by 100 or 200 due to civil war and predation. Of the remainder, some stayed and some left. In the short term, their numbers would still not be low. The K-country people were quite happy with this, believing these tigers could limit the Ardipithecus. After all, the tiger's basic combat power was there. The Ardipithecus could only kill individuals through sneak attacks. They couldn't threaten the entire group. The Ardipithecus were still ultimately prey for the tigers. Plus, they thought the Ardipithecus had reproductive issues, so they would be completely extinct in a few decades anyway. Victory would still be theirs. The intervention command was soon synchronized to the entire tiger population. On the continental map, the constantly moving red dots all came to a stop. It was as if they had suddenly been woken from sleepwalking. Many tigers stood stunned for a few seconds, looking completely bewildered, but they soon recovered their instincts as top-tier hunters. They immediately began to scout the surrounding environment for danger, and determined their ecological niche in the area. Any creature they could beat would become their food. Those they couldn't beat were mostly herbivores that wouldn't actively cause trouble, posing no threat to them. The only ones they needed to watch out for were their own kind and other top predators like the Dinofelis. Time on the screen continued to accelerate. Sure enough, most saber-toothed tigers chose to stay where they were. Only a tiny fraction returned to the north. The number of tigers around the Ardipithecus also dropped significantly. Over 300 died in mating season fights, and some were dragged away as food by the Ardipithecus. Others left due to food shortages. In the end, only 200 or 300 were left, split into several groups, becoming the undisputed absolute kings of this region. Absolute kings, undisputed. I soon noticed the anomaly with the saber-toothed tigers. As a civilization observer, I could clearly see the changes in the layout of the entire continent. Judging by the tigers' actions, I knew K-country must have done something. This was clearly an attempt to mitigate their losses. My original plan changed because of this. If the tiger population had kept growing, and the Ardipithecus didn't actively migrate, I would have had to intervene again, to forcibly accelerate their evolution speed, to counter the increasingly harsh ecology. The Ardipithecus were still very weak, and a large number of tigers could indeed threaten them. But since K-country couldn't handle it and made changes first, I naturally wouldn't do anything unnecessary. I had already thought out the evolutionary steps for the Ardipithecus. Following them step by step would be enough for them to take the throne as world hegemon in this version. Now that the external danger had decreased significantly, I wouldn't try to force growth. The next active intervention would have to wait for an opportunity. An opportunity created by the Ardipithecus themselves. Could take a few hundred years if it's fast, or thousands or even tens of thousands of years. But this version is a new frontier, with over 1 million years until it ends. I have enough patience to wait. In the screen, everything seemed to return to normal. The Ardipithecus in the caves gradually discovered that for those sharp-toothed enemies outside, internal conflict had decreased. The previous tactic of relying on sneak attacks to scavenge slowly became less effective. The saber-toothed tigers were no longer fighting on a large scale, so there were fewer opportunities for the Ardipithecus to pick up easy wins. In fact, because the tiger population was controlled at 200 or 300, the survival pressure on the Ardipithecus actually increased. The current tigers were used to social living. Several groups fought over territory, dividing the entire area into several domains, becoming the absolute overlords of this region. All animals became their food. Compared to the previous abnormal ecology of 1,000 tigers gathering, it was much better now, but the mortality rate for most species still soared. Animals learned various ways to hide, yet their numbers continued to decline. For the Ardipithecus, the most direct change was a massive reduction in meat availability, and a twofold increase in the danger of going out. Under high pressure, the Ardipithecus slowly found their own way to survive. The habit of eating meat was already etched into their bones. They couldn't give it up. Fortunately, they had previously learned cooperative hunting. Although the success rate was low, at least it was a new way out. They began to target medium and large-sized creatures. Since they couldn't outrun them, they used ambushes, surrounding prey while they were drinking or eating. Sometimes they succeeded, and, at other times, they failed. Sometimes they returned empty-handed. Slowly, they became more and more proficient, smashing with stones, hitting with clubs. They ran if they couldn't win, and scavenged whenever they could. If they encountered a lone saber-toothed tiger, they would even try their luck and test it out. They became the scavengers of this land, the hunters and the fugitives. They gave their all just to survive, eating whatever they could find, just to accumulate more nutrients and energy. Other creatures used their nutrients to grow muscle, adding points to strength and agility. Only the Ardipithecus genes chose an unprecedented path. They discarded everything else. Muscles just needed to be sufficient, stamina just enough to run, and body size just average. All of their energy was banked on the brain, which was almost useless in the early stages. This was a massive gamble. Brain development consumed extreme amounts of energy, with almost no return early on. Took up massive energy, without increasing the Ardipithecus combat power. While other creatures were evolving survival skills, the Ardipithecus still looked so weak. They could only endure the pressure from the tigers. If they could endure, they lived. If not, they died. Fortunately, the Ardipithecus endured. Even if they lived humbly, they were always developing and evolving. Until one day, a young Ardipithecus was born. He was a bit smarter than his parents. After many generations of evolution, his parents' brains were already much larger than the earlier Ardipithecus. This young one's brain was even larger, just crossing the 600 milliliters threshold. According to the general view in my previous life, a cranial capacity exceeding 600 milliliters allows one to be called human. From the initial 400 milliliters brain capacity to now breaking through 600 milliliters, the ancestral Ardipithecus had gone through many generations of evolution. And this evolutionary journey had been shortened by more than half because of my active intervention. Evolution is supposed to be a long process. It takes generations to continuously optimize the genes. From being able to only occasionally occupy trees, to learning to walk upright, took many generations. Until I actively intervened to unlock the throwing skill, the evolutionary timeline began to shorten significantly. According to natural laws, for the Ardipithecus to unlock the throwing skill, it would have taken at least hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. But I perfectly bypassed all of that. As the Ardipithecus could obtain more food, the conditions for further evolution were met. Like a technological explosion, once conditions are satisfied, results naturally emerge in a short period. Commonly speaking, the current Ardipithecus shouldn't be called Ardipithecus anymore. The stage of learning to walk upright and unlocking the throwing skill. According to the academic naming of my previous life, this stage of unlocking throwing skills should be called Australopithecus. And once brain capacity crosses the 600 milliliters threshold, they should be called Homo habilis. However, this is the Earth in my system. The Ardipithecus are the species I am observing. Even if they evolve, they still belong to the Ardipithecus lineage. In this version, the derivatives of the Ardipithecus are all bound to the dragon fruit. For convenience, I'll collectively refer to them as the 10 Ardipithecus groups. One newborn Ardipithecus was much smarter than his peers. This uniqueness was evident since he was small. He could quickly master the survival skills taught by his parents. He even began to lead the other apes. When surrounding prey, he could identify the weak points in the encirclement and signal other Ardipithecus to fill the gaps. When chased by beasts, he would command everyone to split up and run, to confuse the predators. When distributing food, he would try his best to ensure every ape got a share. Various signs showed that this newborn ape was extraordinary. As he gradually grew up, he gained more and more trust from his peers, and became the new leader. The rule of the saber-toothed tigers had lasted in this area for a long time. Because of the threat from the tigers, the Ardipithecus population hadn't grown much. From the original dozens, they had grown to 100 or 200 now. Their presence was very low. To survive, most of them hid in mountain caves, and rarely went out, fearing they would attract large predators. The tiger population in this region couldn't grow either, staying around 200. They hunted too much prey, making food scarce. The local ecology couldn't support more top predators. The numbers of other species were plummeting, but the Ardipithecus, through bravery and caution, mutual cooperation, and an omnivorous survival mode, quietly grew to over 100 members. After the new leader took office, the Ardipithecus operational capability leveled up. Several hunts were great successes, significantly increasing the tribe's survival rate. At noon, it was foraging time again. The new leader expanded the foraging team from 20 to 40 or 50. Each carried large clubs and stones, looking quite imposing. The Ardipithecus' primary target was no longer wild fruits, but small mammals, or lone, injured medium to large animals. The tigers belong to the Machaerodontidae subfamily. They cannot climb trees, so the mountain forest became the Ardipithecus' main activity area. Because several tiger groups prowled the grasslands, they rarely set foot there unless necessary. This time, they wandered around the forest, but found no food. The new leader stood at the forest's edge, reflecting on their walk through the woods. They found nothing. The new leader stood at the forest's edge, looking at the grasslands ahead. The forest was safe but had little food. The grasslands had plenty of food but were dangerous. The leader glanced at his companions behind him, and resolutely stepped onto the grasslands. Danger often comes with greater rewards. The tribe couldn't survive without food. Out of trust for the new leader, the Ardipithecus all followed him. Not long after stepping onto the grassland, they discovered movement ahead. This area was the territory of giant hyenas. Even the saber-toothed tigers wouldn't easily provoke them. Right now, the hyena pack had just killed a lone, juvenile Deinotherium. They were surrounding and enjoying their spoils, completely unaware of the quietly approaching Ardipithecus. The new leader's goal was clear: not to fight the giant hyenas head-on, but to steal half of the carcass. They even employed a rudimentary tactic. One group of Ardipithecus was responsible for distracting the hyenas, while the other group seized the chance to carry away the carcass, taking as much as they could. They had used this tactic several times, and had long established coordination. Part of the team brandished their large clubs, and approached the hyena pack, lifting their stones and aiming at the targets. In the overseas exclusive livestream, the audience was watching with great interest. The giant hyena pack on their side had just completed a brilliant team kill, taking down a massive juvenile Deinotherium. Recently, this area had been ravaged by the tigers, and the ecology was worsening. The purely carnivorous hyena pack had been starving for 2 days. Failing to find food would mean catastrophe. The overseas viewers were already on edge, not expecting the hyenas to have such good luck. To stumble upon a migrating elephant herd, they picked the one at the back of the herd, the small Deinotherium with legs too short to keep up. Over 30 giant hyenas swarmed it, and worked together to take the calf down. But they also paid a price. When the Deinotherium fell, it crushed a hyena that couldn't dodge in time. But overall, it was a massive win. This prey would sustain them for quite a while. The starving hyenas were busy eating, and no one cared about the occasional squabble. They are beasts. Fighting for food is normal. Just as the audience thought everything was going smoothly, no one noticed a group of Ardipithecus crouching and quietly approaching. The Ardipithecus leader crouched in half-meter-high grass, clutching a stone tightly in his hand. Suddenly, he let out a long howl, giving the command to attack. He raised his hand and threw the stone with full force. The stone, like a cannonball, accurately struck a giant hyena. He issued the attack order. He raised his hand and threw the stone with full force. The stone was like a projectile, striking a giant hyena squarely on the forehead. The hyena was burying its head in the food, defenseless. It was knocked out cold on the spot. Immediately following that, a barrage of stones rained down like a storm. The hyenas were stunned. At 20 meters, that was supposed to be a safe distance etched in their genes. How could they be under attack? Before they could grasp the situation, they saw nearly 50 Ardipithecus brandishing large clubs, charging over with thunderous shouts. The clubs swung through the air with a whistling sound. The hyenas had never seen such a formation. They were immediately cowed. In less than 5 seconds, they retreated far back, only able to watch helplessly as their hard-earned prey was surrounded by the Ardipithecus. The viewers in the Sakura country's livestream were dumbfounded. Even the saber-toothed tigers didn't dare enter the giant hyena's territory casually. Now, a pack of monkeys actually dared to barge in. What are they doing? Why are they stealing our things? Bastards! These monkeys observed by the dragon country are just thieves. They're asking for death. They'll definitely be torn to shreds by the giant hyenas. The Sakura country viewers were furious, their eyes turning red with anger. That Deinotherium was the only food the hyenas found in 2 days. How dare these monkeys? On the screen, the driven-back hyenas stopped after retreating 10 meters. This was their accustomed observation distance, convenient for charging or fleeing at any time. They watched helplessly as the Ardipithecus surrounded the Deinotherium carcass, and even started trying to drag it away. Only then did they realize that these monkeys were here to steal their food. The hyena king lowered his body, his gaze fierce. The pack was starving. How could they let their food be taken? With a low growl, the hyenas stepped forward in unison, preparing to charge. The Ardipithecus refused to back down either. They had faced off against saber-toothed tigers before. Hunger is more lethal than fear. As long as they could get food, they weren't afraid of anything. The Ardipithecus leader waved his large wooden club. The whistling wind made the giant hyenas a bit wary. But seeing the Ardipithecus desperately tearing at the carcass, breaking bones to grab meat, the hyena king could take it no longer. With steam snorting from its nostrils and bloodshot eyes, it crouched and charged straight out, aiming directly for the Ardipithecus leader. A showdown between kings. The hyena king jumped to bite the leader's neck. There was nowhere for him to hide from this. The leader swung his club like a madman. This was the fighting style passed down through generations. Anything that pounces gets a hit. With a thud, the hyena king took a solid hit. A cracked canine tooth flew right out. The tooth went flying. He was knocked to the ground instantly, whimpering in pain. A predator losing a fang sees its combat power plummet. He might even be exiled by the pack. The hyenas that were about to charge were stunned. The Ardipithecus seized the moment to push forward, striking the ground with their clubs in a show of force. On the other side, the food thieves had already succeeded. Following the openings torn by the hyenas, they ripped off massive chunks of meat, breaking off bone with the flesh. Seeing his companions succeed, the leader quickly retreated with the team. They vanished without a trace, leaving behind the stunned hyenas and the meager remains of the Deinotherium. The Ardipithecus won this food raid completely. Thieves, bandits, naked robbery, how hateful. They're cheating with clubs. What kind of animal fights like that? Dragon Country must apologize. This is illegal interference. When the tigers were ambushed by Ardipithecus before, the Sakura Country viewers were gloating. Now that it happened to them, they couldn't sit still anymore. The Dragon Country viewers rushed into the Sakura Country's livestream chat. What do you mean cheating? Natural rules don't say you can't. What are you shouting for? Didn't you say it's normal for beasts to steal food? Failing to protect food is just incompetence. What's the use of crying? Weren't you bragging about how powerful this hyena leader was? One swing and he was down. If it really came to a fight, your entire pack wouldn't stand a chance. Recently, the Dragon Country viewers have been feeling very confident. Seeing these people suffer was incredibly satisfying. Who would have thought that the monkeys hiding in trees to survive could be this powerful now? In the screen, the Ardipithecus carried the stolen meat, returning in a grand procession to their habitat cave. The scent attracted the others in the cave, and everyone gathered around. The stolen food was piled into a small mountain in the center of the cave. All the Ardipithecus looked at the leader with greedy eyes. The leader cooed twice, tore off a piece of meat and started chewing. With someone leading the way, the place instantly became lively. Everyone was shouting and jumping, feasting on the meat. It was nothing but joyful noise. After the leader finished his piece, he wiped his mouth. He preferred the marrow inside the bones. It was easier to chew than raw meat, sweet and full of nutrients. In the past, when there was no meat, they survived by picking up bones and sucking out marrow. He broke off a long rib. The break was full of marrow. He held it and sucked the middle section. For the parts he couldn't reach, he picked at them with his fingers. The remaining marrow in the center had to be smashed open to eat. The leader was very familiar with this process. It had to be smashed open to eat. The leader was quite adept. He took out his long-treasured stone from the corner. This was his special treasure for smashing bones. He had used it for many years. He placed the bone on the ground, raised the stone and smashed it down hard. It didn't break on the first try. He used all his strength for a second strike. With a bang, the bone snapped, but a sharp pain suddenly shot through his palm. The stone he'd used for years had actually split. Internal cracks had long accumulated, and this strike made it shatter. The sharp edge of a stone flake cut directly into his palm, slicing a wound about 2 or 3 centimeters long. It left a trail of blood. The leader was stunned. First, he felt regret over the shattered stone, but his attention was quickly pulled back by the pain in his palm. He picked up the sharp stone flake, staring at the sharp edge in a daze. The comments in the Dragon Country's livestream were scrolling fast. Luckily, it was just a small cut. If it had smashed his hand, he'd be in trouble. This is the new leader. Everyone's harvest has increased a lot since he took charge. Nothing can happen to him. Smashing with stones is dangerous. Even humans can hit their own hands, let alone an Ardipithecus. The viewers were discussing the scene of the injured ape. When the Ardipithecus aren't in danger, everyone loves watching their daily lives. After watching for so long, they've developed an emotional connection, a sort of farming sim satisfaction. They knew their stone-smashing methods were crude and prone to injury. After a brief moment of worry, they treated it as just a funny little episode. But at this moment, sitting in the virtual space, I was staring intently at the dazed leader on the screen, my eyes trembling slightly. The miracle I've been waiting for seems to be right before my eyes. I held my breath, fearing my breathing would disturb him. I recognized his gaze. It was the look of deep thought, confusion mixed with curiosity. This is exactly what I wanted. All great achievements in the world originate from initial confusion and doubt. Because they don't understand, they want to find out. This is the instinct for seeking knowledge, and even more, the cornerstone of human civilization. I was full of anticipation. What is the Ardipithecus? Feeling sharpness for the first time. Thinking right now? And what will he do next? Such a coincidence might not happen again for decades. It's a perfect opportunity. Once missed, I don't know how long I'd have to wait. If I really can't wait, I'd have to use an active intervention to force it forward. But I only have 2 interventions left, and I want to save them for more critical points. So, the leader's next step will directly decide the fate of the whole tribe. On the screen, his palm was hurting badly. Thick skin couldn't stop the sharpness of the stone flake. The pain was intense. His thick hide was no match for the stone's sharp edge. If any other creature encountered something that could hurt them, their first reaction would be to flee and stay far away from it in the future. He initially wanted to avoid it too, but another subconscious thought passed down through generations emerged. Dangerous places often have greater rewards. Back then, it was by facing the tigers that they learned the throwing skill and ate meat for the first time. The concept of risk and reward was already etched into their bones. So he didn't run. Instead, he moved closer to observe. After determining the flake wouldn't hurt him on its own, an unprecedented idea emerged. He picked up the flake stained with his own blood, and gestured toward the wound on his palm, confirming this was what had cut him. He tried touching the sharp edge of the flake. A light touch felt like nothing, but when he applied pressure, his fingertip was sliced. He bared his teeth in pain and cried out, but his eyes were incredibly bright. The companions around him were all buried in their food. Only a young ape couldn't tear through a piece of skin-covered meat. Circling around in frustration, the leader walked over and took the meat. He aimed the sharp side of the flake at the skin, and sliced down hard. The skin that the young ape couldn't tear for the longest time was sliced open instantly. Applying force along the cut, the entire piece of meat was split in two. The leader howled with joy, wanting to share this miracle with his companions. At the same time, an even crazier idea flashed through his mind. As night fell in the Ardipithecus cave, today's prey had been eaten clean by the tribe. The satiated apes were all sound asleep. In this era, sleeping on a full stomach is a rare blessing. Most of the time they have to sleep hungry. The leader, however, felt no sleepiness. His attention was entirely consumed by the broken stone in his hand. After eating, he sat alone at the cave entrance, flipping the stone flake over and over. He was the smartest Ardipithecus in the tribe, with a brain capacity larger than any of his peers. His mind was racing, pondering. From time to time, he gestured with the flake toward his palm and his chest. This thing can cut skin, can slice meat. Can it also slice open the bodies of other animals? Just like the sharp claws of the continent's top predators. Maybe even sharper than claws, and pointier than fangs. This was destined to be a sleepless night. The next day, the leader didn't go hunting immediately. He took his companions to the riverbank in the forest. There were many cobbles of suitable size in the riverbed. The stones in the forest were either too big or too small. This was already a place with many suitably sized cobbles. The stones in the forest were either too big or too small. This was already where they often came to gather stones and water. As soon as the dozens of Ardipithecus arrived, they saw the leader dive into the river and bend over to grope along the riverbed. The stone that cut his palm was one often used to smash bones. He felt that only stones with a similar shape could produce sharp flakes. After a while, the leader fished out a stone with a crack. It was almost identical to the one in his memory. He held it up happily to show off to his companions. The others, remembering the scene of the leader slicing meat with a stone yesterday, approached out of curiosity. One by one, more and more apes gathered, driven purely by a follow-the-crowd curiosity. The leader pulled out another larger, smoother stone without any cracks. He had thought about it all night. The flake was made by smashing. If you smash it hard and it cracks, the edge will become sharp, and it can easily slice skin and flesh. Now he was going to replicate that process. He placed the cracked stone on the ground, raised the round stone and smashed it down hard. Clang, clang, clang. The crisp sounds of striking echoed. The surrounding Ardipithecus watched him with confusion. After smashing for nearly 10 minutes, just as the leader was about to doubt his method, the struck stone finally split along the crack into several pieces. It worked. The leader's eyes lit up. He put down the hammer stone. The stone on the ground had split into three. The fractured edges were exceptionally sharp. He picked up one of the thin stone flakes. This was it, exactly like the one that cut his palm yesterday. He also discovered that only the thin flake edges were sharp enough. Thick stone chunks didn't work at all. The leader hooted and screeched with joy. Replicating the stone flake meant the tribe could have large quantities of this sharp weapon to use for hunting. The Ardipithecus who had seen the flake's power cheered along. Others were still completely baffled. The leader directly took the flake and sliced his own fingertip. His face scrunched up in pain, but he still held up his bleeding finger to show his companions, proving the flake's sharpness. Another ape took the flake and also tried slicing his own finger. The skin was sliced open. Their painful shrieks only fueled the curiosity of the other Ardipithecus. They snatched up stone flakes and began slicing their own hands, howling in pain while jumping up and down in excitement. The Dragon Country audience watching the broadcast was dumbfounded. Who would have thought that instead of looking for food, the tribe would gather by the river to collectively slice their hands? They were screaming in pain yet jumping for joy. What on earth are they doing? Soon someone noticed something unusual in the heavenly eye footage. The Ardipithecus leader took back a stone flake and picked up a hammer stone, mimicking the striking motion. He was showing his companions how to make these tools. They were here today to mass-produce these sharp stone flakes. All the Ardipithecus quickly understood the leader's intention. They waded into the riverbed to find stones and began striking them. The clatter of stones echoed alongside the strange cries of the apes. The sound traveled far. No one noticed the heavy, muffled footsteps in the distance, steadily approaching the riverbed. The viewers in the domestic livestream were completely stunned. The Ardipithecus were actually using stones to shape other stones. This shock was like waking up at night to see your cat sharpening a knife. What kind of animal possesses such awareness? Many began to wonder, did the civilization observer intervene again? But the system hadn't given any notification. By the river, the leader was focused on napping a stone. Worrying it would be hard to grip, he was carefully trimming a protruding edge. He struck it once with precision, and a large piece of stone skin fell away. Panicked, he quickly picked it up to inspect it, only to find it was a blessing in disguise. The stone hadn't shattered. Instead, both sides had become incredibly sharp. It had taken on a teardrop shape, wide at the top and narrow at the bottom. The tip was exceptionally pointed. He gripped it and swung it twice. It felt perfect for both stabbing and slashing. He was instantly overjoyed. He immediately called the others over to show off the tool, gesturing for everyone to strike their stones into this shape. Before long, many Ardipithecus had their own stone tools. Some mischievous ones used them to scratch their companions, earning themselves a swift beating on the spot. The leader didn't bother to intervene. He was cradling his perfect hand axe, unable to put it down. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from the nearby woods. A large creature was approaching. The apes stopped what they were doing immediately, turning their gaze toward the forest. The leader gripped his hand axe tightly. This was their only real weapon now. Sure enough, 7 Civitherium gradually emerged from the trees. They stood over 2.2 meters at the shoulder, over 3 meters long, and weighed 1.5 tons with massive, flat ossicones on their heads. They were herbivorous members of the giraffe family. This was their first time entering this mountain forest, having migrated here following the shifting vegetation. Seeing the Ardipithecus by the river, they didn't take these small creatures seriously at all. After all, size was everything in nature. A herd of Civitherium would give even top predators pause. They were fiercely territorial, especially when it came to water sources. The leading Civitherium immediately lowered its head, displaying its massive horns as a warning. This place is ours. Get out. This belongs to us. Get lost. The Yenxia audience was furious as they watched the bullet chat. These land-grabbing Civitherium happened to be the species observed by Vanna. Years ago, Vanna had cast greedy eyes on Yenxia's borders. Now, even the species they observed were coming to provoke them. With old and new grudges combined, who could stand this? Opening Vanna's livestream, the screen was filled with smug, gloating comments. These monkeys Yenxia is watching are way too weak. Drive them out quickly. They don't deserve to be here. The people of Yenxia must be dying of rage. The viewers' teeth itched with anger, but nature was governed by survival of the fittest. Civitherium were even larger than saber-toothed tigers. The Ardipithecus were simply no match for them. The leading Civitherium took an aggressive stance. With its massive frame and weight, a single collision could send an Ardipithecus flying. The apes instinctively took a step back. They had never seen such a herd of giant beasts. Their survival instinct flickered. Seeing this, the Civitherium pressed forward as a group, intending to drive the apes away and monopolize the water. But the Ardipithecus were unwilling to leave. This place didn't just have water. The stones on the riverbed were the only material for their tools. To avoid predators, they had been running for tens of thousands of years. This time they didn't want to run. The ape's refusal to move completely enraged the Civitherium. One Civitherium lowered its head and charged, aiming its massive horns directly at the leader. The other Ardipithecus scattered, but the leader couldn't dodge in time. He could only grab the Civitherium's horn with all his might. He was lifted right off the ground, dangling from the horn and being tossed painfully. Fear was instantly overridden by rage. The leader let out a roar, raising the stone tool in his hand, and stabbing it violently into the Civitherium's neck. With a squelch, the throat was sliced wide open. Blood sprayed everywhere. The leader took the chance to climb onto the beast's back, hacking frantically with his stone tool. The other apes saw their leader in danger. Instead of fleeing, they brandished their stone flakes and rushed in to help. The remaining Civitherium were about to move forward. When they saw the bloody, horrific state of their companion, they hesitated instantly. Before they could react, countless stones were hurled toward them. This was a riverbed. There were stones everywhere. The Ardipithecus had an inexhaustible supply of ammunition. The pelting stones made the Civitherium cry out in pain. The Civitherium that had charged first was in an even worse state. 3 apes were on its back, slashing wildly, while 4 or 5 others blocked its escape route. In less than 2 minutes, the blood loss was too much. It collapsed stiffly by the riverbank, his body riddled with wounds. The remaining 6 Civitherium looked at the mangled body, completely stunned. They couldn't comprehend how these small monkeys without fangs or claws could take down a multi-ton giant in 2 minutes. They understood even less why they were being hurt from a distance. More terrifyingly, the whites of the ape's eyes were incredibly distinct. All the Ardipithecus were staring fixedly at them. In the wild, a stare equals a target lock. This unknown fear gripped them directly. When one Ardipithecus took a step forward, The Civatherium herd was scared out of their wits. They turned and fled backward like madmen. Only then did they realize that this forest housed a terrifying presence they couldn't provoke. The Dragon Country's exclusive livestream was silent for a moment. No one expected the seemingly weak Ardipithecus to be able to hunt in a head-on confrontation, prey several times larger than themselves. In the Heavenly Eye footage, the Civatherium's massive corpse lay by the riverbed, the bloodstains serving as ironclad proof of the fact. The Dragon Country audience was completely shocked. The bullet chat was flying. Someone asked, when did the Ardipithecus become so strong? Others realized that they won because of those napped stone flakes. Previously, they wondered why the apes were banging stones all day. Now they finally understood. Is this what it means to use tools? Before, everyone joked that the apes napping stones was like seeing your cat sharpen a knife at midnight. Now that joke had come true. The cat really can use a knife. The audience felt both the absurdity and the thrill of the discovery. In the special research group for Earth Online, the leader, Qin Lao, felt his scalp go numb. His face was a mask of disbelief. He pondered for a long time but couldn't quite fathom how this happened. Perhaps the impact of my active intervention is far more complex than we imagined. I modified the Ardipithecus physical data, giving them the skill to throw. I thought that was exaggerated enough, but it seems throwing was just the beginning. From throwing stones to napping them, it looks ordinary, but the connection is profound. I bound the Ardipithecus to stones. Could this current situation also be within my predictions? These were still just speculations. What confused Qin Lao even more was, how did the Ardipithecus think to develop multiple uses for stones? This wasn't just a coincidence from a cut palm. Opportunities are everywhere. The key is whether one can seize that fleeting moment of inspiration. Qin Lao was certain that, if the same thing happened to any other creature, they would never investigate the connection behind it, because they simply don't possess the capacity to think. In other words, could it be that they don't possess the capacity to think? In other words, could it be that the brains of these Ardipithecus are special? What kind of monster did I choose? Qin Lao was completely lost in thought. Every single thing happening with the Ardipithecus couldn't be explained by conventional theories of nature. As Qin Lao investigated, he felt an eerie, skin-crawling sensation, though he couldn't pinpoint its source. In short, these seemingly weak creatures were definitely not simple. In the exclusive Anan Country livestream, there were only voices of disbelief. They had seen with their own eyes the Civatherium herd being defeated head-on by the apes. The remaining 6 Civatherium were terrified by the Ardipithecus actions and fled in panic. This was just too ridiculous. Civatherium were among the top 5 largest animals on the continent. According to the logic of Earth Online, shouldn't size and strength determine everything? Even if they couldn't beat a top predator like a saber-toothed tiger, how could they be killed and counterattacked by weak apes? They were even scared out of their wits and fled. The mountains? How could this game be played this way? While the Anan audience was dumbstruck, a large number of Dragon Country viewers flooded into their livestream. The bullet chat was full of jokes. Some said, thanks to our Anan bros for the big meal. Others said the Civatherium invaded the apes' riverbed, and the apes were forced to act in self-defense. Another joke was that, on this day, Anan once again remembered the fear of being dominated. The Dragon Country viewers didn't think too much. They joked and mocked as they pleased. Otherwise, wouldn't the Ardipithecus' desperate fight have been for nothing? The Anan audience had grievances they couldn't voice. Having lost, they could only swallow their pride. Now, even their threats sounded like whining. On the Dragon Countryside, the atmosphere was festive. The Ardipithecus in the footage were also incredibly happy. This was the first time they had hunted such a massive prey. They all gathered around the Civatherium, hooting joyfully. The leader's bravery just now was witnessed by all, and his status became even more secure. After resting enough, the leader stood up and eagerly approached the Civatherium carcass. Such a large kill could feed the entire tribe for a day or two. No need to worry about how to move the whole thing. Just slice it up with stone flakes and carry it back in pieces. They were already familiar with this work. Ever since the first time they used a flake to cut meat, they knew this sharp thing could save them a lot of effort. This was the dawn of tool use. With their current intelligence, they could fully understand its utility. All the Ardipithecus took their own napped flakes and approached to begin butchering the remains of the Civatherium. During the process, it wasn't that no other creatures were attracted by the scent, wanting to share the meal. Butchering the remains of the Civatherium. During the process, it wasn't that no other creatures were attracted by the scent, wanting to share the meal. Whether it was small mammals, prehistoric snakes, or even prehistoric crocodiles from the river, they were all driven away by the Ardipithecus. With dozens of Ardipithecus gathered here, standing on a riverbed full of pebbles, who would dare show their face? They would immediately be met with dozens of stones thrown from a distance. They could just bend over and pick up a stone. There was no limit to their ammunition. The scene was practically a barrage of long-range fire. No creature could withstand such a stone assault. It was pure suicide to try. A simple stone had caused a cataclysmic shift in the Ardipithecus ecological niche. From this moment on, in this mountain forest, no creature could threaten a group of Ardipithecus. However, the forest terrain was limited, and prey was scarce. Couldn't hold them forever. They were destined to leave the shelter of the woods for the vast grasslands. That was the true stage for species dominance. The cave where they lived was exceptionally lively today. The group had carried the massive Civatherium carcass back to the cave. The eyes of the females who stayed behind lit up. This wasn't just food to fill their bellies. It was a symbol of power. The Ardipithecus today were no longer the same creatures that lived in fear of other animals. The tribe had been reborn, capable of hunting behemoths several times their size. With the first success came the second, and the third. From now on, the times they went hungry would grow fewer. Having ample food and sufficient combat power meant the tribe had earned the right to reproduce and expand. After eating their fill, the Ardipithecus became idle. In the past, they were so hungry they could only think of food. Even with all their effort, they couldn't always gather enough for the whole tribe. They often went to sleep hungry, with no time to think of anything else. Now, with full stomachs, they felt a sense of emptiness. A group of apes sat in the cave, not knowing what to do next. The leader pulled out that blood-stained hand axe, the one he had created by accident. It had been incredibly useful against the Civatherium. Its teardrop shape could stab with the tip, slash with the sides, and was easy to grip at the base. It was much better than the thin stone flakes, which only sliced meat and broke easily. He looked at the two very different stones, wondering to himself, why are stones made by striking so completely different? Unable to find an answer, he simply started experimenting. He took a stone brought back from the riverbed and began striking it, trying to replicate that perfect hand axe. Other idle Ardipithecus noticed the leader's actions and gathered around out of curiosity. As they watched, they too found stones and began striking them. The behavior spread rapidly. Even the females who had never made flakes joined in. It looked like a massive technical exchange conference. Those who couldn't figure it out leaned in to observe the successful ones. Learning by imitation, more and more Ardipithecus learned the method of napping stones. A rhythmic clatter filled the cave, interspersed with the excited hoots of the apes. Clearly, many had successfully napped sharp flakes. The Ardipithecus leader hadn't made a second perfect hand axe yet, but he had discovered a pattern. Striking hard wasn't always effective. Striking lightly with smaller movements resulted in smaller flakes, and the stone in his hand became more symmetrical. Maybe then he could make the hand axe he wanted. The other apes didn't have as much patience. They kept the usable pieces from their heavy strikes, and tossed the useless ones aside to be used later as projectiles. I observed the stone tools they were creating, and categorized them into three types based on use. Thin flakes with sharp edges, used for skinning and butchering food, which I called scrapers. Irregular stones with pointed corners, could drill holes and stab prey, which were borers. Then there were the thick, heavy stones, sharp enough to chop branches and smash bones, which I called choppers. These three types of stone tools looked ordinary, but they could satisfy the Ardipithecus' daily needs. I recorded all of this in detail. In my eyes, these weren't just ordinary stones. They were the Ardipithecus' first attempt to use external objects to reshape their world. They were the Ardipithecus' mark of shifting from adapting to nature to transforming it. It was the spark of civilization. The use of stones gave the Ardipithecus an epic-making upgrade. Other creatures had their own evolutionary paths for survival. Some invested in speed, relying on running to escape predators, like horses, sheep, and deer. Others invested in combat power, with muscles, fangs, and claws, becoming top predators, like the various saber-toothed cats. Some invested in size, growing to weigh several tons, like elephants and rhinos. Others evolved in smaller ways, even developing venom skills. The Ardipithecus, however, was none of these. They weren't fast, they weren't strong, they had no fangs or claws, and their size was mediocre. They seemed useless in every way, yet they had naturally taken an unprecedented path. Without natural weapons, the stone flakes they napped were sharper than the fangs. Predators had spent hundreds of thousands of years evolving. After the birth of many stone tools, the Ardipithecus directly transitioned from scavengers to predators. They directly transitioned from scavengers to predators. Time in the heavenly eye flowed rapidly. The Ardipithecus soon grew accustomed to life with stone tools. The wooden clubs they used to pick up could now be shaved smooth and balanced with scrapers. With choppers, they didn't have to rely on luck to find a suitable branch. They could cut and shape them themselves. Every Ardipithecus could own a perfect wooden club. The tribe's combat power underwent a qualitative leap. With the addition of external tools, the Ardipithecus' ambition grew. Their increasingly developed brains were no longer satisfied with the current food supply. They decided to head toward the wider world, the savannah. In the past, when they went to the savannah, they were scavengers looking for leftover carcasses. Now they were going to hunt, to prove their ecological niche, and stand on higher ground. It was the height of summer. The savannah had no tree shade, and the scorching sun had turned the grass parched. Over 40 Ardipithecus descended from the mountain in a grand procession, each holding a well-crafted wooden club and sharp stone tools. The leader carried his unique, exquisite hand axe, walking at the very front. This kind of hand axe was too difficult to replicate, to be common among the tribe. This was the territory of a pride of 20 Meganterian cats. 2 patrolling saber-tooths soon noticed the group of intruders. The research leader of a certain country, Jining Jun, watched the screen, his brow furrowed. What is going on? Why are there still so many of these monkeys? He had previously predicted that the Ardipithecus data had been altered to remove their estrus period, meaning they would eventually go extinct. He hadn't expected that, after all this time, the tribe would still be so large. He had been focusing on the saber-toothed tigers lately, and hadn't paid attention to the apes. Now he was truly shocked. Moreover, the apes used to take a detour when they saw a saber-tooth. Now they were marching directly into their territory. Could a conflict be about to break out? In the footage, the 2 saber-toothed tigers had long considered the Ardipithecus as walking meat. Their stomachs were growling with hunger. Instead of going back to the pride to report, they used the cover of the tall grass to creep toward the Ardipithecus. The Ardipithecus walked upright, giving them a higher line of sight. The leader spotted the movement in the grass at a glance, and immediately raised his hand to signal. Those who came out to hunt were all experienced veterans. They understood the signal instantly. They all gripped their wooden clubs, prepared the stones they would use for throwing, and crouched for an ambush. Surprise attacks and ambushes, these were essential hunting skills. Every adult Meganterian had to learn. The saber-toothed tigers in this region were social, and had learned to cooperate, flanking their prey from 2 sides. They drew closer and closer to the Ardipithecus. Flanking their prey from 2 sides, they drew closer and closer to the Ardipithecus. Both sides moved toward each other, the distance between them steadily closing. The next second, the 2 saber-toothed tigers accelerated into a fierce charge. But just as they burst from the tall grass, countless stones rained down upon them. The Ardipithecus had been watching their every move. The moment the ambush began, they hurled their stone flakes. The dense hail of stones instantly broke the saber-toothed tiger's momentum. Even more incredible, the group of Ardipithecus didn't flee. Instead, they charged toward the cats in a large pack. The tables turned in an instant. The saber-toothed tigers, once the predators, were now the prey targeted by the Ardipithecus. Dozens of Ardipithecus swung their heavy wooden clubs, charging forward with ferocious bellows. The 2 saber-toothed tigers felt a deep, instinctive dread. They turned and fled immediately. Their burst of speed was staggering, leaving the Ardipithecus tribe in the dust in no time. Saber-toothed cats weren't built for long-distance running. Their anatomy was designed for explosive ambushes. But even their weak point was much faster than the Ardipithecus pace. The gap between them grew wider and wider. Some Ardipithecus grew desperate, throwing their sharp stone flakes at the retreating cats. But the distance was too great. The flakes couldn't even penetrate the tiger's skin. They were just a stinging nuisance. The saber-toothed tigers ran even faster. The Ardipithecus leader grew anxious, raising his hand and hurling his heavy wooden club. The club struck one cat with precision, but it only stumbled for a moment before disappearing from sight. The tribe could only watch helplessly as their prey escaped. The commotion threatened to attract more trouble. The Ardipithecus had no choice but to retreat. The international audience was stunned, unable to believe they saw saber-tooths being chased by apes. The screen was filled with disbelief. The domestic audience, however, was lamenting the loss. They were just a hair's breadth away from catching their prey. The tribe members themselves were frustrated, their stomachs still growling with hunger. Savannah prey was either too strong or too fast. After a day of toil, they had nothing to show for it. Eventually, they had to return to the mountains, to hunt small and medium mammals just to survive. That night, the Ardipithecus leader sat before the cave, staring at the stone axe in his hand, lost in thought. The axe and the clubs were sharp enough, but they couldn't reach the distant prey. Throwing stones was too weak. It was impossible to deliver a lethal blow. A thought suddenly sparked in his mind. If only his arms were a little longer, long enough to reach the prey from a distance, then the hunt would surely be successful. Yesterday's hunt had failed, entirely because of the lack of range. The idea kept swirling in his head. If only my arms could be longer. But even with his 600 milliliters brain, this specific thought persisted. If only my arms could be longer. But with his current brain capacity, he couldn't fathom how to actually lengthen an arm, nor could he visualize what a longer arm would look like. He could only fall asleep with his confusion. The next day, the Ardipithecus took their weapons back to the savannah. They didn't dare challenge the fierce predators this time, choosing instead to target herbivores. Even if they failed, there wouldn't be casualties. Learning from yesterday's lesson, they planned to use an ambush to surround the prey. Dozens of Ardipithecus, armed with wooden clubs, cautiously spread out to form a perimeter. They deliberately suppressed their footsteps, but things didn't go as planned. One Ardipithecus couldn't contain its impulse and startled the grass. Before the circle could close, the prey bolted. The apes threw a few stones in frustration, only to realize they had to find a new target. The second time they targeted a Hipparion. This creature was a legendary runner, ranking among the fastest of the herbivores. As expected, the second attempt also failed, but the tribe didn't give up. They soon set their sights on a third target, a lone Civitherium. This Civitherium was incredibly bold. While other prey would have run at the sight of Ardipithecus, it continued to graze leisurely. It clearly didn't consider these apes a threat. In its eyes, at a distance of dozens of meters, not even a top predator could catch it, let alone these non-threatening Ardipithecus. As long as they didn't get too close, it had no intention of running within 10 meters. The Ardipithecus slowly tightened their circle. Only when they reached a distance of about 15 meters, did the Civitherium finally become alert. It lowered its body, preparing to flee. This was the closest they had ever been to their prey. The Ardipithecus leader was incredibly excited. The leader gave the signal to strike. Pulling back his arm like a biological slingshot, he hurled a stone. The distance of 15 meters was extremely close. The stone flew, like a meteor, striking the Civitherium squarely in the belly. The force was concentrated and devastating. A rain of stones immediately followed. The beast was instantly crippled by the pain and lost its ability to run. Collapsed to the ground. The leader was the first to charge in, efficiently finishing it off with his perfect hand axe. Dark red blood pooled on the ground. This was the first time since entering the savannah that they had successfully hunted as predators. All the Ardipithecus roared and cheered with joy. The leader wiped his blood-stained hand axe on his fur. He was about to call his companions to carry the prey back to the cave, when he suddenly noticed something. Embedded in the Civitherium's remains was a pointed stone flake. It was unclear which Ardipithecus had thrown it in a moment of desperation. The sharp end was firmly wedged into the beast's carcass. It was a pointed stone tool. It was unclear which tribe member had thrown it in their excitement. The sharp end was deeply embedded in the flesh, unlike the other stones that had simply bounced off. After several days of testing the savannah, the Ardipithecus finally understood their ecological niche. They weren't the top predators of the savannah, but when they worked together, even a pride of saber-tooths wouldn't dare provoke them. As long as the group moved as one, their safety was greatly increased. With the experience from hunting the Civitherium, the Ardipithecus slowly mastered the rules of survival on the savannah. They knew which creatures were highly alert, and which were easier to kill. Their silhouettes began to appear more frequently across the plains. However, not every hunt was successful. Foolish prey was rare, and they couldn't catch the smarter ones. Whether they caught anything depended largely on luck. Still, it was far better than their previous days of scavenging. They could eat meat every few days now. But danger was always present. Some bolder saber-toothed tigers would test the tribe if they saw them. Casualties among the Ardipithecus were inevitable. Normally, they tried to bypass the saber-toothed territories. Aside from the cats, packs of giant hyenas were also a major threat. The two groups had once had a large-scale conflict over a carcass. A single giant hyena weighed over 300 kilograms, making them much larger than the Ardipithecus. Several tribe members were lost in that clash, though they managed to hack several hyenas to death with stone flakes. Only species with such strong social bonds would engage in such a massive deathmatch. Despite the heavy price, the Ardipithecus finally gained a foothold on the savannah. The audience watching the heavenly I couldn't believe it. The once weak Ardipithecus had actually survived in the brutal competition of the savannah. As night fell, bloody animal bones were piled at the cave entrance. They had caught prey again today. The whole group had enjoyed a feast. After eating, they began to busy themselves napping stone tools. Tools would dull or break after use. New ones had to be made every day. Some Ardipithecus used stone tools to trim wooden clubs. Club making was simple. One could learn it after watching a few times. This knowledge was passed down through generations. The leader was using a sharp stone flake to shave a club. He misjudged the angle, and the stone flake got stuck in the wood. When he pulled it out, it left a deep notch in the club. The leader stared at it for dozens of seconds, then suddenly flipped the stone flake over and wedged it into that notch. The sharp end pointed outward. The first primitive stone-tipped spear was born. By combining a stone tool with a wooden club, one could extend their attack range. Even if the arm wasn't long enough, a stone-tipped club could be thrown to pierce directly into the prey's body. Combining stone and wood, this was a truly magnificent discovery. The Ardipithecus had attempted many hunts before, most of which ended in failure. The core problem was twofold. First, the Ardipithecus couldn't outrun the specialized sprinters of the savannah. This was a physiological gap that was hard to fix. Second, the attack range was too short. Their stone tools were sharp enough, even more lethal than a saber-tooth's fangs. But sharpness meant nothing if you couldn't reach the prey. Throwing stones didn't deal enough damage. Only a pointed stone tool had a chance to pierce skin and flesh, and even then it relied entirely on luck. The trajectory was uncontrolled. The point had to hit exactly, with enough force. Hunting was purely at the mercy of fate. Good luck with a slow target meant a kill. Bad luck meant watching the prey run away. Now, this problem had been accidentally solved. The Ardipithecus leader had found a new direction. Holding the spear created by chance, a new idea took hold. If a stone flake on a club made a spear, what about a sharp stone on a long wooden pole? He then found a long, straight branch. Using a teardrop-shaped hand axe, he notched the tip, wedged the stone tool inside, with the sharp point facing up. An epic-making new invention was born. It was the spear. The range was long enough, and it was sharp enough. The leader roared while holding the spear, summoning the rest of the tribe. The Ardipithecus crowded around, staring at this strange object. With faces full of confusion, the leader then demonstrated its use. Gripping the middle of the spear, he lunged forward. Using another Ardipithecus as a reference, he could touch the target from 2 meters away. The Ardipithecus brain had evolved significantly. They understood instantly. This thing directly solved the issue of short attack range. Previously, they had to be right next to the prey to hurt it, allowing the prey to counterattack. Even herbivores could gore or kick an Ardipithecus, to say nothing of beasts like saber-tooths, which could pin an ape down with a single pounce. Now, with the spear, their reach was extended. The Ardipithecus could hit the prey, but the prey couldn't touch them. The advantage was completely reversed. Not only that, the leader had another demonstration. He turned and took a throwing stance toward the distance. Twisting his waist, drawing his arm back to the limit, he exerted sudden force. With a whistle, the spear sliced through the air. Unlike throwing a stone, the spear's flight path was more controlled, its accuracy higher. It also flew much farther than a stone, landing straight in the distant soil. If this hit, it landed straight in the distant soil. If this hit a piece of prey, it would cause severe injury immediately. The Ardipithecus were stunned. This was a discovery that could change the fate of their tribe. All the Ardipithecus grew excited. The leader ran to retrieve the spear. As soon as he brought it back, the tribe's best stone thrower stepped forward, his eyes full of longing. He had always been responsible for stone throwing. He was experienced, and his arms were thicker. Mimicking the leader, he took the stance, channeling all his strength into the spear, and threw it with all his might. The spear flew even farther and faster, plunging straight into the ground at a 90-degree angle. The wooden end was still vibrating slightly. The lethality was obvious. The birth of the spear opened up a whole new world for the Ardipithecus. Unexpectedly, a new problem soon surfaced. The spear relied on a notch in the wood to hold the stone tool. The method was simple, but the connection was weak. The stone would fall off after a few uses. How to secure it became the new challenge. This time, it wasn't just the leader looking for a solution. The entire tribe was pondering. The Ardipithecus had all learned how to make spears. The next day, they entered the forest together to find suitable branches. A branch had to be over a meter long. Combined with arm span, it kept beasts at bay. It also had to be straight. Otherwise, it wouldn't fly straight when thrown. These were lessons learned through hard practice. With the help of choppers, the efficiency of finding branches increased significantly. They could just chop down a suitable one. They then selected stone tools with clear points to serve as spearheads. Even if the resulting spears looked strange, as long as the point was sharp and the pole was long, it was considered a qualified weapon. Then one Ardipithecus spotted thin vines on the ground, and had a sudden idea. Could the vines be used to tie the stone and the wood together? He tried wrapping it several times and finally succeeded. It was much more secure than just wedging it in a notch. Even with vigorous shaking, it didn't come loose. This method quickly spread through the tribe. The leader simply combined the notch with the vine binding. The perfect spear was now fully realized. Thin vines weren't always easy to find, but the Ardipithecus thinking was now wide open. Anything soft, long, and flexible could be a substitute. Some used plant roots, others used animal tendons, and some even used dry grass. If grass was too brittle, they would twist several strands together. And so, grass rope was born. This was practically a mini-technological explosion. Once that critical step was taken, innovation and imitation moved at an unbelievable pace. That day, the Ardipithecus worked together to create over a dozen spears. That day, while they were out, they worked together to make over a dozen spears. Though they varied in style, they all met the requirements. Everyone looked over the long spears, immensely satisfied. Holding one felt like holding the whole world. As it grew dark, the tribe members headed back toward the cave with their spears, along with some wild fruit and small animals they'd scavenged. As they approached the cave, they heard the urgent, panicked screams of the females, and the cries of a cub. Something was wrong at the cave. Every Ardipithecus instantly tensed up. The cave was their home, sheltering their mates and offspring. They couldn't afford any losses. They immediately roared back in response, racing toward the cave with spears and stones in hand. When they arrived, they saw the females holding clubs and stones, roaring at something dozens of meters away. A giant bear dog. A few meters in front of the bear dog, an Ardipithecus cub lay on the ground, crying. 10 minutes ago, the females and cubs were near the cave, gathering resources. A mother had carelessly left her cub at the edge. His cries had attracted a hungry bear dog. The females rushed out to confront it as soon as they noticed, but the starving bear dog had no intention of leaving. It held its ground, waiting for a chance to snatch the cub. In the live streaming rooms, the audience's hearts were in their throats. The scene on the Heavenly Eye was incredibly dangerous. The cub was less than 5 meters from the bear dog. If not for the deterrent screams of the females, which made the bear dog hesitant for now, could have killed the cub in a single leap. This standoff couldn't last long. Although the males were rushing back, no one could be sure if the bear dog would attack in the next second. They might not make it in time. This scene also exposed a problem everyone had overlooked: the developmental flaws of Ardipithecus cubs. Everyone watching the stream for so long had seen many cubs born and grow. The most obvious issue was their slow maturation period. It took at least 2 or 3 years from birth just to learn to walk. During this time, they were completely incapable of self-defense. Even after learning to walk, they had no combat ability, and couldn't even run fast. To a predator, they were just moving pieces of meat. It took at least 15 years to gain real combat strength. During this long period, cubs relied entirely on the tribe's care, which in turn fostered the Ardipithecus sense of cooperation. They began to huddle together in groups. Everyone had tacitly accepted this drawback. Since no disaster had happened yet, no one cared. But even human parents can be careless, let alone Ardipithecus. Until something happens, no one cares. But even human parents can be careless, let alone Ardipithecus. Now trouble had finally arrived. The flaws of a long growth period were fully exposed. Furthermore, Ardipithecus cubs would cry uncontrollably, directly attracting predators. Other species, by contrast, have cubs that can run almost immediately after birth and know to stay quiet. It's all about increasing survival rates. But Ardipithecus cubs? Their habits didn't seem designed for survival at all. They were practically a death wish. The audience was deeply worried. Cubs are the foundation of the tribe. If even their safety can't be guaranteed, how can the tribe thrive and expand? I hope that, as the civilization observer, I can take note of this issue. Losing one cub might not be a huge deal, but the fear is that this will keep happening. It would be best to use the opportunity for intervention, to fix this bug of infant crying. I should be able to do it, considering the last intervention was so successful. Switching back to the Heavenly Eye footage, the returning males had reached the outskirts of the cave, right behind the bear dog. They were close. Now, 5 meters in front of the bear dog was the crying cub. 30 meters directly ahead were the females screaming and waving clubs. 20 meters behind it were the returning males. They had it completely surrounded. The male bear dog had sharp senses, and immediately realized something was wrong. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't actively provoke a group of Ardipithecus. As a solitary creature, it had its own survival rules, which usually meant avoiding social prey. But today it had been hungry for far too long. While out foraging, it had heard the cub's cries from afar. Following the sound, it saw a lone cub with nothing around it. What predator would pass up such an easy meal? But as soon as it approached, before it could strike, a swarm of Ardipithecus had rushed out from the cave, waving clubs and roaring. They looked quite formidable. It hesitated to act immediately, but that brief moment of delay allowed the males from behind to cut off its retreat. Now it was stuck with nowhere to go. The cub's crying continued to stir its appetite. Its predatory instinct clashed wildly with its sense of danger. But in the end, hunger triumphed over everything. If it didn't fill its belly, it would starve sooner or later. Hunting was always a gamble with death. It didn't want to give up the fat prize right in front of it. It made up its mind to eat that cub. After a moment's hesitation, it moved. It bared its massive maw, the sharp fangs glinting coldly. Ignoring the female's roars, it stepped toward the cub. This action instantly sent the surrounding Ardipithecus into a frenzy. With so many of us here, you still won't leave? You still dare to touch our offspring? The next second, this action instantly sent the surrounding Ardipithecus into a frenzy. With so many of us surrounding you, you still won't leave? You still dare to touch our offspring? In the next second, the enraged Ardipithecus launched their attack. Their newly made long spears were put to the test. The sound of rushing air whistled as a long spear sliced through the sky, striking the bear dog's massive body directly. The bear dog didn't even know to dodge. It instantly roared in agony, Just as it turned to see what had happened, it witnessed an even more terrifying sight. 7 or 8 more spears were flying straight toward it. Bear dogs, Amphicyonidae, were a very special group of animals. They were neither dogs nor bears, but an independent family of dog-like carnivores. The name, bear dog, came from their possession of both a bear's massive build and a dog's agility. Their largest members could weigh 700 or 800 kilograms. The one that appeared at the Ardipithecus cave entrance, though not massive, still weighed about 500 kilograms. In the forest, as long as it didn't encounter pack predators, could practically walk wherever it pleased. Its combat capability was also extremely formidable. It possessed the long spine and tail of a felid, great leaping ability, and broad, bear-like paws. Its claws were razor-sharp with incredible strength. Its appearance exuded explosive muscle. Even in a head-on clash with a saber-toothed cat, it wouldn't flinch. Its head was more like a canine's, with an extremely powerful bite force. On paper, it was a perfect creature crafted by the ecosystem. It was also the first large carnivore to appear on the continent after the extinction of the dinosaurs. Once, its tracks were found across the entire continent, making it the first-generation king of the order Carnivora. Later, with intensifying species competition and climate change, the bear dog population rapidly withered. Now, they were heading toward extinction. The emergence of the saber-toothed cat family greatly compressed their living space. It was a perfect all-rounder, but its individual traits weren't quite outstanding enough to dominate. Unable to compete with the stronger saber-toothed cats, their numbers decreased rapidly, which is why no country selected them for observation. But that didn't mean it was weak. Compared to the stats of the Ardipithecus, it crushed them in almost every aspect. With its massive size and super strength, if it truly charged into the Ardipithecus group to slaughter, it might really carve out a path of survival. A single swipe of its paw could directly kill a 50-kilogram Ardipithecus. This powerful bite could even snap an Ardipithecus in half. Any Ardipithecus blocking its path would be unable to stop its rampage. Normally, that's how it should have been. But from the moment the long spear appeared, the era had changed. The old rules of the ecosystem were completely void. What the bear dog was facing was no longer just a group of average stat monkeys. These monkeys had activated an ultimate cheat that would overturn everything. 7 or 8 long spears sliced through the sky, descending upon it like a cage. There was no escape. Every cell in the bear dog's body screamed in alarm. Its sense of crisis hit the peak. Its fur stood on end instantly, but the spears were too fast. The moment it looked up, its eyes held only confusion and despair. In the next second, the spears landed. The sounds of piercing air rang out in succession. At least 5 spears struck it directly. Its massive size had instead become its biggest liability as a target, greatly increasing the Ardipithecus' accuracy. Only 3 spears missed and hit the ground. The immense pain sent the bear dog into a frantic rage, but the male Ardipithecus had already charged forward. The Ardipithecus had made 15 spears today. They had only thrown 9 just now. 6 more Ardipithecus were holding spears. The Ardipithecus leader charged at the very front. Taking advantage of the bear dog's struggling and thrashing, he held his spear and stabbed downward directly. A close-range thrust was far more powerful than a throw. The sharp stone tip was incredibly potent, carrying lethal force. Roar! The beast let out a cry, but it sounded more like a wail of sorrow. Then, the other 5 Ardipithecus also wielded their spears. With the bear dog unable to counterattack, they all launched their assault on it. Not far away, a female Ardipithecus rushed over and took the cub away from the scene. This was no longer a battlefield. The outcome was already decided. The bear dog was covered in long spears. It struggled hard and shook off a few, only for the Ardipithecus to pick them up and stab them back in. Other Ardipithecus grabbed large wooden clubs and smashed them frantically against its head. An individual Ardipithecus wasn't strong enough, nor were their fists hard enough, but a full-swing club was both powerful and hard enough. Each blow was heavy enough to cause severe trauma. It was all over. The head-on brawl the bear dog expected never happened. Relying on absolute attack range, the Ardipithecus had subdued it until it couldn't move. Severe injuries and pain caused its consciousness to fade. It had the top-tier build of the biological world, yet it couldn't even touch a single Ardipithecus. It died directly with a heart full of resentment. The crisis came quickly and left just as fast. So fast that the Ardipithecus themselves felt it was surreal. Looking at the top predator lying in a pool of blood, the former first-generation king of the carnivores had been hunted by them so easily. The Ardipithecus worldview was being reshaped. They truly felt that the era had changed. As a remnant of the old era, the bear dog could no longer pose a threat to the Ardipithecus. Today's experience was more like a transition between the old and the new. The fallen bear dog also made the tribe members realize that they seemingly no longer needed to be afraid. Perhaps, from the moment they bound stones to branches, perhaps from the moment they bound stones to the ends of those branches, the Ardipithecus cubs had earned the right to cry as they pleased. The dead bear dog would become a meal for the tribe. The strong males recovered their spears and carried the carcass back to the cave. There was an unexpected harvest today, but the Ardipithecus didn't seem as happy as usual. Even the leader looked solemn. They realized that there was still danger even within the mountains and forests. Hunting parties were safe in groups, but what about predators targeting the cubs in the cave? The cubs' growth period was too long. They required care and were prone to early death. If it happened once, it would happen again. If this hidden danger wasn't resolved, it wouldn't be just one cub. All the cubs would be in danger. If the cubs were gone, the tribe would be finished. And it wasn't just the cubs. Adults would also be in danger if they were alone. An idea popped into the leader's head. Since being alone was dangerous, he would simply take his companions and all the threatening beasts in the forest and eliminate them all. In other words, a large-scale regional purge. The audience outside the heavenly eye didn't know what the Ardipithecus leader was thinking. Those in the domestic exclusive live room were still in shock by what had just happened. The bear dog was even bigger than a saber-toothed cat. Its forelimb muscles were explosive, looking extremely tough. In contrast, the Ardipithecus were only 1.5 meters tall at most. With lean builds, everyone knew the Civitherium only had size, but weak combat power, but the bear dog had both size and high lethality. Everyone thought this conflict would be even more tragic than the Civitherium hunt. Even if the Ardipithecus won through cooperation, there would be losses. Who would have thought the plot would flip so directly? The bear dog went down so cleanly. The battle ended exceptionally easily. The Ardipithecus used their new weapons to achieve a revolutionary victory. When the Ardipithecus first learned to throw stones, everyone felt they hadn't escaped the melee framework. Since stones weren't powerful enough, they still had to fight up close in the end. But the power of these stone-tipped spears was absurd, directly breaking the inherent laws of biological combat. The bullet chat exploded instantly. Some said they had overestimated the bear dog. Others said the bear dog was an all-rounder, but got knocked down by range before it could even get close. Some were curious why the spears were so powerful. Someone explained they were like javelins with high penetration. Others joked, suggesting they give the Ardipithecus high beam weapons. Seeing the bear dog as big as a van, even a human wouldn't dare charge it with a knife. So it was assumed the Ardipithecus couldn't win, completely underestimating an Ardipithecus with its back against the wall. Everyone had assumed the Ardipithecus would lose, completely underestimating the combat potential of an Ardipithecus with no way out. Now everyone realized that the Ardipithecus was no longer the old version. In this bottom-tier meta, it was like they had paid to win. A night passed. As the morning sun just began to spill, dozens of Ardipithecus gathered to head into the forest. Usually they waited until noon, when it was hot and prey couldn't run as fast before hunting. This unusual behavior today immediately hooked the audience's curiosity. They collected suitable branches along the way. They were making long spears. The dozen or so they fumbled through making yesterday mostly broke when dealing with the bear dog. They were nowhere near enough. They carried a large bundle of branches back to the riverbed. They spent the entire day napping stone to make tips. They got more and more skillful. By the time they returned to the cave at dark, they had made 20. Though varying in length, they were all sharp and straight enough. The next day, they were back at the riverbed napping stone tools again, until 100 spears were piled in the cave before they stopped. Even their enthusiasm for finding food had dropped. The audience couldn't tell what they were planning. A new morning dawned. The Ardipithecus weren't looking for materials. Dozens gathered at the cave entrance, each holding one long and one short spear. The 2-meter-long ones were for thrusting, and the 1-meter ones were for short-range stabbing. Then, led by the leader, the entire team headed directly into the deep forest they usually avoided. The hunt had begun. The audience could see it now. The Ardipithecus were out for a hunt. But they didn't go to the grasslands where there was more prey. Instead, they dove headfirst into the deep forest. This move left the audience bewildered. Grassland prey was larger and more numerous, and the Ardipithecus had just finally learned to hunt there. In contrast, the deep forest mostly had solitary animals. They were not only smaller but smarter. Combined with the complex terrain, the difficulty of hunting was much higher. The effort and reward simply weren't proportional. Normally, the Ardipithecus rarely came here. What was the reason for this abnormal behavior? In Dragon Country's Earth Online Special Research Group, Qin Lao frowned, pondering the Ardipithecus' abnormal motive. For animals, almost all actions revolve around hunting and reproduction. Simply put, the motive must stem from these 2 points. First, as for food, hunting in the deep forest wasn't cost-effective at all. Ignoring the optimal solution to do the opposite suggested they weren't here for food at all. Reproduction was even more irrelevant. Thinking back to the Ardipithecus' behavior over the last 2 days, the constant crafting of spears, Qin Lao suddenly had a terrifying thought. His eyes widened. Could it be the act of crafting the spears? Qin Lao's mind suddenly came up with a scary idea. His eyes widened in shock. Could it be that, in the footage, dozens of Ardipithecus, walking in groups through the dense forest, made quite a commotion, immediately startling the animals in the woods? The Ardipithecus group was so imposing that no one dared to provoke them. The animals all scrambled to get away. According to the iron law of the ecosystem, more than 20 meters away was considered absolute safety. As the Ardipithecus group approached, a stitch-antlered deer was slowly backing away, its movements extremely light, hoping to retreat to the safety zone before being noticed. Its luck was good. The Ardipithecus didn't see it at first. It successfully retreated to a position 20 meters from the group. Trees in the woods blocked the line of sight. No species could instantly cross such a distance to attack. Completely relaxed, lowered its head to feed, only monitoring the Ardipithecus group with its peripheral vision. According to forest survival rules, only hidden hunters were a threat. Those swaggering around and exposing their location were nothing to be afraid of. After a while, the slight sound of it eating was still detected by the Ardipithecus. In the past, the Ardipithecus would never have targeted such an agile animal. But things were different now. The Ardipithecus' goal was very clear: eliminate all possible threats in the forest. They didn't care if the target ate grass or not. They only knew that if it was large enough, it was a danger. In the next second, 5 Ardipithecus raised their hands at once, pulling the long spears back like biological catapults to full tension. Their eyes were sharp, staring fixedly at the stitch-antlered deer. The deer also noticed them watching it, but since they were so far away, it didn't take them seriously at all, continuing to munch on the grass. Then, the sharp sound of whistling air suddenly erupted, and 5 spears flew straight toward it. This was completely beyond its cognition. By the time it realized something was wrong, thwack, although only 2 hit due to the distance, it was enough. The sharp spears struck it directly. Even in death, it couldn't understand how it could be attacked while in the safety zone. Losing the strength to flee, it could only watch as the Ardipithecus rushed up to finish it off. The audience in Dragon Country thought this was a perfect hunt. Today's food was secured. But who knew the Ardipithecus wouldn't turn back at all? 2 Ardipithecus carried the remains of the deer, while the rest continued deeper into the forest. This cleansing activity had only just begun. The stitch-antlered deer were social animals, with many others nearby. The Ardipithecus killed everyone they saw. Safety distance? The rules of the forest didn't apply to them anymore. Spears that could pierce the sky were setting new rules for this forest. If you want to live, never appear in the Ardipithecus site. Unfortunately, the animals in the woods didn't understand that yet. Only those who narrowly survived this large-scale sweep will know. 1, 2, 3. The live room audience finally noticed something was wrong. If this were just hunting, they'd have enough food by now. In the past, Ardipithecus would stop once they had enough food, but now they kept killing. There was more prey than they could carry, so they just left it on the ground. In a short time, at least 8 deer had been killed. The entire herd was being wiped out. The Ardipithecus soon entered the bear dog's territory. The bear dog they killed 2 days ago had come from here. This territory originally belonged to a male and a female bear dog. Few animals dared to approach. Today, the Ardipithecus charged in without any hesitation, searching in all directions. They soon found the female, eating berries in the bushes. The Ardipithecus who saw her roared to call his companions. There was no standoff. A dense hail of spears rained down on her. Instantly, the female bear dog was covered in wounds. In just a few seconds, her roars stopped completely. The Ardipithecus recovered their spears and continued forward in their group. Outside the heavenly eye, Qin Lao took a deep breath, the hair on his arms standing up. He was now completely certain of his guess. These Ardipithecus weren't here to forage. They had broken away from the basic rules of animal feeding and reproduction. They had developed a more terrifying motive. They were purposefully subjecting the entire forest to an indiscriminate cleansing of danger. To put it bluntly, it was an indiscriminate biological purge. At this moment, indescribable emotions swirled in Qin Lao's heart. He found that the Ardipithecus actions were less and less like unintelligent beasts, and more like humans with a strong desire for revenge. Operating in organized groups, killing with calculation and intent. This was the Ardipithecus' first time killing for something other than food. When other animals engage in indiscriminate killing, it's usually to test the ecological niche of a new environment. But the Ardipithecus had lived in this forest for a long time, familiar with all its rules. They were doing this to clear out a safer environment. Logically, Qin Lao should be happy about this result, but at this moment, shock overrode everything else. Behind the actions of the Ardipithecus tribe, there was definitely a great secret hidden. Qin Lao looked forward to their next performance more and more. In the footage after the female bear dog fell, the Ardipithecus didn't stop at all. Deer, mountain horses, even strong ancient boars, they killed everything they saw along the way. They even broke a dozen spears. Since they had enough weapons, they just swapped to new ones for throwing. The furthest distance they could reach was their kill radius. None of the medium to large creatures within range could escape. Simple wooden sticks plus sharp stone tools had become the most terrifying weapons, sharper than a saber-toothed cat's fangs, which took hundreds of thousands of years to evolve. The Ardipithecus could nap them out in an hour or two. Their throwing speed was leagues ahead of animals, naturally gifted at running. For the medium to large creatures in the vicinity, this wasn't a fair fight at all. It was a total dimensional strike with zero chance of winning. In the Dragon Country exclusive live room, the bullet chat was flying fast. Everyone was dumbfounded. The Ardipithecus used to hide everywhere, but now they've directly activated slaughter mode. They kill and don't even eat. It's pure revenge. Before, everyone thought Ardipithecus were at best mid-tier in the ecosystem, but in one day, everyone's worldview had been overturned. At this moment, everyone realized how terrifying a group of spear-wielding Ardipithecus truly was. The footage cut again. It was almost dark. The Ardipithecus had killed at least dozens of medium to large creatures. The ground was littered with remains pierced by spears. The scent of death filled the entire forest. They had reached the deepest part of the forest. Restless sounds came from ahead. Instead of being afraid of the commotion, the Ardipithecus' eyes lit up. The killing had been too smooth so far. No creature was their match. As long as it entered throwing range, a dozen spears would leave it dead or crippled. The Ardipithecus knew that no creature in the vicinity could threaten them now. They were all completely fearless. The Ardipithecus leader walked at the very front. His spear was soaked in blood and gore, staining the wooden handle a dark brown. Pushing aside the grass blocking his view, he saw the downstream riverbed overgrown with weeds. There was a long, narrow crush mark in the grass, not like something made by a four-legged animal. Following the trail forward, the camera revealed a colossus. It was a Wanambi snake, an observed species from Feho, Africa, and prehistoric giant snake, over 5 meters long, small head, thick body. It lived near water sources. It had just killed a prehistoric capybara and was about to feed. Just then, another uninvited guest arrived. While it was enjoying its prey, another uninvited guest arrived. It was a Megalania, Tenzus, India, observed species. This was the largest species of monitor lizard, solitary, over 5 meters long, weighing over 300 kilograms. The strength was on par with a large bear dog. Its mouth also contained venom glands. Not only did it have terrifying physical attacks, it also had chemical attacks that could paralyze nerves. It was a top-tier overlord in the heart of the forest. The two giants squared off on the riverbank, staring at the dead capybara. This was a battle for food. The Megalania even looked like it wanted to eat the Wanambi snake too. Their combat power was evenly matched. It was hard to say who would win. A battle could break out at any second. Right at that moment, the Ardipithecus arrived, appearing in a group behind the two giants. Their eyes showed no hesitation at all. As they stared fixedly at them, the two giants were in a standoff, and the two observing countries were already in a heated debate. In the Tenju live room, the African audience started cursing, saying the Wanambi snake worked hard for its prey, so why should the Megalania get to steal it? The Tenju audience was also tough, saying nature is survival of the fittest. If you can't protect it, you just have to take it. The two sides were arguing incessantly. As they spoke, the group of Ardipithecus suddenly intruded on the scene. The cursing in the live room stopped instantly. These Ardipithecus were Dragon Country's observed species. Audience members from both countries were stunned, saying these little monkeys were far too bold. Daring to join the fun with two giants here? Isn't that just delivering themselves as snacks? Who knew the Ardipithecus weren't afraid at all? They were here for a surprise attack. Doesn't matter how many giants there are, they'll subdue whatever they see. Immediately after, the Ardipithecus took the lead and launched an attack. The long spears in their hands were violently hurled out, whistling through the air as they slammed into the two giants. The Megalania had thick skin and protective scales, but they were useless against the terrifying kinetic energy of the spears. It was struck by 3 spears instantly. The Wanambi snake was also hit once, becoming agitated on the spot from the pain. Both giants sensed danger, subconsciously trying to flee. The Tenju and African audiences were dumbfounded. The screen-wide mockery stopped instantly. Everyone stared wide-eyed, unable to believe it, shouting that Dragon Country was cheating and should be reported. But the Eye of Heaven completely ignored them. The Ardipithecus offensive continued. They communicated signals through eyes that could show the whites. With one look from the leader, dozens of Ardipithecus split into 2 groups, chasing the two giants separately. The Wanambi snake tried to flee back into the forest, but its path was blocked by a dozen Ardipithecus. It lunged desperately, trying to coil around them. Just as it did, the path to the woods was blocked by a dozen Ardipithecus. It lunged desperately, trying to coil around them, but as soon as it touched the opponent, it was struck hard on the head by a short spear. More Ardipithecus rushed up immediately. It was subdued right there on the spot. its life extinguished. The Megalania on the other side fared even worse. Moving slowly, it took 8 spears. Panicked, it scrambled toward the water, thinking it could escape there. To its surprise, the Ardipithecus wouldn't even let it go in the water. They picked up their spears and kept stabbing into the water. The Ardipithecus, who finished off the snake, even brought over fresh spears. They kept throwing until the river water turned dark. The Megalania's remains floated up, bristling with multiple spears. It had been dead for a long time. The first day of the purge. Treading over the remains of countless medium to large creatures, the Ardipithecus slaughtered their way from the outskirts into the deep forest. They eliminated the 2 most terrifying beasts in this region, becoming the true kings of these mountains. As long as danger still existed, their offensive would not stop. The first day of the purge finally ended. The Ardipithecus carried loads of food back to the cave, and this large-scale hunt gradually wound down. But this didn't mean it was over. The next day, as soon as the sun rose, audiences from the Eastern Observer Country noticed that the Ardipithecus were gathering once more, diving headlong into the lush forest. There were bound to be survivors from yesterday's hunt. The forest was teeming with life, having long formed a complete ecosystem. The Ardipithecus' goal was to eliminate all danger, something impossible to finish in a single day. For a long time to come, their attention would be focused on the forest. For the entire forest ecosystem, this was nothing short of a devastating disaster. The Peninsula Observer Country, the Island Observer Country, and other special research teams all noticed the Ardipithecus' abnormal behavior. This commotion was far too large. In the Eastern Observer Country's exclusive live room, there were many viewers from other nations. The news naturally spread fast, not to mention that it involved the Tropical Observer Country and the Highland Observer Country. The Peninsula Observer Country's research leader, Kim Young-jun, camped out directly in the Eastern Observer Country's live room. Watching the Ardipithecus sweeping operation with his own eyes, he felt more and more terrified as he watched. The combat power of these monkeys observed by the Eastern Country had changed far too much. Not long ago he had seen them, hunting on the grasslands, images of total futility. Back then, their hunting relied entirely on luck. Though they turned from prey into predators, they couldn't compare to the saber-toothed cat families. In Kim Young-jun's eyes, the Ardipithecus' combat power was simply not. They had become predators, but they couldn't compare to the saber-toothed cat families. In Kim Young-jun's eyes, the Ardipithecus' combat power was not enough to threaten the saber-tooth status. They were just a group of opportunistic hunters, at best holding a mid-to-high ecological niche, and that was thinking highly of them. Who could have expected that after such a short time, the Ardipithecus would suddenly become so fierce? Even the Eastern Country's audience wasn't used to it. The entire forest had become the hunting ground for these Ardipithecus. After watching for a few days, Kim Young-jun saw that almost no large beast in the forest could withstand a single blow from the Ardipithecus. Once a target was spotted, a barrage of spears would fly. The sight was absolutely terrifying. The before and after gap was just too big. Given a bit more time, these monkeys might even rule the continent. Though it sounded like an exaggeration, Kim Young-jun truly felt an immense pressure. As the Ardipithecus grew stronger, the first to suffer would be those outside the forest, the Macaridus on the grasslands. The 2 species were almost like fated enemies. When the Ardipithecus were not yet powerful, the Macaridus was their absolute natural enemy. Now that the Ardipithecus were strong, they would surely step out of the forest. Once they did, they would clash with the saber-tooths. It was etched in their bones. There was no room for reconciliation between the 2 species, only a fight to the death. Watching the performance of these Ardipithecus, Kim Young-jun even felt a hint of fear. He had pondered the reason for their sudden spike in strength. The core was that accidentally born spear. The combat bonus this thing gave Ardipithecus was too exaggerated. Even if the target were switched to a Macaridus, the outcome likely wouldn't change. No matter how strong a Macaridus was, couldn't withstand a concentrated spear attack. Unless the Macaridus were in large packs, only then could they stand a chance. If caught alone by the Ardipithecus, even a beast as strong as a saber-tooth would die. Similarly, the same applied to Ardipithecus. They only had the power to contend with saber-tooths. When they were in a group, a lone Ardipithecus before a saber-tooth still held no advantage whatsoever. From this perspective, the Ardipithecus niche was now almost on par with the saber-tooth cat. That seemingly ordinary spear was practically a legendary, top-tier divine artifact. Once it was born, it allowed the weak Ardipithecus to leap into the ranks of top-tier predators. Even more ridiculous, this level of artifact could only be used by Ardipithecus. No other species could even touch it. It was completely exclusive gear for Ardipithecus. Such a weapon in Earth Online simply shouldn't exist. Seriously broken, seriously unbalanced. If Earth Online had any fairness, overpowered weapons like the spear should be deleted. Otherwise, how can other species even play? Unfortunately, that was just wishful thinking. Removing the spear was impossible. Now, what Kim Young-joon really needed to think about was how to counter these long-range spears. So for the next period of time, he spent almost every day soaking in the Eastern Observer, country's exclusive live room. He didn't speak, just watched, attempting to find a weakness in the Ardipithecus. The purging operation continued. All medium to large creatures living in the forest tasted the terror of those apes for the first time. They were like tireless hunting machines, finding a target, chasing the target, and taking down the target. The population of the entire forest was rapidly decreasing. Where they passed, only remains were left. Countless carcasses were piled along the way. Some endangered species were even driven to extinction personally by the Ardipithecus. In this competition of nature, the Ardipithecus personally saw off a batch of competitors. These creatures that, in the mid-stage of the current version, were already on the brink of extinction, were either low population remnants of the previous era, or species that were extremely weak to begin with. The Ardipithecus used to be the same way. Under the pressure of the saber-toothed cats, their numbers were incredibly low, nearly on the verge of extinction. It's just that now, the Ardipithecus I chose have risen up, and successfully turned the tables, but other similarly weak species did not have this potential. In the turnover of nature, extinction was bound to happen sooner or later. The Ardipithecus at most just gave them their final send-off during this purge. These species themselves had no advantage in this version, and weren't chosen by any country for observation. When I first chose the Ardipithecus ancestors, everyone thought I was a complete and utter fool. So this time, no country was directly eliminated. However, this move by the Ardipithecus was like an announcement that the elimination rounds had arrived. The current version of Earth Online was halfway through. The development potential of all organisms was now clear. In the first half of the arena, some species slowly began to grow strong, while others gradually fell into decline. As the version entered the second half, species with the advantage to contest for world dominance would all start making their moves. The intervention opportunities held by the various civilization observers would become key. Those with an advantage want to climb world rankings, while those near extinction want to stage a comeback. The intensity of competition will rise by countless levels. The intensity of competition will rise by countless levels. The first half, that playhouse observation phase, was over. What came next would be an even more brutal elimination round. The Ardipithecus had already begun exterminating other species, officially starting their path to prominence. The law of the jungle on the continent had completely begun its performance. The current Ardipithecus were already transformed. Even if I did nothing, they would steadily grow stronger, at least securing a spot in the new version's top 10. The new version's reward system had been fully upgraded. A top 10 reward for the respective factions would already be a massive boost, but I felt it wasn't enough. From the very beginning, my goal was to take the top spot. If I just wanted to play it safe and score points, I could have just chosen crocodiles. Crocodiles are famous evergreens across versions, very stable. But their ceiling was just that. They could never take first place. So, the Ardipithecus must be strengthened further. They could currently claim kingship in the forest, but they lost their advantage on the endless grasslands. To take first place, they still lack 2 key puzzle pieces. Once this hunt ends, I will take the initiative to intervene and upgrade. I wasn't the only one thinking this. Right now, most civilization observers were gearing up, ready to upgrade the species they observed. The elimination round had already begun. Waiting until the species was nearly extinct before acting would be too late. Everyone had figured out the patterns. They wouldn't be like a certain faction that wasted 2 intervention chances right at the start. If intervention chances aren't used well, they can cause extinction instead. That faction's Macaritas were a prime example. With top-tier potential, they almost completely collapsed. Now, that faction had only 1 intervention chance left. They originally thought the Ardipithecus would go extinct due to reproduction issues, but they didn't expect the population to grow larger and larger, while their combat power received an epical boost. Watching the Ardipithecus successfully capture prey with spears, Kim Young-joon of that faction had his head filled with thoughts on how to curb their expansion. The apes were also particularly persistent. They wouldn't stop until the target species was cleared out. Like an oversized honey badger, once a grudge was formed, it was a fight to the death, more terrifying than just killing an enemy. Kim Young-joon pondered giving the saber-tooths turtle shells, but immediately rejected the idea. Losing speed and attack for pure defense would just make them punching bags. Then he thought about adding speed to the saber-tooths, relying on hit and run to dodge spears or close-quarters combat. Although there were flaws, it counted as a research direction. Just as he finished speaking, an abrupt system announcement rang out. Bullet chats in all live rooms stopped instantly. All observers looked up at the eye of heaven. The announcement said too many factions were eliminated last version. New version, new. The announcement said too many factions were eliminated last version. The new version added a major event preview feature. Currently, the Earth-Sun distance is lengthening, and temperatures will continue to drop. The fourth major glacial period is about to arrive. In the accompanying demonstration video, starting from 3.5 million years ago, the ice and snow at the North and South Poles continuously expanded. Snow accumulated year by year without melting. By the time of the version settlement at 2.5 million years ago, more than half the planet was covered in ice and snow. The entire world would completely enter an ice age. In the last version, an extraterrestrial meteorite struck suddenly. No country or species had time to react. Everyone could only watch as the natural disaster destroyed everything. Most countries suffered heavy losses. Therefore, the current version of Earth Online has been optimized, adding 3 active intervention opportunities and a disaster early warning system to give civilization observers more room to operate. Originally, climate change would directly cause ecological collapse and the extinction of countless species. But now the Eye of Heaven had issued a preview. How to stage a comeback became the key to this competition. The Eye of Heaven announcement, paired with relevant videos, vividly displayed the future natural disaster to all viewers and observers. This news was like a bombshell, directly blowing everyone's minds. They were just saying the first half of the version was over, and they were entering the second half elimination rounds. Everyone intended to strengthen their observed species, to push for a higher ranking. Who would have expected this announcement to completely disrupt everyone's plans? The Ice Age was coming. Although the true beginning was a matter for after the version settlement, the impact was already starting to show. Less than 1 million years remained until the version's end. Glaciers from the poles would slowly creep toward the center of the continent, until they covered it completely. During this time, the environment would continuously deteriorate, temperatures would drop steadily, and survival for species would become increasingly difficult. 1 million years isn't actually that long on a species dimension. After the meteorite strike in the last version, the end times lasted for several million years. The dinosaurs also took a long time to gradually go extinct. The rise and fall of a group often takes hundreds of thousands or even millions of years. Therefore, observers must make adjustments as early as possible to let species adapt to the harsh environment in advance, increasing the group's survival rate. This was undoubtedly a massive challenge. First, cold resistance must be considered. Either reduce heat consumption or increase hair thickness for warmth. But the temperature was dropping slowly. Current creatures were already afraid of high temperatures. Adding hair now would be a disaster. If they wait until the cold arrives to change, creatures are already afraid of heat. Adding hair now would be a disaster. If they wait until the cold arrives to change, it wouldn't leave the species enough adaptation time. After all, organisms are complex systems. Rash changes can easily backfire, leading to extinction because they can't adapt to either extreme. Not only that, food sources also had to be considered. After the disaster hits, food for herbivores will drastically decrease, leading to mass die-offs. The number of carnivores will then follow suit and plummet. The food chain is linked together. A small problem at one link leads to total collapse. It's like a row of dominoes. This is simply not something a single person can solve. Observers from many countries began to use their active intervention chances to request national support. For a while, various coping methods emerged one after another. Some made their species slowly migrate toward cold regions, using hundreds of thousands of years to adapt to low temperatures. Some gave their species double-layered fur, the outer layer unchanged, but adding fine downy fur to the inner layer. Though it might be a bit hot now, at least they wouldn't die. It also left enough time for adaptation. Others adjusted the species' digestive capabilities, evolving them from herbivores into omnivores, expanding food sources to avoid starvation. Every country was preparing for the coming natural disaster. But a scheme suitable for one species isn't necessarily suitable for another. The differences in survival habits and physiological structures completely ruled out the possibility of copying others' work. To live longer and develop better, one could only rely on themselves. In the virtual space, I could see that almost all observers were so busy their feet barely touched the ground, all contacting their national teams. Only that blessed-looking little fat guy in the corner was leisurely leaning back in his seat, not panicking at all. I knew him. When I first entered the virtual space, he was one of the observers who came over to strike up a conversation. We even exchanged a few words. During the species selection war, he chose the apex predator, the caiman. Once I thought about the species he chose, I understood why he was so calm. Crocodiles have always been the easy win models in every version. Though their final ranking isn't high, they excel in stability. Take the caiman for example. It can be traced back as far as the Cretaceous. Tens of millions of years later, while contemporary mammals evolved from palm-sized to giants, the caiman barely changed at all. It survived the Cretaceous disaster and survived massive ecological shifts. It's truly a case of no matter how the outside world changes, I remain unmoved. In fact, the caiman wasn't even the strongest among current crocodilians. Above it was the Purosaurus, the strongest crocodilian in history. Competition for crocodile observation slots was originally intense, and everyone went to grab the Purosaurus. It was the strongest crocodilian in history. Competition for crocodile observation slots was originally intense, and everyone went to grab the Purosaurus. He noticed me looking at him, and turned to meet my gaze, then flashed a kind smile. I nodded slightly in response. Our two countries had good relations. We naturally felt a sense of closeness. Withdrawing my gaze, while other countries were working hard, I wasn't idling either. Opening the basic data for the Ardipithecus, I also began my active intervention. In our Earth Arrogance Special Research Group, the news of the impending Ice Age filled everyone present with anxiety. The Ardipithecus ancestors, after my first active intervention and modification, had directly staged a comeback like they were cheating, rising from the gutter to become version favorites. Getting to today really wasn't easy. Even now, everyone still couldn't forget the images of Ardipithecus being hunted at will by saber-tooths or other apex predators. Everyone had watched step by step as the Ardipithecus reached this point. After the spear appeared, the Ardipithecus completed an epical counterattack, becoming top-tier powerhouses in the ecosystem, capable of contending with the Macaridus. But before their seats were even warm, the disaster preview arrived. The coming Ice Age would be a massive challenge for all current organisms, completely overturning the Ardipithecus' current way of life. How to survive it became a problem that gave everyone a headache. The sounds of discussion in the research group were constant. Elder Chin, as the leader, stared intently at the screen. He knew I would definitely begin the second active intervention. Sure enough, I didn't hesitate and opened the intervention options. I had to let the Ardipithecus adapt to the harsh environment in advance. But this time I still didn't choose off-field assistance. The people present were all stunned. Again, the natural disaster came so suddenly. Can he really do it alone? Though we don't have a good plan either. There's strength in numbers. Isn't he being too? Everyone frowned, unable to understand my thinking. After all, this wasn't just my business. It was the victory or defeat, the glory or disgrace of all our people, affecting the future of countless lives. It was only because my last intervention was so successful that everyone had a high level of trust in me. But the disaster came too suddenly. Even if I originally had a detailed plan, the massive environmental change would throw the plan into chaos. At a time like this, brainstorming is the best choice. But Elder Chin took a deep breath and waved his hand. Liangchen isn't someone who acts recklessly. Ever since my first active intervention, Elder Chin knew I had my own thoughts and plans. My understanding of the current version of Earth Online far surpassed everyone present. I had truly put in the hard work to study it. If I said I didn't need off-field help in this situation, it must be because I already had a solution. They had no choice now but to trust me. Might as well settle down and see what exactly I'm going to do. Inside the virtual space, I fully expanded the basic data for the Ardipithecus. Since the last modification to the Ardipithecus's shoulders, a long period of data progression had passed. Through generations of reproduction, superior genes were continuously passed down. The current Ardipithecus, compared to the original Ardipithecus Group 10 that squatted in trees, is vastly different. They could even be called two different species. They have completely adapted to bipedalism. This set of organs and the skeletal structure have gradually perfected through evolution. The pelvis is fully formed, and the leg bones have elongated. The average height of the Ardipithecus has now reached about 1.5 meters. Exceptional mutant individuals even exceed 1.6 meters in height. The legs have taken over all walking functions, fostering stronger thigh and calf muscle groups. The hips are wider, making running more stable. Walking upright concentrates the entire body's pressure on the soles of the feet. The Ardipithecus's soles have also undergone a massive change. Originally, there wasn't much difference between the soles and the palms. Toes were long and the contact surface was wide, which was convenient for grasping branches. Now they no longer need to grasp branches, and instead have to bear greater weight and pressure. The toes have begun to recede. The soles have elongated, and some Ardipithecus have even developed arches. This provides a shock absorption function, allowing them to run further, jump higher, and possess stronger endurance. These are the basic rigid conditions for my next intervention. Plus, since long fur has already been born, the additional conditions are also met. Only then can I proceed boldly. With this in mind, I set my sights on the main target of this intervention, the thick body hair covering the Ardipithecus. Yes, while everyone on the outside is thinking about thickening the hair, because the Ice Age is coming, I actually intend to make this thick hair completely recede. Hair indeed has many benefits like keeping warm and insulation, and it can block ultraviolet rays from hitting the skin directly, allowing the Ardipithecus to adapt to more varied environments. But its drawbacks are also significant. The biggest problem is that it makes it easy to overheat. When any creature runs, its body temperature rises rapidly. Homeotherms must spend a lot of energy maintaining a stable core temperature. If the temperature is too high, the brain will suffer damage like an overloaded CPU. If it's too low, vital signs cannot be maintained. So, all creatures have a limit to how long they can run. Upon reaching the limit, they must stop to dissipate heat, and wait for their temperature to recover before they can continue. Whether herbivores or carnivores, they can only run fast but not far. All animals can only run fast but not far. For some species, even if their top speed can break 100 kilometers per hour, they can at most sustain it for 10 or 20 seconds. I want to degenerate the Ardipithecus's hair to give them a more efficient heat dissipation function. Besides removing the hair, I also need to increase the sweat glands. Currently, the Ardipithecus has no more than 2 million sweat glands. That's nowhere near enough. It needs to double to 4 or 5 million spread across the body to carry away excess body heat through massive sweating. Degenerating hair and increasing sweat glands. This is what I'm going to do in this intervention. It's equivalent to changing the Ardipithecus's original air-cooled radiator into the top-tier liquid-cooled radiator. As long as they can replenish water, their stamina can be extended indefinitely, massively boosting their running endurance. The Ardipithecus on the grasslands, indeed, cannot catch up to those natural-born sprinters with explosive power. But I don't need to run faster than you. I only need to run longer than you. You can leave me far behind, but you can never shake me off completely. As long as you are still in my sight, there will eventually come a moment when you collapse first. Degenerating hair to improve heat dissipation can unlock the persistence hunting option. Without hair to trap heat while running, plus 5 million sweat glands helping out, body temperature can be kept within the safety line, making it possible to run continuously for 1 or 2 hours. Just like trained professional marathon runners, who can run dozens of kilometers in one go. I can't do it myself, and most people can't either. Ordinary people can't hold on after running for 20 or 30 minutes. But this mechanism has potential. It just needs training. To put it bluntly, it's not that the mechanism isn't effective. It's that humans haven't had to rely on endurance for food for a long time, so it hasn't been developed. But the Ardipithecus needs it. This isn't to say that the Ardipithecus has to go head-to-head with the grassland's natural sprinters. Endurance. Hunting is just a puzzle piece to complete their abilities. The reason the Ardipithecus couldn't fully establish itself on the plains before was mainly because they couldn't catch up to clever prey during hunts, only able to watch helplessly as the target ran away. Those fast ones could leave the Ardipithecus in the dust with a single burst of speed. But once the Ardipithecus's endurance is up, it's a completely different story. Hunting Ardipithecus will target a fleet-footed prey, quietly stalking it first. If the prey doesn't sense danger, it will be met with a dense volley of spears. If it senses it early and speeds away, just when it thinks it's safe, it will find the Ardipithecus following from afar. Their speed isn't fast, but it's steady, never letting up. The prey has no choice but to keep running. But the intense running just now has pushed its body temperature to the limit. Without enough rest, it simply can't recover while running. The body temperature reaches the limit. Without enough rest, it simply can't recover. While running, the body fails and collapses first, becoming an easy dinner for the Ardipithecus. From cooperative hunting to making spears with stones, and then to boosting endurance, the Ardipithecus's hunting shortfalls are being filled step by step. Previously, they could only hunt weak, slow or less alert prey. Now, with strong endurance, their hunting range has directly expanded, firmly securing their place at the top of the ecosystem. As qualified hunters, someone might ask, with the hair gone, what happens when winter or the ice age arrives? I can only say that where there is a need, a solution will naturally follow. Being too perfect makes it easier to go extinct, and the hair isn't all gone. It must be kept in useful places. For example, the hair on the head. The Ardipithecus walks upright, and the head is the only part directly facing the sun. The brain is delicate, accounting for only 2% of body weight, but consuming massive energy. It overheats easily. Keeping hair on the head blocks direct sunlight. Also, eyebrows must be kept to prevent forehead sweat from flowing into the eyes while hunting, which would obstruct vision. Hair in the armpits and private areas should also remain synchronized with the timing of physiological maturity. First, it serves as a sign of maturity. Ardipithecus has no obvious mating season. Having this characteristic makes it easier to identify who can participate in reproduction, which is good for species continuation. Second, it reduces friction. The armpits and groin are the most frequently moving parts. When moving, the skin rubs repeatedly, which can easily lead to chafing and infection in hot weather. Keeping hair there provides a buffer. It might not look good, but the practicality is maximized. However, this also brings a problem. Body odor. On smooth skin, sweat evaporates easily, but in the armpits with hair, trapped sweat smells over time. This is the origin of body odor. Evolution is never perfect. Every choice has a price. As long as the benefits outweigh the costs, it's acceptable. I continuously adjusted things on the interface, and the Ardipithecus's appearance underwent earth-shaking changes. The dense fur gradually receded, and a brand new look appeared before my eyes. The current them, they have long since discarded most ape habits, and gained a human-like form. There's still a gap in facial features, but they already look very human. Many Ardipithecus have brain capacities exceeding 600 milliliters. With the regression of body hair, in my view, they could already be called Homo erectus. In my memory, Homo erectus shouldn't have appeared for at least another 2 million years. In Earth Online, they've appeared early. My modifications soon applied to all Ardipithecus. To them, it was like undergoing a painful physiological reshaping. But this change directly bypassed nearly 2 million years of time. By the time the last Ardipithecus finished shedding its fur, the change had directly spanned nearly 2 million years of time. Once the last Ardipithecus had finished shedding its hair, a group holding sharp spears, equipped with the strongest liquid cooling system, with heights breaking 1.6 meters for the first time, leg muscles built specifically for long-distance persistence, brain capacities far exceeding ordinary creatures, a brand new version of Homo erectus moving in groups, made a shocking debut under the blazing grassland sun. While all civilization observers were taking the opportunity to actively intervene in their species, I, without seeking external help, was actually the fastest. The viewers in the Huaxia exclusive live stream witnessed the debut of the brand new version of Ardipithecus. Others were all thinking of ways to help their observed species survive the cold macro environment. I, however, did the opposite. I didn't choose to increase hair, nor did I take any cold resistance measures. Instead, I directly deleted the only thing that could resist the cold. In an instant, the Huaxia live room exploded. Wait, bro, am I seeing this right? This isn't adding hair. It's shedding it. Is Yang Chun crazy? What is he doing? Wait, I don't understand this at all anymore. Did Yang Chun not see the Earth Archive's announcement? At this moment, no one understood my operation. The Ice Age is about to come. Instead of thinking about adapting to the environment, he exposed the most vulnerable point. What's the difference between this and seeking death? Without hair, let alone the future Ice Age, the Ardipithecus won't even survive this winter. What on earth is he thinking? To be honest, I've already tried my best to persuade myself to trust him like last time, but this time it's just too ridiculous. I really can't think of a reason. Wait, did you guys overlook a key point? The hairless Ardipithecus seems off. Now that you mention it, holy cow, why does this look so much like a human? I really didn't notice it immediately just now. Completely exploded. Looking at the new posture of the Ardipithecus on the screen, no viewer could stay calm. The hair-shedding modification isn't even worth mentioning now. An even more shocking realization instantly overwhelmed everyone's minds. This group of hairless, bipedal creatures, making stone tools with hair on their heads, are too human-like. Although their facial features, height, and form still have a large gap compared to real humans, the external appearance is simply too similar. In reality, no species can be this similar to humans. This directly birthed a terrifying hypothesis, capable of overturning the current mainstream worldview. What if humans weren't created by God? Most viewers couldn't possibly believe such a hypothesis. But a small number of people couldn't help but feel doubt. Once doubt is sown, the new hypothesis is established. Will more people believe this conclusion in the future? A small portion of people couldn't help but harbor doubts. Once doubt is sown, the new hypothesis takes root. Will more people believe this conclusion in the future? How can this be allowed? Humans are the only high-intelligence creatures in the world, fundamentally different from all animals. Born as the strongest, a high-level organism, how could we have evolved from low-level animals? Are we supposed to call those low-level creatures in the zoo our ancestors? Absolutely impossible. If this hypothesis were true, all of humanity's pride until now, the sense of superiority over other animals, would vanish into thin air. For the entire human society, it would be a massive earthquake. The idea that God created man, or that humans are descendants of aliens, gives people a sense of superiority, gives them a future, and gives room to imagine being the creator. But now you tell them that neither God nor aliens exist, and that humans evolved from low-level animals. Doesn't this directly destroy the faith of the entire human civilization? So, as soon as this bit of doubt emerged, it was immediately met with resistance from millions of people. On all social platforms in Huaxia, related topics instantly trended. Where do humans really come from? Within just a few minutes, this topic had hundreds of thousands of comments, almost all of which were denials. The intensity and the hardness of the wording were unprecedented, as if the people denying it were also afraid of something. In the Huaxia Earth Arrogance Special Research Group, Elder Qin's breathing was very rapid right now. Back when the Ardipithecus first had a large-scale conflict with forest creatures, Elder Qin had keenly sensed something. It's just that the conjecture was too terrifying and ridiculous, so he didn't dare think about it further. But now that the Ardipithecus's brand new form has debuted, he couldn't help but think in that direction. The topic of human origins is too heavy. Exploring the past. What can be gained from exploring origins? Elder Qin didn't know and couldn't figure it out. But if the current hypothesis of human origins is completely overturned, it would undoubtedly be a disaster. Elder Qin also felt a mysterious fear, afraid that everything existing would be overturned, afraid that human origins are not noble. At this moment, even Elder Qin couldn't help but want to argue. The Ardipithecus just happens to look a bit similar. Rather than looking like humans, they look more like monkeys stripped of their fur. They are essentially just monkeys stripped of fur. Or perhaps all the active interventions I made were consciously giving human characteristics and high-level organism traits to the Ardipithecus, simply to increase their survival rate, as a strategy to win the game. Yes, it must be so. Most people in the country thought this way. Elder Qin also kept murmuring to convince himself, repeatedly hinting that all of this was just a coincidence. Yes, all of this is just a coincidence. When the version ends and I come out to ask, I'm sure that will be the answer. The self-suggestion seemed successful and Elder Qin gradually calmed down. But when looking at the sky screen, a sense of confusion still inevitably rose in his heart, along with an imperceptible urge. He didn't know where this confusion came from, nor where that inner urge was leading. The brand new debut of the Ardipithecus brought a shock that wasn't limited to the borders of the dragon country. Information travels fast, and it didn't take long to spread across the world. However, the reactions of other countries were much more intense than dragon countries, especially a certain major Western power, where almost all rhetoric was vigorously denying it at its root. Unfortunately, the new hypothesis of human origins from dragon country clashed with their widespread belief in deities. Various creation myths are widely taught and spread there. Churches are in every city. Most people, limited by their cognition, are easily influenced by related concepts. Creationism is the source of their faith. For the homeless on the streets, God is their only spiritual solace. So their resistance to the new hypothesis was greater than ever. To them, the hairless Ardipithecus just looks a bit like humans, which proves absolutely nothing. It's either a coincidence, or it's the result of subjective intervention by the dragon countries. Civilization observer. At this moment, almost the entire world tacitly chose to deny it. Even if a small number of people became suspicious, their voices were quickly drowned out by the masses, hardly making a splash. No one took this talk seriously. Everyone was more focused on the struggle within Earth Online. This public opinion came fast and left fast, as if nothing had ever happened. Only, without realizing it, more and more eyes were turning toward the Ardipithecus. Previously, viewers of various countries, besides watching their own observed species, only paid attention to species with the potential to compete for global dominance. The Ardipithecus was ridiculously weak at first, so no one besides Dragon Country cared. Now, they all noticed the seed that was quietly rising. Inside the virtual space of Earth Online, I had no idea that such a large public debate had just erupted outside. Right now, I had just finished the second active intervention on the Ardipithecus. The brand new Ardipithecus had debuted, and a completely different six-dimensional attribute chart appeared before me. The attributes for Group 10 Ardipithecus were Strength 4 stars, Running Speed 3 stars, Neural Response 5 stars, Endurance 8 stars, Intelligence 7 stars, Energy Consumption 7.5 stars. The current Ardipithecus should actually be called Homo erectus, but the rules of Earth Online are that once a species is selected, keeps its initial name for the current version. Regardless of whether there's active intervention, purification, or branches of natural purification in the middle, they are all considered Group 10 Ardipithecus. This makes it easier to show the expansion process of the species during settlement. So I didn't fuss over the name, and looked directly at the data. Strength has improved from the previous 3 stars. Although 4 stars isn't enough to cut it against most predators, the Ardipithecus long ago stopped relying on strength to fight. It's enough. Speed and neural response have also improved. It's just that their starting base was poor, so even after the improvement, it's only barely enough. The most eye-catching part is the endurance further down. It's increased by 4 stars compared to the initial form, reaching an astonishing 8 stars. It's top tier in the entire ecosystem. Few species can match it. This is the result of hair recession, increased sweat glands, plus the leg and hip muscle refinement brought about by bipedalism, along with elongated leg bones, and the formation of arches. These are the cumulative results of detailed advantages. Progress in intelligence was also significant. Initial Ardipithecus intelligence was 5 stars, already considered a very smart species in nature. Now, as the brain develops, it has soared to 7 stars. They are almost the smartest animals in nature. In the current version of Earth Online, what's exaggerated is that the Ardipithecus's brain is still developing. Currently, the average brain capacity has only just broken 600 milliliters, and there is still huge room for improvement. In the Ardipithecus's genes, the brain takes priority over everything. Extra energy is first supplied to the brain. This is the core logic of the Ardipithecus's advancement. Strength and speed all take a backseat. Finally, there's energy consumption. 7.5 stars in nature definitely makes them a high consumption group. Most of the energy is given preferentially to the brain, and the rest is used to maintain physical signs and movement. In fact, excluding the brain, the Ardipithecus's walking and running configurations are very energy efficient. It's precisely because daily movement consumption is low that there is extra energy for brain development. What seems like a contradictory configuration has instead pieced together a complex and special evolutionary species. The Ardipithecus's data looks unremarkable, yet every single metric is quite exaggerated. Strength and speed are not their forte, but relying on the divine weapon of the spear and a stellar liquid cooling system, they have truly completed a curveball overtake. It's just that the Ardipithecus right now hasn't realized this yet. Their hair suddenly receded, but they didn't feel like anything was wrong. Felt cool. It was currently summer, with average mainland temperatures above 30 degrees. Even when hiding in caves out of the sun, it was stifling. Losing the hair was like taking off a layer of thermal underwear. Even when hiding in caves out of the sun, it was stifling. Losing the hair was like taking off a layer of thermal underwear. The exposed skin brought a long-awaited coolness. Before, when it was hot, parasites would easily grow in the hair, and the Ardipithecus couldn't help but scratch, which was incredibly annoying. Now that the itching has lessened significantly, the Ardipithecus are all feeling much more refreshed. While they were rejoicing, hunger caught up with them. A while ago, the Ardipithecus cleared the area. Almost all large creatures in the forest had been driven away. For the first time, they relied on their own strength to change the surrounding ecology, becoming the unique top predators of the forest. But new problems also arose. The large-scale hunting reshaped the forest ecosystem. Most of the prey had been killed off by them. The amount of meat they could carry back was limited, and it easily spoiled in the summer. What was left behind either rotted or was picked clean by small animals. With their stored food exhausted, the Ardipithecus lost their food source. They had no choice but to leave the caves and hunt on the savanna. In the past, if they went out at noon, the Ardipithecus would have to stop after 10 minutes. Otherwise, their body temperature would spike, causing dizziness. But today, after walking for over 10 minutes under the sun, no sign of dizziness appeared at all. Their skin grew hot from the sun, but the sweat secreted from their pores evaporated, carrying away a massive amount of heat. Their body temperature remained normal. The Ardipithecus unknowingly walked even further. The Ardipithecus leader had just sensed something was different today. When he was distracted by a large creature nearby, it was a lone giant antelope, standing 1.5 meters at the shoulder, and over 2 meters in length. They were social animals, but their herds were loose, making them easy to hunt. Right now, it was resting under a tree in the shade. It was a great opportunity. The Ardipithecus didn't need to shout. One look from the leader was all it took. They quietly spread out, raised their spears, and slowly surrounded it. But the movement still alerted the giant antelope. It was highly vigilant, standing up and turning to flee immediately. In the past, in such a situation, the Ardipithecus could only watch helplessly. Unexpectedly, several Ardipithecus with good stamina today felt they were in great condition, and chased after it directly. They didn't run fast, and they weren't gasping for air. Slowly, they figured out the trick to long-distance running. Where one chased, a second and third followed. A group of Ardipithecus followed behind at a steady pace. 5 minutes passed. The giant antelope, which had been sprinting with all its might, hit its limit. Its whole body was scorching hot. Its physiological functions could no longer sustain the run. Just as it thought it had shaken off its pursuers and was safe, it looked back and was scared out of its wits. That group of Ardipithecus was still slowly approaching. The savanna was endless. There was nowhere to hide. It wanted to run again, but its whole body was giving warning signals. Couldn't move. The savanna was endless. There was nowhere to hide. It wanted to run again, but its whole body was giving warning signals. Couldn't move. The next second, a long spear flew through the air and pierced its flesh. Blood sprayed as the giant antelope fell to the ground in pain. Soon, more spears were thrown its way. It completely lost the ability to resist, left with nothing but to wait for death. This method of wearing down prey until they are exhausted, before killing them from a distance, was pure despair for any creature. The hunt was a success. The Ardipithecus leader also found it incredible. A cooling system with super endurance, coupled with precise and deadly spears, they were practically natural biological weapons. He looked up toward the horizon. He could even see a pride of saber-toothed tigers not far away. The predators they once feared were no longer a threat in his eyes. At this moment he clearly realized that they were strong enough. They could leave this savanna to see a wider world. This small place could no longer contain their ambition. The Ardipithecus hunt was being watched by the saber-toothed tigers circling in the distance. The live stream chat of a certain country exploded. They witnessed a hunting method that seemed to violate the laws of nature, persistence hunting. During the hottest part of the day, Even the saber-toothed tigers were hiding in the shade with their tongues out. Yet every Ardipithecus was full of energy, and they even targeted the giant antelope. The audience from that country waited mockingly to see a joke. They thought the Ardipithecus were overconfident after clearing the forest. The savanna had far fewer obstacles than the forest. Prey could run at unrestricted speeds. Even if the giant antelope was considered slow among antelopes, it wasn't something other creatures could easily catch. Moreover, the giant antelope was highly alert. The Ardipithecus would surely return empty-handed this time. Who knew the slap to their faces would come so quickly? As soon as the giant antelope started running, it left the Ardipithecus far behind. The speed difference was not even in the same league. But the Ardipithecus chased at a steady pace without rushing, like ghosts that couldn't be shaken off. The further the giant antelope ran, the higher its body temperature rose. Its muscles ached, its breathing grew heavier, and its pace slowly slowed down. The Ardipithecus, however, maintained their original speed. Chasing from behind, the viewers from that country were utterly shocked. The antelope was essentially chased to death. This was more terrifying than a direct kill. The Ardipithecus had grown stronger again, strong enough to be chilling. The live stream of that country was filled with disbelief. Some said the Ardipithecus broke the game balance. No weakness could be found. Logically, nature is fair. Those who run fast have weak combat power. Those with sharp teeth and claws don't run fast. Those with large bodies move slowly. Even those with no advantages would have toxins or camouflage abilities. But the Ardipithecus broke all the iron laws of nature. Stone tools made in tens of minutes could rival the fangs evolved by saber-toothed tigers over hundreds of thousands of years. They also unlocked a skill no other creature possessed: long-range throwing. This skill made them top predators immediately. And now they've even come up with persistence hunting. Even the savannah was becoming their playground. The audience from that country felt immense pressure. The chat was arguing incessantly. Some cursed the experts for being useless. Some said they should copy China's homework and dehair the saber-toothed tigers. Others argued that an ice age was coming soon, and dehairing was purely suicidal. Jin could only smile bitterly at the chat. Copying homework wasn't that easy. Dehairing indeed improves heat dissipation and endurance. But saber-toothed tigers are beasts. You can't expect them to make clothes to stay warm. In his view, this intervention in the Ardipithecus was foolish. Unless they really can make clothes, it's useless. Then again, I might be wrong. The player must have their own plans. The announcement said the ecosystem will worsen over the next million years. Maybe they've decided to abandon the future for power now, turning the Ardipithecus into hexagon warriors now, to expand territory and build up resources. Even if the Ice Age comes, they might not go extinct. They can also squeeze out the survival space of other species. The final ranking definitely won't be low. This must be the strategy. They felt this was certainly the opponent's logic. This type of development planning is very common. Jin felt the red team's choice was digging their own grave, but he had to admit, this put the saber-toothed tigers in danger from the Ardipithecus. It's equivalent to overdrawing the future, in exchange for current dominance. The first to be affected were the hundreds of scimitar-toothed, saber-toothed tigers across 20-some prides in this area. The Ardipithecus stepping onto the savannah would inevitably make the competition more intense. The saber-toothed tigers had always been the absolute kings here, but their numbers never exceeded 500. The reason was simple. The resources in the area couldn't support more. Previously, the tigers almost destroyed the entire ecosystem. Thanks to the blue team's timely remedy, the number of tigers was stabilized at around 200. Nature took a long time to find balance again. Now the total number of tigers was less than 400. Once the Ardipithecus arrived, this hard-won balance would inevitably be broken. It would be a disaster for all species, and a fatal blow to the saber-toothed tigers. Even if the Ardipithecus didn't fight the tigers directly, their high hunting efficiency alone could drive the tigers into a survival crisis. Unexpectedly, falling into a survival crisis, after tasting the sweetness of persistence hunting, the Ardipithecus seemed to have activated a cheat. The next day, they targeted a Civatherium for a group hunt. With spear throwing and stamina depletion, the Civatherium couldn't escape. It was killed directly by a spear. Midway, a pack of hyenas tried to get a share, trying to regain the ground they lost before. Instead, they lost 2 of their members, who became prey for the Ardipithecus. Many on the opposing side were crushed, deeply feeling the pressure the blue team felt before. These upright apes were ridiculously strong, seemingly on a different level from other creatures. Having more and more meat made the Ardipithecus more and more greedy. The frequency of their descents from the mountains increased, and their targets grew larger. Before, catching a single deer would make them happy for days. Now 1 kill a day couldn't satisfy their appetites. After hunting one, they would hunt another. They wouldn't return unless they had 2 kills in a day. This high hunting efficiency made everyone outside the sky screen tremble with fear. This group of Ardipithecus was like a group of madmen wielding terrible power. They hunted hunted antelopes, hunted hipparion, and even dared to hunt Deinotherium. The Deinotherium is one of the top giant beasts on the planet, weighing several tons, with skin and flesh that was incredibly thick. Even saber-toothed tigers didn't dare to provoke them easily. One kick could directly crush an Ardipithecus, but the Ardipithecus always hunted in packs. Their cooperation was so coordinated it was as if they shared one brain. One look and they knew what to do. You distract it, I throw the spear, you block the retreat, I apply pressure from the front. Once an adult Deinotherium was surrounded, it would only lose. The only question was how many spears it could endure. The sky screen timeline accelerated. The Ardipithecus hunting operations became more and more exaggerated. They seemed to have no rivals on the entire savanna. The hairless Ardipithecus had conquered the scorching sun and became the rulers of the day. Although they currently stopped once they had enough meat, in the long run, the creatures on the savanna would eventually be hunted to extinction. With savanna prey becoming scarcer, the saber-toothed tiger's situation grew worse. In the hands of the blue team, there was one last chance for active intervention. But on one hand, they had to deal with the Ardipithecus pressure, and on the other, they had to consider the future ice age. Torn between the two, they hadn't made a decision. Until one day at noon, it was once again the Ardipithecus's home turf. They wandered for half a day without finding any prey. All creatures were consciously avoiding them. Driven to a corner, the Ardipithecus directly targeted another king of the savanna. It was a pride of 22 scimitar-toothed tigers. It was a pride of 22 scimitar-toothed tigers. As the saying goes, two kings cannot coexist. This savanna couldn't hold two kings. There were long-standing default rules on the savanna. Hundreds of scimitar-toothed tigers were divided into a dozen prides, each occupying a territory. They didn't cross boundaries. As beings at the top of the ecological niche, they were the absolute monarchs of their territories. Any creature that entered their territory was food on the move. But since the group of apes left the mountains and stepped onto the savanna, this iron rule had changed. First, the apes were just delicious prey in the eyes of the saber-toothed tigers. Weak, cowardly, with tender meat and very easy to catch. It was only because tigers couldn't climb trees. Had it been their relatives, the Meganterion, this group of apes would have been extinct long ago. To their surprise, they didn't know when, but this group of monkeys changed. They stood upright, became much taller, and learned remote attacks. From throwing stones to using spears, the lethality became greater and greater, and the attack distance grew longer. Often, just a whistling sound was heard, and they would be hit the next second. The tigers gradually realized this group of monkeys was not to be trifled with. The Ardipithecus themselves also noticed their increase in strength, becoming increasingly bold in their actions, even daring to step into saber-toothed tiger territory. In the first direct conflict, the Ardipithecus fought the tigers to a draw. They coordinated so well that the tigers feared them even more than hyenas. Without a certain advantage, the tigers were unwilling to provoke them actively. At first, the tigers didn't care too much, thinking the Ardipithecus couldn't catch much prey, and wouldn't affect their own survival, so they just let them be. Who knew that after a short while, the Ardipithecus had another earth-shaking change. They lost their long hair, no longer feared the heat, and unlocked the skill of persistence hunting. Running and hunting on the savanna under the hot sun, they snatched the prey that originally belonged to the saber-toothed tigers, until it was all gone. Once, twice, dozens, hundreds of times. Resources in the territory dwindled, and many saber-toothed tigers began to starve. What was even more infuriating was that the tigers hadn't even gone to settle accounts with the Ardipithecus yet, but the Ardipithecus actively came to their door. On this day, while the tigers were resting in the shade, they saw the Ardipithecus group, who had found nothing in their hunt, carrying spears, and slowly approaching their direction. The pride of saber-toothed tigers immediately became restless. This bunch of guys actually dared to challenge the true kings of the savanna. A tiger king, whose body was a size larger than its peers, was the first to stand up. Its copper bell-like eyes glared, and its blade-like sabers reflected light under the sun. Standing up, its copper bell-like eyes glared, and its blade-like sabers reflected a cold light under the sun. A low growl came from its throat. This was a deadly warning. This is our territory. Back off or die. The Ardipithecus looked at the more than 20 saber-toothed tigers standing up, their muscles tense, their forelimbs full of explosive power, their long fangs flashing with cold light. It was like the strongest spear and the most solid shield had come together. Scared, they felt like retreating, wanting only to leave quickly. But the Ardipithecus leader didn't move. He stared at the Tiger King, his heart racing, his legs uncontrollably trembling, but he couldn't move his feet. On countless nights, he had looked into the endless distance of the savanna, wondering what it was like over there. They had to leave the forest, leave the savanna, and go to places even further away. Saber-toothed tigers had suppressed them for too long. This nightmare-like shackle, they had to break with their own hands. The ambition in his bones kept the Ardipithecus leader rooted in place. The saber-toothed tiger continued its low growl, trying to use intimidation to scare away this group of offensive naked apes. This move was indeed effective. Some Ardipithecus were already considering retreating, turning their heads one after another to look at the leader in the front. They instinctively trusted the leader. The understanding that following him led to meat had formed a habit etched into their bones. Ardipithecus are naturally conformist. This unity etched into their instincts was their unique talent, far surpassing all other creatures of the same period. As the leader, he had never let his tribesmen down. The tiger's intimidation was terrifying, but he was unwilling to back down. It wasn't just because of hunger. An emotion he didn't even understand himself was budding, steadying his heart which was pounding from fear. Just like that night years ago when the forest was shrouded in darkness, like the first Ardipithecus who gripped a stone. At this moment the leader tightened his grip on the spear, and suddenly raised it high above his head. Every muscle in his body was vibrating. His waist twisted to the limit, all his strength following his unique body structure, to converge in his arm. In just an instant, his shoulder opened at an angle that exceeded the limit of all creatures, and he threw the long spear with great force. The spear cut through the air, falling toward the saber-toothed tiger pride with a whistling sound. This was the Ardipithecus's attitude. Retreat was absolutely impossible today. They wanted to rise, they wanted to expand, they wanted more food, and they wanted to travel further. This savanna had long been unable to contain them. Today, they would hunt their former natural enemy. This was a war for the transition between old and new kings. The spear accurately hit the strongest scimitar-toothed tiger. The tiger didn't even have time to dodge, didn't even realize it. It accurately hit the strongest scimitar-toothed tiger. The tiger didn't even have time to dodge, didn't even sense where the attack came from. They had seen such attacks, but they could never understand the act of remote throwing. They only felt the pain after being hit by the spear. The conflict broke out completely the next second. The spear from the leader was the horn of war. The rest of the Ardipithecus followed with their own attacks. The tiger pride was caught off guard by the sudden assault, becoming violently restless. The roar of their strongest companion being injured came through. They panicked. Some roared, trying to threaten the intruders. Some turned to flee. Others charged headlong toward the Ardipithecus group, trying to launch a fierce attack as they had in the past. The scene instantly turned into a chaotic mess. This scene, through the sky screen, was clearly presented before all the viewers. The Korean livestream chat was full of malicious remarks. They never expected that the group of Ardipithecus the Dragon Country chose would actually dare to attack a pride of saber-toothed tigers. They were all clamoring for the tigers to tear the Ardipithecus apart. Dragon Country viewers were also shocked, but remained fairly calm. After all, the Ardipithecus had brought too many surprises. Everyone was becoming resistant to the shock. Rather than marveling, everyone was more concerned about whether the Ardipithecus could win. They had been trapped in the forest for so long, because there were too many tigers on the savanna. Coming down prematurely would easily lead to trouble. If they won this battle, there would be no more creatures on the savanna that could limit their development. It was crucial. Someone soon discovered the key. Although both sides lived in groups, the gap in coordination was too large. Saber-toothed tiger individuals were extremely strong, yet they had almost no cooperation. After the Tiger King was struck and injured by the spear, the whole group instantly fell apart. Some fled, some were stunned, and some charged forward alone. Without cooperation, without cover, acting entirely on their own will, they were a complete mess. From the moment the leader launched the attack, the Ardipithecus coordinated with extreme tacit understanding. The front row Ardipithecus held their spears on guard, blocking the charging saber-toothed tigers, to create a safe environment for the back row tribesmen to deal damage. The back row Ardipithecus concentrated on throwing spears, while also looking out for their companions around them. If they saw someone standing too far forward, they would pull them back. All of this was like an instinct requiring no practice. The biggest difference between Ardipithecus and saber-toothed tigers is that the Ardipithecus have their companions in their eyes, while tigers only have themselves and their opponents. Since obtaining the legendary spears, the Ardipithecus had spent a long time exploring and practicing, and came up with a kiting tactic. They knew their strength was inferior to many creatures, even inferior to some herbivores. So keeping distance is key. Distance is the trump card. As long as they don't fight face to face, no matter how fierce the prey is, it's just a dish on their plate. If the prey runs, they chase. If the prey pounces, they retreat. The hunters never get greedy and never move forward unnecessarily. This tactic was hailed as truth by them. Now facing a pride of saber-toothed tigers for the first time, all Ardipithecus subconsciously kept their distance from the opponents. The saber-toothed tiger pride, attacked out of nowhere, was in complete chaos. 6 of them first fled to a safe zone to observe. A portion stayed where they were, roaring to bolster their courage. Another 5 charged directly toward the Ardipithecus. The Ardipithecus quickly threw spears to block them. But the tiger's short-range burst was much faster than the Ardipithecus's. Only 2 were hit by the few spears thrown. Not hitting any vital parts, they turned and ran in pain. The remaining 3 soon rushed to the front and pounced fiercely. The Ardipithecus instinctively wanted to retreat, but how could a saber-toothed tiger's pounce be so easy to dodge? An Ardipithecus standing in the front row failed to react, and was directly pounced upon and pinned to the ground. His spear was dropped. With a crisp crack, the tiger's paw directly swiped him, causing serious damage. Screams of pain instantly spread. The saber-toothed tiger pinned him down, searching for a weak spot to deliver the killing blow. But the other Ardipithecus didn't run away at all. They held up their spears and stabbed the tiger. The saber-toothed tiger was stunned. It had never seen such a bold group of monkeys. Within seconds, it was stabbed multiple times. Couldn't even escape if it wanted to. 5 Ardipithecus surrounded it, taking turns to stab. In just dozens of seconds, it breathed its last. The other 2 saber-toothed tigers that charged were even more miserable. One crashed directly into the raised spears. It was struck on the spot and lost its fighting ability. The other missed its pounce and was about to give chase, only to be met with the spear tips of the Ardipithecus who had just dodged. Couldn't even find an opening. Before long, it was also stabbed to death by the surrounding Ardipithecus. In just a moment, of the 5 charging tigers, 2 fled and 3 died. After the Ardipithecus resolved the immediate threat, they picked up the spears from the ground and began to press toward the remaining saber-toothed tigers. After another round of spear volleys, the saber-toothed tiger pride completely collapsed. They fled into the distance like they were crazy. If they fled, the Ardipithecus chased. If they stopped, the Ardipithecus threw spears and rocks. If they charged, the Ardipithecus retreated to maintain the distance. Even if a saber-toothed tiger tried to ambush, charging in alone was just seeking death. Outside the sky screen, no one expected that the saber-toothed tigers, once the natural enemies of Ardipithecus, would actually be crushed so miserably. The kiting tactic was a complete dimensional strike. Even an entire pride of saber-toothed tigers couldn't withstand it. When the Ardipithecus leader pulled the spear out of the strongest saber-toothed tiger's body, the battle was officially over. Out of 22 saber-toothed tigers, only 7 escaped. The rest all died on the savannah. Dark stains soaked a small patch of the grassland. In the distance, a pack of giant hyenas smelled the unusual scent and approached. Looking at the Ardipithecus holding their blood-stained spears, they didn't dare to get close at all. They could only watch from afar as a new king rose. The live stream chats of certain overseas countries were dead silent. When a single saber-toothed tiger died before, they could still say the Ardipithecus were bullying it with numbers. Now that an entire pride was trampled underfoot, they couldn't find any words to say. They simply couldn't fathom how their former prey had suddenly become so fierce. On the savannah, the Ardipithecus stepped over the remains of the saber-toothed tigers. Holding their blood-stained spears high, they let out loud roars. This was the first time they had head-on destroyed a pride of saber-toothed tigers. They were incredibly happy. From this day forward, no creature on the savannah could threaten them again. In the virtual space of the sky screen, my hands paused for a moment. My notebook was filled with the entire process of this battle, including the Ardipithecus cooperation, the kiting tactics, and the final results. This was the first time the Ardipithecus had routed a tiger pride in a direct confrontation. From this moment on, the laws of survival on the savannah were completely subverted. Whether people say they used cheats, or were just lucky, the results were undeniable. The birth of the spear indeed complemented their combat effectiveness. But that wasn't the only reason they grew stronger. Looking back at the Ardipithecus growth trajectory, all coincidences were actually inevitable. Even without my intervention, they would have eventually invented spears and evolved bodies better suited for combat. It was only a matter of time. Perhaps from the moment the first Ardipithecus overcame its fear and stepped from the trees onto the ground, everything was already predestined. The most special thing about the Ardipithecus is that when facing fear, there are always individuals who possess the courage to face difficulties and create the future. In the Earth Arrogance Research Institute of Korea, Jin had just withdrawn his gaze from the sky screen. His eyes still held a hint of shock. The growth speed of the Ardipithecus was breathtakingly fast. He had predicted their rise long ago. Ever since the Ardipithecus cleared the forests, he had been pondering how to use his last active intervention opportunity to counter this group of apes. Who would have thought these monkeys would come so fast and so aggressively? He had originally estimated that even if they dominated the forest, to completely establish themselves on the savannah, it would take at least several hundred or 1,000 years. After all, the forest and the savannah are completely different environments. They would have to spend time experimenting. Who could have expected that with just one active intervention for deherring, the Ardipithecus would not only stand firm on the savannah, through that intervention, not only firmly establish themselves, but also head-on defeat a tribe composed of 22 scimitar-toothed tigers. One must realize that as apex predators, 22 was already the limit for a tiger pride's size. Restricted by scent and environmental factors, they couldn't expand any further. Yet such a large pride was easily destroyed by the Ardipithecus. What else was there on the savanna that could limit their rise? Other tiger prides couldn't beat them. Giant hyena packs didn't dare to provoke them. Dinotherium were slow, and in the eyes of the nimble Ardipithecus, they were just walking buffets. They couldn't even touch the Ardipithecus. In an instant, Jin Ingjun realized that they had no way to deal with this group of Ardipithecus. No animal on the savanna could threaten them. Their rise and expansion were only a matter of time. They were practically hexagon warriors now, with almost no weaknesses. He scratched his head and let out a heavy sigh. He thought for a long time but couldn't find a way to break the situation. Unless the Ardipithecus courted their own death. Watching that group of Ardipithecus carrying saber-toothed tiger carcasses back to their cave so boldly, Jin Ingjun suddenly had a flash of inspiration. Right, when he first saw the naked apes appear, his first reaction was that I was seeking my own destruction. The Ice Age was clearly approaching. Instead of strengthening their cold resistance, I had removed their only insulating hair. Wasn't that just seeking death? The Ardipithecus were indeed strong now, even daring to treat saber-toothed tigers as food. But this was clearly sacrificing the future for a shortcut to current power. Jin Ingjun's eyes grew brighter and brighter. He had been so shocked earlier that he hadn't even noticed such an obvious flaw. You gain some, you lose some. There is no such thing in this world as getting all the benefits without paying a price. The Ardipithecus were strong in the scorching sun, so they must have a shortcoming elsewhere. His desperate mood instantly improved by half. As long as they weren't invincible, there was a way to target them. Let them be strong for now. Wait until the climate gets colder. He didn't even have to wait for the Ice Age. This winter, they would have to pay a painful price for losing their hair. The method of dealing with them was now clear. There was no need for the tigers to fight the Ardipithecus head-on. As long as the tigers could outlast them, he would eventually see these monkeys play themselves to death. Not only that, he also thought of another weakness of the Ardipithecus. Their night vision was practically zero. They couldn't see anything at night without light. Conversely, all apex predators had night vision. The night was their home court, especially the Dinofelis among the saber-tooth family. They were completely ghosts of the dark. Even for the scimitar-toothed tigers, Dinofelis were completely ghosts of the dark night. Even for scimitar-toothed tigers, their combat effectiveness at night was not low. Looking at it this way, the Ardipithecus were not invincible. They had plenty of weaknesses. Unfortunately, Korea only had one intervention opportunity left. Should he buff the tiger's survival to resist natural disasters, or buff their nocturnal habits, so they could hunt Ardipithecus at night? Jin Ingjun already had the answer in his heart. Hunting Ardipithecus might not necessarily wipe them out. It was better to improve the tigers' survival and outlast the apes until they died off. Compared to the Chinese side, the autonomy of the Korean civilization observer was very low. Cha Taehyun's knowledge reserve wasn't enough for active intervention. He would definitely choose to seek help from outside. Jin Ingjun's ideas could also be smoothly passed on to him. Jin Ingjun felt this was an advantage. Could an entire research team combined really not beat a single civilization observer? I indeed have many ideas, and my understanding of the current version of Earth Online far exceeds everyone else's. But it was undeniable that I was too confident. That extreme intervention had created an extreme situation. The Ardipithecus seemed strong now, but they were on the brink of desperation. The scene might arrive very soon. Jin Ingjun was looking forward to it. In the sky screen, after the Ardipithecus' first direct victory over the pride of scimitar-toothed tigers, everything underwent an earth-shattering change. The rules of survival on the savanna were completely subverted. For most species, this was an unavoidable disaster. The Ardipithecus rose too fast. Other species had no time at all to adapt. This difference was most intuitively shown when the Ardipithecus in groups went out to hunt. When most creatures saw their traces from afar, they wouldn't flee immediately. In their understanding, as long as the Ardipithecus didn't get within a 10 to 20 meter sprinting range, they were safe. This was an iron law, inherited for thousands of years by savanna creatures. Even when the number of saber-toothed tigers exploded, it still applied. But for the current Ardipithecus, this rule had long been completely shattered. Group cooperative hunting, long-range thrown spears and stones, top-tier heat dissipation unique among creatures, and leg muscles and arches, specialized for long-distance endurance running. These advantages were utilized to the extreme by the Ardipithecus, coupled with the fact that savanna creatures hadn't adapted to their hunting style yet. This directly led to an absurdly high hunting success rate. Some viewers had counted that after the Ardipithecus defeated the tiger pride and took the top spot in the ecosystem, they conducted over 70 hunts in 3 months. They set foot on the savanna almost every day. After taking the top spot, they conducted over 70 hunts in 3 months. They set foot on the savanna almost every day, and their targets covered all species: fast-running antelopes, massive giant elephants, packs of giant hyenas, fierce scimitar-toothed tigers. The Ardipithecus killed almost everyone they met. As long as it was large enough and appeared in their sight, it was prey. Out of 70-plus hunts, over 60 were successful, a success rate of over 90%. Such terrifying performance made life miserable for savanna creatures. Gradually, a few highly intelligent species began to react. When they saw these upright walking horrors from afar, they would immediately start running. But more creatures still lacked this awareness. 3 months was simply too short. Many creatures died before they could even realize. The rules had changed, but prey adapting to flee on a large scale wasn't happening yet. The Ardipithecus were currently facing a happy problem. They had so much food they couldn't finish it all. Whenever they went hunting, they would bring something back. In the past, the savanna was full of dangers to them. Even just finding some fruit along the way would cost the lives of several Ardipithecus. Now, walking across the savanna boldly was no problem. No creature could beat them under the scorching sun. Not the saber-toothed tigers, nor the giant hyenas. The Ardipithecus slowly realized they were too strong. Having dozens travel together was a waste of combat power. In a single hunt, most Ardipithecus wouldn't even get to act. Before the prey was killed by the companions in front, some would just follow for a stroll and get a share of the food without doing anything. Moreover, being too concentrated actually slowed down efficiency. 5 Ardipithecus could kill a prey in 5 minutes. 15 could reduce it to 3 or 4 minutes. But any more than that didn't make it faster, as those in the back didn't even have time to move. Gathering in a large group was originally for self-preservation, but now it had become a burden. Consequently, the Ardipithecus slowly learned to act separately. They intentionally controlled the size of the hunting teams, maintaining maximum combat power with the fewest people. Eventually, the large group of dozens split into 3 small groups. They still lived in the same cave, but their hunting directions were different. Not only did this not weaken their combat power, it actually expanded their range of activities even further. Food acquisition became even faster. With an ample food supply guaranteed, the Ardipithecus tribe officially began to grow from this moment on. In a few months, the Ardipithecus almost tore through the ecosystem of this region. Their footprints were all over the savanna, and their range of activities continued to expand. The survival space of other creatures on the savanna was continuously compressed. Even the once dominant scimitar-toothed tigers were seeing their numbers plummet. If this continued, within a few years, they would have to leave this area, either migrate and leave, or stay and be hunted. The Ardipithecus had already conquered this region, and had the potential to move toward a broader world, provided they could survive the upcoming cold winter. A few months after summer began, the temperature dropped significantly. It was a signal that winter was coming. The Ardipithecus hunting operations were considerably affected. The overheating issues for other creatures improved quite a bit. Although their endurance still couldn't match that of the Ardipithecus, they at least had a few more chances to survive. The Ardipithecus hunting success rate also began to decline. In the sky screen, a hunting team of over a dozen Ardipithecus rarely missed, letting an antelope escape. To these Ardipithecus, it was just a common hunting failure. They would soon change their target. But to the foreign viewers outside the sky screen, it was like seeing a glimmer of hope. The Ardipithecus rise was too fast. Ever since the Ardipithecus hypothesis caused a stir, viewers from all countries had been staring at their movements. In these past few months, except for the Dragon Country viewers, no one in other countries could smile. These Ardipithecus were simply the grim reapers of the savanna. They killed wherever they went. They had a bunch of bug-like abilities. Under the scorching sun, they had almost no weaknesses. Prey couldn't outrun them, nor could they outfight them. They could throw spears from far away, being both accurate and high damage. They always worked in groups of over a dozen, traveling with tactics and clear divisions of labor. Being targeted basically meant a certain death. Viewers from various countries had long been filled with despair because of them. Unexpectedly, as the weather turned cold, everyone finally discovered the weakness of the Ardipithecus. They had lost their hair and had no insulation. They had to consume more energy to maintain body temperature, and their mobility also decreased. As one side's strength waxed and the other's waned, the Ardipithecus' advantages were continuously weakened. Recently, the probability of them missing their hunts was getting higher and higher. Foreign viewers were in high spirits. The bullet chats were flying, all hoping that the Ardipithecus wouldn't survive the winter. They felt their end was coming. In the Dragon Country livestream, the viewers, conversely, were full of concern. Other species were all preparing for winter. Carnivores stored fat, herbivores scrambled for tender grass, some animals stored nuts, and cold-blooded animals prepared to hibernate. The Ardipithecus were no exception, but they were too afraid of the cold without hair. At night, they huddled together in the cave for warmth. Smooth skin lost heat too fast. When the cold wind blew, they still shivered. The Ardipithecus leader was too cold to sleep. Staring at the discarded prey skins at the cave entrance, he suddenly realized something. Isn't that thing